The ninth bolt came down, and I remember thinking, very calmly, that it was going to hurt. It did. It hurt the way a mountain hurts a beetle. My robe went first, then my left arm, then the sword I had spent 40 years forging out of a meteorite I dug up with my own hands. The tribulation clouds were 9 miles wide, and every single one of them had my name on it. Below me, 5,000 disciples of the Luoyun sect stood on the observation terraces with their hands folded, watching. Nobody was cheering. A few of them were eating. I could hear them. That is the thing about nascent soul senses. You can hear a man 3 miles away say, 20 spirit stones says the foolish true lord doesn't make it past the 7th. And you can hear the other guy say, you're a fool. He won't make it past the 6th. The 6th had been 40 seconds ago. So at least I made somebody money. That was my nickname, by the way. The blundering sage lord. 300 years I spent in that sect. I patrolled the outer wall when nobody else would. I mapped the beast ravines. I flew 12,000 miles to deliver medicine to a branch hall in a plague year and came back with frostbite in my bones and a thank you note signed by a clerk. Every filthy, thankless, nobody else wants it job in that sect had my handwriting on the requisition form. And the elders looked at all that and said, this one is not clever. This one just works. They meant it as an insult. I let them. The 10th bolt found the crack in my dantian and went in like a key into a lock, and I felt 300 years come apart in about a second and a half. Not dramatic, not slow. There was no white light and no ancestors waiting with open arms and no voice explaining anything. There was a very loud noise, and then there was nothing, and the last thought I had was that I never did find out what happened to the girl. The universe heard that thought. I know it did, because the universe said, fine, let's talk about the girl. I opened my eyes on a bus. Not a beautiful bus, not a bus with any dignity to it at all. An intercity bus between Yuzhou and Xinhong County, the kind with a floor mat made entirely of sunflower seed shells and a driver who considers the lane markings to be a suggestion. Somebody 4 rows up had opened a cup of instant noodles, and the smell of powdered beef seasoning was doing violence to the entire vehicle. There was a plastic-wrapped photograph of a waterfall taped over the windshield. The radio was playing a song about a boy who moves to the city. I looked down at my hands. They were small. They were pink. They had absolutely no calluses on them because they had never held anything heavier than a mechanical pencil, and there was a smudge of blue ink on the side of the right one where the pen had leaked in my pocket, which was a thing that used to happen to me constantly, and which I had not thought about in 3 centuries. I was 16 years old. It was the summer of 2013. And I had, in that moment, exactly 0 spiritual energy, exactly 0 cultivation, and exactly 140 yuan folded into the front pocket of a backpack with a cartoon frog on it. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have checked for a system, a golden finger, a mysterious old man living in a ring. I did none of that because I had spent 300 years learning what to do when the world hands you something absurd, and the answer is, you sit with it for 10 seconds and you do not waste the 10 seconds screaming, so I sat. The bus hit a pothole, the noodle smell got worse, and then without asking my permission, my face did something it had not done since before I could remember. The corners went up, my cheeks moved, there was an actual physical sensation of muscles that had been asleep for 300 years, standing up and stretching. I was smiling. The auntie across the aisle gave me a look like I'd started chewing the seat. Let her look. I had a second life and a cracked plastic window and a smell of beef powder, and somewhere about 40 minutes down this road, there was a woman named Lee who was going to rent me a room, and next to that room, there was a wall, and on the other side of that wall was a 15-year-old girl who in my first life had died of leukemia the year she grew to 1 meter 60. I knew the exact year. I knew the exact month. What I had not known the first time was any of it. Not until 11 years later, when I was 27 and worn out and drinking bad tea in a rented apartment in this same city, and a former classmate mentioned it in passing the way you mention weather. Oh, her? She passed. High school. It was fast. It was fast. I had put down the tea and gone and stood on a balcony for a while, and then I went to work the next morning, because that is what you do. And 11 months later, a truck did to me what the heavens would eventually do again on a much grander scale. And then 300 years and 10 bolts and a bus. So here is what I decided somewhere around the second pothole. I was not going to found a sect. I was not going to conquer anything. I had done ambition at enormous length with excellent work ethic and world-class results, and the reward was a nickname and a betting pool. This time I was going to do something much harder. I was going to make sure one short, loud, unbelievably annoying girl got to be tall. The bus let me off at a stop that was not so much a stop as an agreement between the driver and a telephone pole. It was late afternoon, and the light had gone the color of weak tea, and the Hui River was a long, flat shine off to my left with the dike road running above it, and beyond the dike were wheat fields going green and a row of low brick bungalows with tile roofs and television aerials bent at angles that suggested strong opinions about weather. I walked. I had a backpack, a frog on it, and a piece of paper with an address, and my legs were 16 years old and got tired approximately immediately, which was genuinely humbling. 300 years of body refining, and I was winded by a dike. The bungalow was the fourth from the end. Blue-painted gate, concrete yard, a persimmon tree that had not yet decided whether it was going to bother this year. There was a woman in the yard with a basin of laundry, and when she straightened up, I had to stop walking for a second because I had forgotten what she looked like when her back still worked. "You must be the boy from the phone call," she said. Come in, mind the step is a liar." That was Aunt Lee. Widow. Worked shifts at a packing plant 20 minutes away on an electric bike that made a noise like an argument. 51 years old and looked 40 and moved like 60, which is what happens when you raise a child by yourself in a city that costs more every year. She showed me the room. It was one room. It had a bed frame with no mattress, a desk with a wobble, a window with a crack repaired by tape, and a wall. That wall was the entire reason I was standing there. $200 a month, Aunt Lee said, and then immediately, in the tone of a woman who has already lost the negotiation with herself, $180 if you handle your own coal in winter. I said 200 was fine. She looked at me strangely. In my experience, nobody has ever looked at Aunt Lee strangely for lowering a price, so I suppose the strangeness was on my end. "You're renting alone? At your age?" "My family's in Guyang," I said. "The school's here. It's simpler." That was true. It was also about 4% of the reason. "Your parents let you?" "My parents," I said, "have a lot of confidence in me." They had, in fact, mostly given up on me, which is a form of confidence. In my first life, I had been a quiet, unremarkable, faintly disappointing boy who got quiet, unremarkable, faintly disappointing grades, and my father had taken to introducing me to relatives with the phrase, "This is my son, he's very steady." Nobody has ever meant that as a compliment in the history of my country. Aunt Lee made a small, unhappy sound and went to get me a mattress, and that was when the door of the next house banged open like it had personally been offended, and a voice said, "Mom, who is that?" Not a question. There was no question mark anywhere in the vicinity. I turned around. She was very small. That was the first thing. She came up to about the middle of my chest and had a face like a steamed bun and hair pulled up into a bun on top of that. So the overall silhouette was a bun on a bun, and she was standing in the gap between the 2 yards with her arms folded and her chin up at an angle that suggested she was inspecting a colony she had recently annexed. 148 centimeters. I knew that number the way you know your own address. "He's renting the side room," Aunt Lee said from inside. "Say hello, Mei Mei." I said hello with my eyes, Chen Meiling said. She looked me up and down. She took her time about it. Then she delivered her verdict. "You're too tall." "Sorry." "Don't apologize, fix it." And then she went back inside and slammed the door, and I stood in a concrete yard in 2013 with a frog backpack on my shoulder, and something in my chest that had been clenched shut for 300 years came loose so fast it hurt. She was alive. She was rude. She was going to be a problem. Perfect. Here is the part where I should explain about the cheat, and I am going to do it fast, because the honest version is embarrassing. I did not get a system. Nobody handed me a golden finger. What I got was a memory, which is the least glamorous superpower in the world, and also the only one that has ever mattered. 300 years of cultivation techniques were still sitting in my head, in perfect order, cataloged and cross-referenced, because that is what happens when you are the sect's most obsessive filing clerk. I knew 400 and some formations. I knew how to refine 90 kinds of pill. I knew a body tempering method called the 9 Heavens Divine Lightning Tempering that required a practitioner to stand inside a thunderstorm at altitude and let the heavens hit him repeatedly, which in the immortal realm was considered a reasonable Tuesday. The problem was that this world has no spiritual energy. None. Zero. I stood in that yard on my first night and reached out with everything I had, and it was like putting your hand into an empty cupboard. The air here is dead. Whatever tide used to run through this place went out a very long time ago and did not leave a note. So no flying, no swordlight, no 1,000-mile divine sense. I was a man with the complete blueprints for a nuclear reactor standing in a field with no uranium in it. And if you think that sounds like a great start to a story, I invite you to spend a night in an unheated brick room in Hue Province thinking it over, which is when I looked out the window at the electricity substation 200 meters down the dike road, sitting there in the dark with its little warning sign of a man being struck by a lightning bolt, and I started laughing so hard I had to sit down on the floor. Lightning is lightning. The heavens did not specify a brand. None of it was reckless. I did it in the correct order, which is the whole reason I am alive twice. I spent 9 nights building the containment array out of chalk and copper wire and a bag of iron filings I bought at a hardware store for 11 yuan, and I tested it on a frog, and the frog was fine and slightly annoyed. And on the 10th night, I sat down in the middle of it with my back against the transformer housing and let the grid of Yuzhou City run through my 16-year-old bones. I would love to tell you it was transcendent. It was not. It was like being chewed. My teeth rang. My eyes went white. Every muscle in my body clenched at once and stayed clenched for 11 seconds, and when it stopped, I lay on my back in the weeds and looked up at the actual sky and thought with tremendous clarity that I had made a career out of choices exactly this stupid and that this was probably why the elders never promoted me. Then I sat up, and I felt it. One thread, one single thread of something moving in my meridians that had not been there before, thin as a hair, warm as a swallowed match. The 9 heavens divine lightning tempering, night 1 of an eventual 211. I went home and slept for 4 hours and got up and made breakfast because I had a wall to be on the other side of. Now the exploit question, since I can hear you asking it, and it is a fair one. If I know 400 formations and 90 pills, why not just fix everything on day 1? Why not brew the cure for a girl's leukemia on Thursday and be done? Because the medicine does not exist yet. Not the pill, the plants. Every recipe I have needs spirit herbs, and spirit herbs need spiritual energy, and there is none, so the plants have to be grown, and growing them means first building a formation big enough to pull whatever thin tide is left in 100 kilometers of Anhui countryside and concentrate it into one small patch of dirt, and that formation needs materials, and the materials cost money in amounts I cannot describe without sounding hysterical. Grass takes the time grass takes. You cannot yell a seed into a tree. I have tried. In the immortal realm, I once tried it on a spirit bamboo for 6 days straight, and all I got was a hoarse throat and a bamboo that has, I assume, been telling that story ever since. So the order was money, then land, then formation, then dirt, then plants, then pill, then her. And the clock on that was her spine, 1 meter 48, going on 1 meter 60. I had by my count about 3 years. Money first then. This part I am not proud of, but I am also not going to lie to you about it. 3 days after I moved in, at 2 in the morning, I went out to the corner of Aunt Lee's yard where the persimmon tree stands, and I dug. I knew it was there because in my first life, the county widened the dike road in 2019, and the excavator came through and turned up a sealed jar, and it made the local paper for about a day and a half, and by then Aunt Lee had already sold the house and moved and did not get a single fen of it. Republic-era silver and a fair amount of gold, buried by somebody who clearly expected to come back and clearly did not. I dug it up at 2 in the morning with a garden trowel and my hands, and I sat in the dirt with the jar in my lap and thought about it for a long time. Here is what I decided. I was not going to steal from a woman who charged me 200 yuan and then immediately tried to talk herself down to 180. So I took the gold and left the silver, and I put the silver back in the ground exactly where the excavator was going to find it in 6 years. And I wrote a note in the sect's oldest script explaining nothing to nobody and put that in too, purely because I am, at the core, a bureaucrat. And then over the following 2 months, I sold the gold in 5 different cities to 7 different dealers under a face that was, thanks to a very minor illusion technique, extremely forgettable. 410,000 yuan. That was my entire seed capital. That was the whole beginning of everything you are about to hear about. Not a system, not a dragon, not an old man in a ring, a jar, a trowel, and a decision not to rob a widow. The first 2 weeks of school I said almost nothing. That was not a strategy. That was just me. In my first life, I sat in class 8 of Yuzhou No. 4 middle school for 3 years, and I could not, at 27, have named you 15 of my classmates. I had been furniture, good furniture, furniture that did its homework. This time, I sat down at the desk they assigned me, which was in the 3rd row on the south side, and my new desk mate turned out to be a boy called Lin Haoran, who had already, before the first bell, established the following facts about himself. He had a phone, he had a game on it, and he considered the entire concept of school to be a scheduling conflict. "You play?" he said without looking up. "Not really." "Right." He nodded like I'd confirmed a diagnosis. He tore a stick of gum in half and put half on my desk without being asked, which I would eventually learn was the highest honor Lin Horan gave out. "You're the quiet type, that's fine. Quiet types are good. Don't sit near Wang Min." "Which one is Wang Min?" Lin Haran inclined his head half a degree toward the front middle of the room, in the manner of a man indicating an unexploded shell. There was a girl there. She was applying lipstick with the concentration of a woman diffusing something, and she took up a desk and a half, and the boy beside her, who had a basketball in his lap in a classroom, was pressed against the wall with the flattened posture of livestock in a small truck. "That's Zhao Wenlong," Lin Haran said. "He used to be the terror of Class 10, now he lives there." Zhao Wenlong caught us looking and gave a small dignified nod, the nod of a hostage who wants you to know he is being treated well, and behind me, one row back and slightly to the left, was Chen Meiling. She had also been assigned there. I had not arranged it. She has accused me of arranging it roughly 200 times since, and the truth is that head teacher Zhou Jianhong put the shortest student in the class near the front and the second shortest behind her, and the universe did the rest. She spent the first 3 days pretending not to know me in public, which she performed by staring straight ahead with tremendous intensity and then hissing Li Wei at the back of my head whenever she needed something. On day 4, she gave up the pretense entirely and started sending me out for food. Li Wei. You're going out at lunch. Am I? Yes. And you're bringing back a roux giamo, and if the meat is fatty, don't buy it. And a white fungus soup. She put a 10 and a 5 on my desk with the crisp finality of a general signing an order. And an extra yuan for you. That's your errand fee. Don't say I don't take care of you. I looked at the money. I looked at her. You're paying me 1 yuan. That's a lot for a first year. She was already turning back to her book. Don't get greedy, it's unattractive. That is the arrangement I entered into on the 4th day of high school and never got out of. She calls me her driver. In her mind, I am somewhere between a subordinate, a household appliance, and a large dog with a bicycle. The interesting thing about the first 2 weeks was watching her grades, because in my first life, Chen Meiling had been an ordinary student, solid, unremarkable. She scraped into number 4 middle school with a math score that made her mother cry in the corridor. And I remembered, sitting in that classroom in 2013 with the ceiling fan clicking, that she had told me once, years ago, in one of the 4 or 5 real conversations we ever had, that she had gone into the high school entrance exam and handed in a blank math paper, not a bad paper, blank, not 1 mark. I never asked why. I was 17 and stupid, and I thought it was funny. So on the second Friday of the term, when the back row was arguing about who was better looking and Lin Horan was losing a ranked match, I turned around in my seat and asked her. She was eating a strawberry. She stopped. Who told you that? She said. You did. I did not. You will. She looked at me for a long moment with a strawberry halfway to her mouth, and I would have told you that a 15-year-old girl cannot make you feel investigated. A 15-year-old girl can absolutely make you feel investigated. Then she shrugged and ate the strawberry and told me there had been a math teacher in her junior high. He had a private tutoring business on the side, the way many of them do, and he ran it on a simple business model. If you paid for the weekend classes, your test papers came back with generous marking and your seat moved forward, and if you did not pay, they did not. Chen Meiling's family did not pay. Chen Meiling's family could not pay. And so for 2 years, in a class of 54, she sat in the very last row against the back wall where the projector cable came down, and every paper she ever handed in came back scraped as close to failure as he could get it without it becoming a thing. She never told her mother, not once, in 2 years, because her mother would have found the money. So on the exam, she said, I filled in every other subject and I sat in front of the math paper for 2 hours and I didn't write anything. Not my name. Nothing. Why? Because he brags about his students' scores, she said. Every year he puts them on a red banner outside the tutoring center. I was on his list, so I made him a 0 and I put it right in the middle of his banner. She said it flatly, without heat, the way you report the weather. Then she pointed at me with the strawberry stem. And I still got into this school because I destroyed everything else. So don't feel sorry for me. I don't like it. I said I did not feel sorry for her. That was true. What I felt was something considerably less comfortable, which was the specific sensation of realizing that the girl you have come back 300 years to save has been quietly running a scorched earth campaign since she was 13, entirely alone, and never mentioned it to anybody, and would probably have taken it to the grave, which, in the version of events I was here to prevent, she did. Then don't do it again, I said. Do what? Take the loss to spite someone. It costs you more than it costs them, every time. She opened her mouth to argue. I watched her think about it. It took about 4 seconds and I could see the exact moment it landed because her face did a very small, unhappy thing, and then she covered it by looking annoyed. Fine, she said. Then I'll just be better than everyone at everything instead. That's harder. I'm aware, said Chen Meiling, that I'm impressive. The first monthly exam was 3 weeks later. She came first in the city, not first in the school. Not first in the district, first in Yuzhou City, 41 points clear of the boy in second, who was in the Peking Tsinghua track class at number 2 middle school, and who, I am told, had to be talked down off the roof of a mock exam. Number 4, middle school had not produced a city first in 19 years. The principal came to class 8 personally to look at her, the way you go and look at a rare bird. Chen Meiling accepted this with the graciousness you would expect. Li Wei, she said that evening, on the back of my bicycle, on the dike road, with the sun going down over the wheat. Do you understand now what kind of existence I am? You came second in Chinese. That teacher hates me. He gave you 98. Out of 150, she said, with the bitterness of a woman betrayed by an institution. Pedal faster, I'm hungry. I pedaled faster. Behind us, the streetlights on the dike came on one after another all the way back to the city, and I remember thinking that I had a girl on my bicycle who was first in the city and 1 meter 49, and that I had 206 nights of standing in transformer yards to go, and 410,000 yuan, and about 3 years. It was, all things considered, a good start. Then, Shu Tao broke her cup. I should describe Shu Tao because he is the first one, and in a way he set the price for everybody after him. Shu Tao sat in the middle of the room. His father ran a construction supply business and had put a good deal of money into a good many pockets, and Shu Tao had absorbed from this the general principle that the world was a soft thing and he was a thumb. He was not a bully in the loud way. He was a bully in the paperwork way. He got other people to move his desk. He took the last hot water so casually that people apologized to him for having wanted it. The cup was a thermos flask, pink, with a chipped rim and a cartoon rabbit worn half off. It was 10 years old. Aunt Lee had bought it for her daughter in the 2nd grade at a market stall for 11 yuan, and it had been to every school Chen Meiling had ever attended. He knocked it off the water dispenser table with his elbow. It was probably an accident. That part I will grant him. What was not an accident was the next 11 seconds, in which the flask lay in 3 pieces on the concrete floor, and Chen Meiling stood there looking at it, and Shu Tao glanced down and made a small amused noise through his nose and said, "Buy a new one. It's a cup," and stepped over it. Now, I want you to understand that I have watched cities burn. I have stood on a wall while a demon cultivator ate a garrison. I have, in the general course of 300 years, developed what I would describe as an extremely high floor for outrage. But there is a specific sound a 15-year-old girl makes when she decides not to cry in front of 50 people, and it is a very small sound, and it turns out that 3 centuries of composure do not cover it. I got up. The classroom noticed, because I had not gotten up for anything in 3 weeks. Lin Haran put his phone down, which for Lin Haran is equivalent to standing on a chair. I walked over and picked up the 3 pieces of the flask and set them on her desk, in order, and then I walked to Shu Tao's seat. "Pick it up," I said. He looked at me the way you look at a vending machine that has spoken. "Who are you?" "3rd row, south side. Pick it up and say sorry." "It's a cup," said Shu Tao. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I could put my palm through his chest. I did not, obviously, have that option available. I had a 16-year-old body 11 nights into a 200-night tempering, which is to say I was slightly stronger than a healthy 16-year-old and considerably better organized about it. But 300 years of combat instinct do not care what body they are in. 300 years of combat instinct look at a soft rich boy in a chair and do the math instantly and come back with a number so low it is insulting. So I hit him exactly as hard as a 16-year-old can hit somebody. Which, it turns out, when the 16-year-old in question knows the precise angle at which a human knee stops being a hinge and becomes a suggestion, is quite hard enough. He went over the desk, not far, about a meter. He took a stack of textbooks and a pencil case with him, and he landed on his back in the aisle with his legs still tangled in the chair, and the noise he made was not a scream, it was the other one, the flat surprised one people make when their body has just informed them of something. The classroom went completely silent. I crouched down next to him. "You'll be on crutches for 2 months. I said quietly, so it stayed between us. "The doctor is going to tell you that you fell down the stairwell by the 3rd floor toilets, because that's what you're going to tell him. If you say anything else, we'll have this conversation again, and I'll be less patient, because the second time is always less interesting than the first." He looked up at me, and something in his face changed in a way I had seen before on much older and much worse men, which is the specific moment a person discovers that the rules he has relied on his whole life are local rules. "Okay," he said. I stood up and went back to my seat. Behind me, in a silence you could have poured, Zhang Daming said, in a voice of pure reverence, Brother Lin, did you see that?" I saw it. He kicked him over a desk. "I have eyes, Daming. But did you see it?" 2 days later, Chen Meiling found a new thermos flask in her desk drawer. Pink, same rabbit. Slightly better rabbit, actually, because it turns out that if you take a photograph of a chipped 10-year-old cup to a shop in the city and stand there long enough, they will find you the same model. She did not thank me. She turned it over twice looking for the price sticker, failed to find it because I am not an idiot, narrowed her eyes at me for a full 5 seconds, and then said, "It's acceptable. High praise. Don't get used to it." She filled it at the dispenser, took a drink, and then, in the tone of a woman granting a title, added, "You may continue to be my desk mate." Shu Tao was out for 4 months in the end. Broken leg, then a complication, then a long convalescence at home with a tutor. He came back in the spring, thinner and much quieter, and made top 10 in the class, and never once looked at Chen Meiling again. That was the first one. It felt good. I am not going to pretend otherwise. It also taught me the lesson that shaped the rest of that year, which is this. I had come back with 300 years of technique, and the only thing anybody in this world was ever going to notice was that the quiet boy in the third row hit people over desks. Fine. Let that be the story. Let that be the whole story as far as Yuzhou was concerned. The real work happened at night. Because here is the thing about 410,000 yuan in 2013. It sounds like a great deal of money, and it is not remotely enough. The formation I needed, a spirit-gathering grand array covering an entire mountain, required, at absolute minimum, 37 categories of material, of which about 9 had modern industrial equivalents, and about 28 did not, and the ones that did not had to be found, and finding things costs money, and I could not exactly walk into a mineral wholesaler as a 16-year-old and start asking about high-purity natural cinnabar in 11-kilogram lots. I needed a face, an adult one, preferably one with a company attached to it. Which is how I ended up, on a Sunday in October, standing outside a pawn shop on Renmin East Road with a bad sign and a good location, watching a woman argue with a man about a wristwatch. The man was trying to pawn a fake. He was doing it aggressively, in the way of a person who has already decided that anger is going to substitute for the watch being real, and he was leaning over the counter to do it. The woman behind the counter was about 27. She had her hair pulled back so tightly it looked like a decision, and she had circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep was going to fix because they were not that kind of circles, and she was holding a loop in one hand and not backing up 1 centimeter. The movement is stamped, she said. The stamp is wrong. It's wrong in a way that is very well known. Take it to Wu on Jifeng Road. He'll give you 800 and both of you can pretend. Do you know who my brother-in-law is? No, said the woman, and neither, I suspect, does your sister. He called her a word. She wrote something in a ledger. He left. She stood there for a second afterward with her hand flat on the counter, and she let out a breath, and for about 1 second before the door swung shut, I saw the whole thing. 3 generations of a pawn shop, a father who died, a business the size of a broom closet in a city with no money in it, and a woman who was extremely good at a job that was never going to be big enough for her, Yang Li. In my first life, I never met her. In my first life, she ran that shop until it closed in 2018, and then she went to work in the administration office of a hospital in Nanjing, and that was that, and there is nothing wrong with any of it. I walked in and put a jade pendant on the counter. She picked it up without looking at me and turned it under the loop and went absolutely still. Where did you get this? I made it. You made it. 2 nights ago. She set the loop down. Now she did look at me. 16 years old, school uniform, backpack. This is Hetian white, she said carefully. And it has been carved from the inside in a spiral that does not touch the surface. That is not a technique. There's no tool that does that. There is no laser that does that. And if there were, the tool marks would be visible. And there are no tool marks. There is no entry point. I know. So where did you get it? I told you, I said. Ask me a better question. She stared at me for what I have since learned was 11 seconds, because Yang Li counts things when she is upset. Then she asked me a better question. What do you want? Which is, in the end, the whole reason I picked her out of a city of 2 million people, because a smaller person would have asked how much it was worth, and a stupider person would have asked what I was, and Yang Li, in 11 seconds, went straight past both of those to the only question that was going anywhere. I told her I wanted a company. I told her I would provide the product, and she would provide the face, the name, the legal signature, and every single decision below the level of what we made and where it went. I told her I did not want to be mentioned, photographed, listed, or explained. I told her I would pay her nothing at all up front, and that within 18 months she would be the richest woman in Yuzhou. She laughed at me. Genuinely. First real laugh out of her, and it was a good one. Then I put the second thing on the counter, which was a small unlabeled bottle, and I told her what it was, and I told her to try it on the back of her hand, and I left. She called me 9 days later. I know it was 9 days because that is how long it takes for a mark to fade off the back of a hand when it has been there since a childhood accident with a kettle in 1994. What is it? She said on the phone, at 11 at night, in a voice that was not steady. It's a hair growth tonic, I said. That was the byproduct. I'm calling that one evergreen. There was a long silence on the line. The byproduct, she said. Miss Xiao, I said, how quickly can you register a company? 6 days. That is how long it took her, and 4 of those days were a public holiday. Chongqing Liquid Company, registered capital of 100,000 yuan, of which 410,000 was mine and had to be laundered through a family loan agreement she drafted herself in an afternoon, on the basis that a boy cannot own a company, and a boy's money can absolutely become an aunt's money if the aunt is fictional and the paperwork is beautiful. The product was hair tonic. Everybody's first assumption is that I was being clever. I was not. I was being cheap. The medicine I actually need, the pills, the marrow, the things that go into a girl's blood, requires spirit herbs. But the plants that are the base for those spirit herbs, before you charge them with anything at all, are just plants. Ordinary, findable, buyable plants. Polygonum, angelica, ligustrum, 20-odd others, and the specific combination that forms the foundation layer of a cloud marrow decoction. If you brew it wrong on purpose, if you deliberately fail to complete the transformation and stop at the third stage, produces a thin amber liquid with no cultivation value whatsoever that happens, as an accident, to be the single most effective thing for human hair follicles that has ever existed on this planet. That is what Evergreen was. It was my failed step 3. It was the water I was going to pour out. By March, it was doing 200 million yuan a month. I am aware of how that sounds. I was there and it sounded insane to me too. Yang Li called me one night in February and did not say hello, she just said a number and then said, say something, and I said, are you sleeping? And she said, no, and I said, I'll send you something for that, and she hung up on me. It went the way those things go in this country when the product is real. First, it was a county. Then, it was the province. Then a factory in Guangdong tried to reverse engineer it and produce something that turned 400 people's scalps orange, which was, from a marketing standpoint, the greatest gift we ever received. And here's the part that mattered to me. By March, Chongqing Liquid Company had a purchasing department, and a purchasing department can buy anything, and nobody in the world asks a hair tonic company why it wants 11 kilograms of high-purity natural cinnabar, material 1 of 37, acquired. Meanwhile, in the real world, Lin Haran was ruining my life at a rate of about 4 incidents per week. I like Lin Haran. He is one of about 6 people from that year I would still cross a city to see. But he had, by the middle of the first term, established himself as the class's load-bearing wall, and every single crisis in Class 8 eventually arrived at his desk, and he sat in the back row with a phone under a stack of books and solved them, and it was the single most impressive display of applied intelligence I saw that year, and none of it was ever, at any point, applied to schoolwork. Lin Haran came last in the class, every time, not near last. Last. Zhang Daming was his second, and I mean that in the professional sense. Zhang Daming was a large, soft, cheerful boy who took notes on everything, remembered everything, gave away tissues and small favors constantly, and was building, I am convinced of this, and he has never denied it, a comprehensive social ledger of Class 8 in a notebook he kept in his desk. Gao Yang was the one who talked. Liu Jian was the one who got hurt. Sun Lei was the one with opinions nobody asked for. Chen Bo was the one who was going to end up in the river, which he did, in April, at length, in front of the entire first year. And He Fan had 10 centimeters of hair standing straight up off his head at all times, in defiance of physics and several teachers. Those 6 sat in the back 4 seats in the aisle around them, and they treated the classroom the way a war correspondent treats a boarder. The first time I really understood what I was dealing with was in November, when a girl from Class 9 came to our door with her sworn older brother and 8 of his friends. That was Huang Hua. She had a butterfly tattooed on her neck at 15 and a habit of solving problems by importing them, and Gao Yang had spent 2 weeks obtaining her QQ number by methods he has never fully described and I have never fully wanted to know. So she brought Xiaocheng. Xiaocheng was 17 and had been held back twice, and he came into Class 8 through the back door with 8 boys behind him and stood in the middle of the aisle and said, "Which one is Gao Yang?" And the entire back row, in unison, without a word passing between them, pointed at Gao Yang. "Brothers," said Gao Yang. "Sorry, Yang," said Liu Jian. "We'll visit you," said Sun Lei. In fairness to Gao Yang, he did not run. He stood up. He was a foot shorter than Xiaocheng, and he stood up, and he said something along the lines of, "Let's take this outside," and Xiaocheng laughed and grabbed the front of his shirt, and then I was there. The thing about 8 people is that it sounds like a lot, and it is not, because 8 people cannot all reach you at once. 8 people in a classroom aisle is a queue. I broke Xiaocheng's grip first, because the grip was the only thing actually happening, and I did it in a way that turned his wrist over and put him face down across a desk with his own arm as the lever, and while he was still working out what had occurred, I stepped past him into the queue. It took about 9 seconds. Nobody was seriously hurt. I was extremely careful about that, and being careful is significantly harder than not being careful. 2 dislocated shoulders that I put back in myself before they had finished falling. 1 boy who sat down suddenly and stayed sat down. The rest of them discovered the exit, and Xiaocheng, still face down on the desk, said, into the wood, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I let him up. I told him that Class 8 was not somewhere he came anymore. He agreed enthusiastically. He has, to my knowledge, kept his word to this day. The room was silent again. It was becoming a habit. Then, from the back, Zhang Daming said, 9 seconds. "You timed it?" said Gao Yang. "I always time it." And Huang Hua, standing in the doorway with her hands over her mouth, looking at me with an expression I would not correctly identify for another 6 months, backed out into the corridor and did not come back to our floor until spring. Chen Meiling, throughout the entire event, had not looked up from her book. When it was over, she turned a page and said, without inflection, "You're blocking the light." Here is what I want you to understand about that autumn, because from the outside it looks like a boy hitting people, and from the inside it was arithmetic. Every night after evening self-study, I rode her home along the dike. 22 minutes, with her sitting sideways on the back rack and holding the hem of my jacket in 2 fingers, complaining about the wind, the teachers, the food, the wind again, and the general unfairness of a world that had made her 1 meter 49. Then she went in, and I went in, and I sat on the floor of a brick room and lit an incense I had blended myself out of 11 things you can buy in any Chinese pharmacy, plus 1 you cannot. And I cultivated divine sense until 2 or 3 in the morning. Divine sense was the one thing that worked here. Body refining needed lightning, and I had that. Spiritual energy needed spirit herbs, and I did not have those yet. But divine sense is grown out of the mind, and the mind I brought with me, and it did not care that the air was dead. Night 1, I could feel to the wall. Night 30, I could feel to the road. Night 90, I could sit in that room with my eyes shut and know that Aunt Lee had come off shift and was walking her electric bike up the last stretch because the battery had gone again, and that Chen Meiling had fallen asleep with her light on and her phone on her chest and her book on the floor, and that there was a stray dog at the corner of the wheat field who had been coming closer every night for a week and was going to be a problem. Night 140, I could stand in the schoolyard at number 4 middle school and hold the entire teaching building in my head at once, all 3 floors, every room, every desk, the way you hold a cord. That is not a superpower in the way people mean it. It does not let you fly, and it does not let you punch through a wall. What it lets you do is know things, all the things. Continuously, effortlessly, without ever having to look. And what I mostly used it for the entire first year, was to know where she was. I did not tell anybody that. I am telling you. In November, her mother's arm got broken. I need to slow down here, because this is the one where I nearly got it wrong. Aunt Lee came off the late shift on a Thursday and was walking her bike across the small square behind the packing plant, and a woman in a black hatchback came through the square at a speed the square was not designed for and clipped the rear wheel, and Aunt Lee went down on concrete with the bike on top of her. Compound fracture, left forearm, 6 weeks in a cast, and considerably longer than that before she could lift a crate again, which mattered, because lifting crates was the job. The woman in the hatchback got out, looked at a 51-year-old woman on the ground with her arm bent the wrong way, said, "You shouldn't have been in the middle," got back in the car, and drove away. There was no camera in the square. There was, at that time, no camera anywhere in that part of Yuzhou. Aunt Lee did not get the plate. Aunt Lee, lying on the ground, had been busy. I found out at 11 at night when Chen Meiling knocked on my door and did not say anything at all, which frightened me more than anything else that happened that year. Here is what I did, and this is the part I am not proud of. I got the plate in about 40 minutes because a black hatchback that came through that square at that hour also went past the toll gate on the ring road 11 minutes later, and a toll gate has a camera, and a toll gate has a booth attendant who is extremely willing to look at a screen for a boy who had bought him a hot drink and a pack of cigarettes. Then I went to the address. It was a residential compound on the north side. Decent, nothing spectacular. She was maybe 26. She was in the courtyard in a bathrobe having an argument with another woman about a parking space, and I stood at the gate and listened to her, and I listened to the exact way she talked to a person who had done nothing to her, and I felt 300 years of very cold and very quiet training slide into place behind my eyes. I was going to break her arm, not metaphorically. I had chosen the arm, and I had chosen the angle, and I had chosen the alley she was going to be in on Sunday, and I stood at that gate for about 90 seconds, absolutely committed to it. And then a girl came out of the stairwell behind her carrying a bag of oranges. 15 maybe. Same face, 10 years younger. Sister. And she said, "Sis, come on, Mom's calling." And the woman in the bathrobe rolled her eyes and said something rude to the neighbor and went inside with her hand on the girl's shoulder, and the door closed. I stood there in the dark. In the immortal realm, I killed a man in the Blackwater Falls for less than what that woman did. I did it in about 4 seconds, and I had noodles afterward. That is not a boast, that is a diagnosis. 300 years in a place where the correct response to insult is annihilation had built something in me, and it had come back with me in a 16-year-old body, and it had just spent 90 seconds at a gate calmly planning to cripple a woman because I could. I went home. The next morning, I called Yang Li, and I gave her the plate number and the address, and I told her to find out everything. And by Tuesday, I had a folder: the woman's name, her employer, the fact that the hatchback was a company car, the fact that the company had a compliance department, and the fact that she had 2 prior incidents, one of which involved a parked motorcycle and a settlement. And on Wednesday, Chongqing Liquid Company, which at that point was still small enough to fit in a photocopy room, sent a very polite letter. She paid 11,000 yuan in compensation. She lost the car. She lost the job. She wrote, and this is my favorite part, a handwritten apology because our letter had specified handwritten, and Yang Li had added that detail herself without being asked, which is when I understood that I had hired correctly. Aunt Li cried when the money came. Not about the money, about the letter. She read it 4 times and then folded it and put it in the drawer with her marriage certificate and her husband's hospital discharge papers, which is a drawer I have thought about a great deal since. And I went out to the dike that night and sat on the concrete slope and looked at the water and made myself a rule. The rule was, I do not touch anyone who has not touched mine first, and when I do touch them, it stops when it stops. I have broken that rule exactly twice since. Both times I will tell you about. The second one is a man with a billiard cue, and I would break it again. By February, I had 11 of 37 materials, a hair tonic company doing 200 million a month, a body 11% of the way through a lightning tempering, a divine sense that reached 400 meters, and a deskmate who was 1 meter 51 and had recently begun to describe herself, without irony, in the third person, and I had a mountain picked out. Tiger Perch Mountain sits 11 kilometers northwest of Yuzhou, and it is not a real mountain. It is 400 meters of scrub and pine with a lake next to it that the county has been meaning to develop since 1997. Nobody wants it. There is nothing under it. It has, from the perspective of every human being in Anhui province, no value at all. What it has is a shape. The ridge runs northeast to southwest, and the lake sits at the foot of it, and the whole thing lies in the crook of 2 river valleys, and if you know how to look at land the way I was taught to look at land, it is a bowl. It is a bowl with a lid on it. Whatever thin, exhausted, 100,000-year-old tide is still moving through the ground of this dead world drains through that bowl and out again, and if you put a spirit-gathering grand array across it, it stops draining out. I stood on that ridge on a Saturday in February with frost in the grass, and I ran the numbers in my head, and I got a figure I did not believe, and I ran them again, and I got the same figure. 18 months to first harvest, 26 months to a viable cloud marrow base, 31 to a finished pill. She would be 1 meter 58 at 31 months. It was going to be close. It was going to be so close that I would spend the next 2.5 years measuring a girl's spine against a piece of dirt. I went back down the mountain and got on the bus and sat with my forehead against the window, and I remember that a man across the aisle was eating sunflower seeds and putting the shells in his coat pocket one at a time, and I watched him do it for 11 kilometers. And that evening, when I got back, Chen Meiling was sitting on a stool outside my door in the cold with a blanket over her legs, and she said, "Where were you?" "Out. You're always out." She said it like an accusation, which it was. "It's Saturday. You promised me Saturday." I had promised her Saturday, and I had spent it on a hill. "I did," I said. "I'm sorry." She had clearly been prepared for a fight and had not been prepared for that, and she sat there with her mouth slightly open and the argument dying in her hands, and then she said, in an entirely different voice, "It's cold out here, you know. I waited a really long time." "I know. I could have gone inside." "Why didn't you?" "Because then you wouldn't have known I was waiting," said Chen Meiling with perfect 15-year-old logic, and stood up and took the blanket and went home. I stood in that yard for a while. Then I went in and got the good pan and made her a bowl of hand-pulled noodles with beef and knocked on her door, and she opened it and looked at the bowl and said, "Hump," and took it. And half an hour later, I heard her yelling through the wall that the noodles were undersalted, which is the closest thing to a thank you I received that entire winter. 31 months. I could do 31 months. Winter in Yuzhou goes to -7 and stays there like it is being paid to. The bungalow had a coal stove and one thin wall, and I spent about 4 days trying to solve the heating problem the honest way before I gave up and did it the other way. I laid a warming array under the floorboards of her room. It took a night and a half and 11 yuan of copper wire, and I did it while she was at school, and I put the anchor stone under a loose board by the door, and I never told her. She noticed within a week. "Li Wei. My room is warm." "Good. My room is warmer than the kitchen." She said this like she was reading out a charge. "The kitchen has the stove in it. My room has nothing in it." "Explain." "Southern exposure. My room faces north." I want you to know that I did not have an answer ready, and that this is the exact moment I learned that the girl was smarter than my improvisation, and that for the next 3 years I would have to plan my lies the way I planned formations. "Insulation," I said. She stared at me for a long time. "You did something." "I insulated it." "With what?" "Materials." Chen Meiling narrowed her eyes to 2 lines, and then, and this is the part that still gets me, she decided to let me have it. She turned around and walked back into her warm room and closed the door, and through the door she said, at volume, "When you get older and you can't walk, I'll insulate you back." That is the only thank you I received for that array. I have thought about it more than I have thought about most things. Our routine that winter went like this. 6:40, I made breakfast. She had opinions about breakfast that she delivered from bed, through the wall, in the manner of a general dictating to a runner, dead dough pancakes on the electric griddle, shrimp paste batter, egg tea with 3 drops of sesame oil, and if it was 2 drops she could tell, and she would say so. 7:15, I carried her out. Carried, not walked. She refused to put her feet on a cold floor between the bed and the door, and had established, by a process of gradual escalation that I never once agreed to, that this problem was mine. So I would come in, and she would raise both arms without opening her eyes, and I would put her on my back and carry her 15 feet to a chair, and she would eat with her eyes still shut. 7:50, mountain bike. Her on the rack, sideways, holding my jacket hem. 22 minutes. Then 8 hours of school, and then the ride back, and then whatever she wanted, which was usually a game console and my sofa and someone to complain to about a level. And then, from about 11 at night to about 3 in the morning I worked. That is the whole shape of that year. People ask me how I did what I did in that time, and the answer is boring, and it is this. I did not sleep very much, and I never once wasted an hour. 300 years teaches you that hours are the only currency, and everything else is a lie about hours. The chemistry teacher arrived in the 2nd week of December. Feng Jia was 22. She had graduated in June, passed the provincial teaching exam in August, and been assigned to a city where she knew exactly one person, which is a thing that happens to a great many young teachers in this country and which nobody ever talks about properly. She was extremely good at her job and completely terrified, and she covered the terror by being funny, which meant that Class 8 adored her within 4 days. Her signature move was this. She would write an extremely hard problem on the board, look at us, and say, "Now I'm going to pick someone to come up and solve this." 54 heads would go down at once like a field of wheat in wind. "Don't be nervous," Feng Jia would say. "That person is me." And then she would solve it herself, and Class 8 would sit there feeling like they had been mugged by a nice person. I got made chemistry class representative in week 3, which meant carrying papers to the office, which meant that Feng Jia started talking to me, not about chemistry. Feng Jia had exactly nobody in Yuzhou to talk to, and it turns out that a 16-year-old who listens without interrupting and does not have any stake in the staff room politics is an enormously attractive conversational option when you are 22 and lonely. So I heard about the relative, her mother's cousin's husband, her one connection in the city, a decent man with a decent heart who had decided that his contribution to Feng Jia's welfare was going to be finding her a husband before the end of the calendar year. The first one was Tan Kai. On paper, Tan Kai was excellent, 29, family-owned 3 properties, ran a small chemical plating factory out on the Eastern Industrial Road that he had started himself at 24 and grown to about 40 employees. In practice, Tan Kai was the reason I broke my own rule the first time. They went out 3 times. On the 3rd time, he took her back to the factory to show her the operation, which is what he did with everybody, because he was proud of it and because a factory is an excellent way of establishing that you are a person of substance. And Feng Jia, who had a chemistry degree, stood on the loading dock and looked at the discharge pipe going down into the drainage ditch behind the plant and did what a chemist does, which is smell something and know what it is. She asked him about it. He laughed at her. Then he explained to her, patiently, at length, with the air of a man teaching a child about money, that everybody does it, that the treatment system exists and is switched on when the inspection is scheduled, that the ditch runs to the tributary, and the tributary runs to the river, and the river is very large, and that a woman who is going to be his wife needs to understand how business actually works in this country instead of asking naive questions. Then he said, and Feng Jia repeated this to me word for word in an empty office in December with her hands around a cup of hot water. "Also, you'll stop teaching after we marry. My mother has views about that." She told him no. Politely. Twice, because he did not accept the first one. And that would have been the end of it, and it was the end of it for about 9 days. Then a woman came to number 4 middle school with a fruit knife. I need to explain, because the way I found out about it is the reason I am telling this story at all. I was on the 2nd floor, and it was the long break, and my divine sense at that point reached about 400 meters, and I had it out. Because I always had it out. Because Chen Meiling was in the schoolyard playing badminton with the Chen twins, and I do not enjoy not knowing. And 400 meters is far enough to cover the front gate. So I felt her come through the pedestrian door. I felt what was in her right coat pocket, and I felt, in the way you feel a change in air pressure, the precise texture of the intention she was carrying, which is a thing divine sense gives you that I have never been able to explain to anybody and have stopped trying. She was 28. She had been with Tan Kai for 4 years and had been told for 2 of them that they would marry after the factory expansion, and 9 days earlier she had found out about the matchmaking, and she had arrived at the entirely wrong conclusion about whose fault that was, which is a thing that happens more often than it should. She went up the stairs to the 2nd floor office. Feng Jia was at her desk, marking. I was on the wrong side of the building. I ran. 111 nights into a lightning tempering, my body was maybe twice what a healthy 16-year-old's was, and 180 meters of corridor at a full run in a school full of students at long break is not something you cover invisibly. I went over the second floor railing, which is about a 3.5-meter drop into the flower bed, and back up the outside stair, and I put my shoulder into the office door with about 11 seconds to spare. She had the knife out. She had it out and she was screaming a word, and Feng Jia had stood up and had not moved, because Feng Jia was 22 and nothing in a chemistry degree covers this. I shouted. That is all I did. I put divine sense into my voice, the way you would put weight behind a shove, and I shouted one word from the doorway. The woman dropped the knife. Both hands went to her head. She sat down on the floor of a staff office at number 4 middle school and began to cry in a way I have not been able to forget, because it was not the crying of a person who has been stopped. It was the crying of a person who has been let go of. She never actually looked at me. To this day, I do not think she knows a student was in the room. Feng Jia did. Feng Jia looked at the door and looked at a 16-year-old boy standing in it who had, in some fashion she could not construct, arrived, and who was not out of breath. Li Wei, she said. Sit down, teacher. Li Wei, how did you? Sit down. She sat down. The school handled it the way schools handle things. Police came. The woman went to a hospital rather than a station, which was the correct outcome, and which I made 2 phone calls to encourage. Feng Jia gave a statement. The story that circulated among the students was that a crazy woman had come in about a debt, and on the following Monday, Feng Jia called me to the office and closed the door and asked me the question directly. What are you? I had prepared for this. I had prepared 11 separate answers over the weekend, ranging from complete denial to a partial truth involving a family martial tradition. I used none of them. I'm a student in your class, I said, who is going to be extremely useful to you for the next 3 years, and after that you'll never have to think about it again. She looked at me for a long time. That's not an answer. No. Are you dangerous? Yes. To me? No. Feng Jia sat back in her chair and put both hands flat on her desk and looked at the ceiling of a staff office in a mediocre school in a small city, and she laughed once, without any humor in it at all. I moved here in August, she said. I have 1 relative and 49 students, and I have not had a conversation that wasn't about a lesson plan since October, and the most honest person I have met in this city is 16. Statistically, that's probably normal. Get out of my office, Li Wei. Yes, teacher. Take a bag of snacks with you, said Feng Jia, the cabinet, second shelf, and share them with that little girl, and Li Wei. I stopped at the door. Thank you, she said. That is how that friendship started, and it is the second best thing that came out of that year. Now Tan Kai. I gave it 8 days, because 8 days is long enough that nobody connects 2 events, and because I wanted the file first. The file came from Yang Li, who by December had gone from a woman in a pawn shop to a woman with an assistant, and who had discovered in herself a talent for finding things out that I suspect had been waiting 27 years for something to point it at. The file said, hexavalent chromium, nickel, cyanide compounds in the rinse, discharged untreated into a drainage ditch that ran 2.4 kilometers to a tributary of the Hui, past the edge of a village called Wangzhuang, where the well water came from a shallow aquifer since 2011, 2.4 kilometers since 2011. I want to say something here that I have never said out loud. When I read that file, I did not think about the village. Not first. First, I thought about the fact that the tributary joins the river 11 kilometers upstream of the dike, where a girl rides on the back of my bicycle every night with her face turned into the wind. That is not a noble thought. That is the thought I actually had. The noble version arrived about 40 seconds later, and it was this. I have 300 years of technique and a company doing 200 million a month and a divine sense that reaches 400 meters, and there is a man putting chromium into a well because a treatment cycle costs 11,000 yuan a month. So here is what I did. Everybody assumes the answer was violence. The answer was not violence, and the reason it was not violence is that violence was too small. Step 1. Yang Li, acting for Chongqing Liquid Company, hired an accredited environmental testing firm out of Hefei to sample 11 points along that ditch and the tributary and 4 wells in Wangzhuang with chain of custody notarized on 3 separate dates. Step 2. She commissioned a second set from a different firm because a single report is an accusation and 2 independent reports are a fact. Step 3. She did not go to the County Environmental Bureau because the County Environmental Bureau was 2 floors of people who had been to Tan Kai's wedding-adjacent gatherings for 4 years. She went to the provincial one. And she went to it in the specific way that a company doing 200 million yuan a month goes to a provincial bureau, which is with a letter on paper that says, we are considering a 200 million yuan production facility in this county, and our own site survey has produced these results, and we would like guidance. That letter took 11 days to become a joint inspection team, The inspection was unannounced. That was the part I paid attention to, because unannounced inspections in that province in that year were roughly as common as snow in July, and it required Yang Li to make 4 separate phone calls that she has never described to me and that I have never asked about. They found the bypass in 20 minutes. It was not hidden. It had not needed to be hidden for 2 years. Tonkai's factory was ordered to halt, then fined. Then, when the second set of samples from the wells went into the file, criminally referred. His father's 2 properties went into the remediation order. The village of Wangzhuang received a water main from the county trunk, which they had been petitioning for since 2009. Tonkai got 3 years. He served 22 months. And that is the whole of it, and it is not exciting, and there was no scene where I stood over him, and I never met the man in my life. Except, I did go and look at him once, divine sense, from about 200 meters, on the day the inspection team came. I stood at a bus stop on the Eastern Industrial Road, and I put my mind into that factory, and I found him in his office watching the vehicles come through his gate, and I sat with him for about 90 seconds while he understood what was happening. I am not going to pretend that was a noble impulse either. I broke a rule in the middle of that, not the big one, a smaller one, because at the point where he stopped watching the gate and picked up his phone and started calling people in a specific order and got to the 4th name, and that 4th name did not pick up, I reached out and put the very smallest possible pressure on a nerve behind his left eye, and I held it there for 4 seconds. He never knew what it was. He thought it was stress. He mentioned it to a doctor in 2015. 4 seconds is not justice, and it did not do anything, and it did not help the village, and it was, by any standard I hold myself to, petty. I did it because I had stood in a corridor 8 days earlier and seen a 22-year-old woman standing very still in front of a knife. I have never regretted it, and I have also never done it again, which is, I think, the most honest thing I can tell you about myself. Feng Jia found out. Of course she found out. It was in the provincial papers by February, and her relative apologized to her at a New Year dinner in the specific miserable way of a man who has learned he introduced somebody to a criminal. She asked me, once, on a Thursday, marking papers, without looking up, "Was that you?" "Was what me?" "Li Wei." I did not answer. She marked 4 more papers. Then she said, "I'm going on another one of these. Saturday. My relative insists." "Don't. He's my only family in this city, and he's trying to help." She put the pen down. "But I'm going to ask you for something, and you're going to say yes." "Wait outside," I said. "How did you?" "Because you're sitting like someone about to ask for something, and you have a bag of snacks out of the cabinet already." Feng Jia looked at the bag of snacks she had, in fact, already put on the desk. "Saturday," she said. "Lanma Shopping Center, 3rd floor, the coffee place. You wait outside, you don't come in." "I'll wait outside. That is a promise I made in December and kept in April, and I will get to it." Meanwhile, the class was falling apart in 100 small, entertaining ways, and it deserves a minute, because if I only tell you about factories and formations, you are going to come away with the impression that my first year of high school was a thriller, and it was not. It was mostly this, the Wi-Fi thing. Number 4 middle school had wireless in the office block and nowhere else, and 54 students in class 8 lived and died by a 2-bar signal that got worse every time somebody's little brother in building 2 decided to download a film. Lin Horan solved this in November. The classroom had a multimedia lectern with a desktop computer in a locked cabinet, and the desktop computer had an Ethernet cable in it, and Lin Horan, one evening after self-study, opened the cabinet with a key he did not have and installed a router behind the tower. He then told exactly one person. For 4 months, Lin Horan sat in the back row of Class 8 with a full-strength signal, while 53 other people fought over 2 bars, and when Gao Yong finally noticed and asked how, Lin Horan said, and I quote, "I guessed the password." Zhang Daming, who was the one person, backed him up with a straight face. "It's true, he just typed something and it worked. Can you believe his luck?" They ran that for 4 months. 4 months. The class duty system. This one I admire more than anything else Lin Horan did. Class 8 had a cleaning rota. Lin Horan did not want to be on it. So instead of skipping it, which gets you caught, he went to the class monitor in September and negotiated a debt structure. He would take on other people's duties, in advance, in bulk, in exchange for favors to be specified later. By November, 11 people in Class 8 owed Lin Horan something, and Lin Horan had not held a broom since the first week of term. When he finally did his last accumulated shift in March, he swept the floor with an expression of profound peace and told Wu Xiaohui, who offered to help, "No, I'm enjoying this. I'm a free man from tomorrow." Gao Yong's campaign. Gao Yong liked Xu Ting. Everyone knew this. Xu Ting knew this. Xu Ting's parents probably knew this. Gao Yong believed with total sincerity that he was concealing it perfectly, and his concealment strategy was to never speak to Xu Ting directly and instead conduct all conversation with the person sitting next to her, or in front of her, or occasionally with me. He would come across the aisle and lean on my desk and say something like, "Li Wei, do you know they're building a new cinema on Jifeng Road at a volume calibrated to reach exactly 1 row further than me?" I would say, "I did not know that." "4 screens, Gao Yang would say to Shu Ting's back. 4. At the New Year party, he confessed to her, not out loud. He wrote it on a card and put it in her bag, and he was so nervous that he wrote the wrong name at the top, which was the name of a girl in Class 1 called Lin Yan, whom he had never spoken to because he had been rehearsing with a different card. Shu Ting gave the card to Lin Yan. Lin Yan came to Class 8 to find out who Gao Yang was. Gao Yang, cornered in front of both of them, announced that it had been a game of truth or dare. That is the single greatest act of physical cowardice I witnessed that year, and I include Chen Bo going into the river, Wang Min and Zhao Wenlong. I have to explain Wang Min properly. Wang Min was a very large 15-year-old girl with a very loud voice and an undefeated record in a great many fights, and she had established, by the end of September, a personal sphere of influence covering roughly 1/6 of the classroom. She had exactly 1 draw on her record, and it was Yu Ming. Yu Ming was a thin, quiet boy who sat in the southern corner and had precisely 1 contact in his phone, a girl online called Yunni, and who had, in the 3rd week of term, been assigned to sit next to Wang Min. He asked to move. It did not happen. On the 11th day, he stopped asking and instead fought her, and he did it with his fingernails, and it went on for a considerable time, and they were separated by 4 people, and neither of them ever spoke about it again. That draw is the load-bearing fact of Class 8's entire social order. Every single person in that room adjusted their behavior around it. Then in October, Zhao Wenlong transferred in. Zhao Wenlong had been the uncrowned king of Class 10. He carried a basketball at all times, including in class, including during exams. He had a legend attached to him involving a piece of rebar. Nobody in the entire first year would look at him directly. They put him in the seat on Wang Min's left. Within 2 weeks, the greatest terror of the first year was a man who could not leave his own desk without permission because Wang Min did not move for him, and asking Wang Min to move was a negotiation, and Zhao Wenlong lost every negotiation he ever entered. He slept through every lesson. That was his entire strategy for coping, and it was a good one. And the day a new maths teacher came in and tried to make an example of him by sending him to stand at the back, Zhao Wenlong picked up his basketball, said "excuse me," discovered he could not get out, and had to be extracted by the teacher personally negotiating with Wang Min, who agreed to move only after being promised a replacement lipstick. He then went to the back of the room and fell asleep standing up, leaning on the blackboard, and could not be woken by 3 people until Kai Peng walked past and said in a completely normal voice, "Zhao Wenlong, basketball," and Zhao Wenlong opened both eyes and said, "Someone wants to play with me?" That is Class 8. That is what I came back 300 years to sit in the middle of, and I would like the record to show that I enjoyed every minute. Ding Shuyan is the one I got wrong. She was in experimental Class 1, which was down the corridor and across the stairwell, and she was the kind of beautiful that makes a school arrange itself around a person, and she had something that I have only met 4 times in 300 years, and never in a person with no cultivation at all. She noticed things she should not have been able to notice. The technical term for it in the sect is a born sixth sense, and it is not psychic, it is not prediction, it is nothing so tidy. It is a nervous system that registers information the conscious mind has not been given permission to see, and then produces a certainty with no visible source. In the immortal realm, we called those people investigators, and we did not let them out of the sect. She started with the corridor lights. There is a stretch of the 2nd floor where the fluorescent tubes flicker, and there is a specific pattern to how they flicker, and in October that pattern changed slightly, and it changed because a boy walking underneath them every day at a fixed time was leaking a very small amount of something out of his meridians that a lightning tempering had put in. Nobody noticed. Ding Shuyan noticed. Then a bird. There was a magpie that nested in the poplar outside Building 3, and it had a root, and the root changed in November, and it changed because it had started avoiding a boy. Nobody noticed. Ding Shuyan noticed. Then 11 other things across 4 months, none of which alone means anything at all, and she wrote them down, in a notebook, dated, in a very small clear hand. And on the 14th of January she went to the 3rd floor landing, where the light is bad, and put her back against the wall and worked it out. There is a person in this school, she concluded, who does something that leaves traces, and the traces are physical, and the person is not a teacher, and the person is aware enough to keep it small, and every single one of my 11 data points sits inside a walking radius of 1 classroom. She wrote Class 8 in the notebook, and underlined it twice. I was standing 410 meters away in the schoolyard at the time, and I felt every part of that, because at 400 meters I could hear the sound a pencil makes. Now, I want to be very careful about how I say this next part because it is the coldest thing I did that year, and I have had 11 years to decide how I feel about it, and I have not landed anywhere comfortable. She was 15. She had done nothing wrong. She had, in fact, done something genuinely extraordinary. A 15-year-old with no information had reasoned her way to within one desk of the truth using flickering lights and a bird. And if that notebook had ever left her hands, I would have had to leave Yuzhou, not immediately, not dramatically. But a girl like that does not stop, and a girl like that eventually talks to someone, and eventually a person exists who takes a 15-year-old's notebook seriously, and the version of the future where I have to disappear from a Dyke Road bungalow is the version where a girl grows to 1.60 meters and nobody is there. So that night I went to her. I got in without opening anything. The compound had a wall and the wall had a tree, and at 140 nights of tempering, a wall is a suggestion. She was at her desk with the notebook open and a cup of tea going cold, and I stood in her room and let her see me. She did not scream. I want that on the record because she has never once been given credit for it. Ding Shuyan looked up at a boy standing in her bedroom at midnight and went absolutely still and said, in a voice with almost no shake in it, "Class 8. Third row, south side," I said. "You're the one who broke Shu Tao's leg." "I am." "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." "Then why are you in my room?" "Because you're right," I said, "and I need you to stop." And then I did the thing I did, and it took about 4 minutes, and it was not violence, and I would rather it had been. I put my divine sense into that room, and I let her feel 1% of what 400 meters feels like. Just once. Just enough that a 15-year-old girl sitting at a desk with a notebook understood, in her body and not in her head, the actual size of the thing she had been triangulating with birds. She stopped breathing for about 3 seconds. Then she started shaking, and she did not stop for a while, and I stood there and let her, because stopping it would have been worse. When it passed, I put a pill on her desk. Small, white, unmarked. "That isn't poison," I said. "It doesn't do anything to your mind. In 11 years, if you have children, they'll be healthier than they would have been. That's all it is. I'm giving it to you because I'm about to ask you for something, and I don't ask for things for free. What is it you want? Burn the notebook. Don't start another one. Look at whatever you like. Notice whatever you like. I can't stop that, and I wouldn't. But it stays in your head." Ding Shuyan sat very still. "For how long?" "Forever." "And if I don't?" I did not answer that, because there was no answer that was not a threat, and I had already made the threat by standing in her room, and adding words to it would have been cheap. She picked up the pill and looked at it. "You could have just killed me," she said. "It would have been simpler." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" I thought about that for a moment because I owed her an actual answer. "Because in the place I come from," I said, "the answer to a clever child who notices too much is exactly what you just said, and I spent 300 years there, and I did not enjoy it." She swallowed the pill. She burned the notebook the next morning in a metal basin in the yard, and I know that because I watched from 400 meters, and I am not going to pretend that was decent of me either. We have never spoken about it since. She nods at me in the corridor. Once, in April, when a friend of hers asked me a question I did not want to answer, Ding Shuyan changed the subject without being asked, and I understood that we had an arrangement. She came second in the school in the spring exam, one place behind me, and she did it on purpose, and I know she did it on purpose, and I have never asked why. The bicycle happened in March. Qi Tianheng was in experimental class 2, which is the second-tier track class, and his father managed a factory, and he wore a watch that Kai Peng priced at 11,000 yuan the first time he saw it and revised upward twice over the following term. Qi Tianheng was not a fool. It would be tidier if he were. He had good grades. He trained in Sanda 3 times a week. He was generous with money in a way that bought him a permanent audience, and he understood at 15 something that most people work out at 30, which is that the person who pays for dinner sets the topic of conversation. He liked Luo Hua. Luo Hua sat by the aisle in class 8 and wore sportswear and cycled to school and had, by common agreement, the best backhand in the first year. She was not interested in Qi Tianheng in a way that was so complete it did not even rise to the level of rejection. He would come to class 8 and perform, at length, and she would keep reading. He sent her breakfast for a week. She threw it in the bin, every day, without opening it, and Zhang Qi took it out of the bin and ate it, and then texted Qi Tianheng from his own phone asking for more, which is a chain of events I could not have invented. And in March, on a Tuesday, after a particularly long performance in front of class 8 during which Luo Hua turned a page 11 times, Qi Tianheng went down to the bicycle shed and put his heel through the front wheel of her mountain bike. Not a shove. He stamped on it. 4 times. There were 2 witnesses, both from his own class, and neither of them said anything, because that is how that works. That bicycle cost 1,100 yuan. Luo Hua's parents had bought it for her when she got into number 4 middle school, and it was the only expensive thing she owned. She stood in the shed and looked at it for a while. Then she picked it up and carried it on her shoulder the entire 2 kilometers home, because she was not going to leave it there, and because she was not going to cry in a bicycle shed. I found out at 9:40 that evening. Divine sense. 400 meters covers the shed. The honorable version of this story has me going away and thinking about it carefully. I went and got him out of his dormitory, not violently. I stood at the window of the third-floor boys' dorm at number 4 middle school, and I said his name at conversational volume from the outside, with divine sense in it. And 11 seconds later, Chi Tianheng came down the fire stair in his slippers because he could not do anything else. He was very brave for about 4 seconds. He was in his own school with 200 people asleep above him, and he had trained in Sanda for 3 years. He threw a good punch, genuinely good. If I had been a normal 16-year-old, it would have landed. I caught it and turned it over and put him on his knees on the concrete outside his own dormitory with his own arm folded up behind his back, and I crouched down beside him. 1100 when, I said, by Friday. Cash to her in front of the class, and you say the words out loud. Do you know who my father? I moved his arm 1 degree. He stopped. Friday, I said. And then you are going to leave that girl alone for 3 years, and when you graduate, you can go and be somebody's problem in Hefei. Okay. Say it. Friday, said Shi Tianheng into the concrete. 1100, okay. He paid. He paid on the Thursday, actually, 1 day early, in front of the class, with the words, and he did it in a voice like a hostage tape, and Zhang Daming took notes. And that should have been the end of it, and it was not, and this is the part that I got wrong, and that cost somebody else. Because what I did that night was humiliate a 15-year-old boy who had an audience. Chi Tianheng could not come at me. He worked that out on the concrete, and he never forgot it. But a boy with a wounded reputation and 4 followers and a father who manages a factory does not simply absorb that. The pressure has to go somewhere. It went sideways. It went into Zhang Qi, who had eaten his breakfasts. It went into a campaign that ran for 2 months, and that I did not pay attention to because Zhang Qi was, frankly, an unpleasant person who had brought it on himself, and I told myself that, and I was wrong. And in June, a boy got hurt in a way that I could have prevented on any of 11 days if I had been paying attention to anybody who was not mine. I will get to that. I am not going to soften it when I do. Chen Meiling got her first scholarship in January 2001 for a first in the city, paid in an envelope by the head of year in front of an assembly, and she went up onto the stage in a school tracksuit that was 2 sizes too big because they do not make them smaller, and took the envelope in both hands and bowed at exactly the wrong moment. She came off the stage and walked down the aisle past 600 people with her chin up and her ears completely scarlet. That afternoon, she made me take her to the school gate and buy 60 cups of double skim milk. 60. 1 for every person in class 8 plus the head teacher plus, for reasons she declined to explain, the woman who ran the water room. It cost her 480 yuan out of 2,000, which is nearly a quarter, and when I pointed this out, she looked at me like I had suggested selling a relative. Everyone has to have one, she said. Otherwise it's showing off. It is showing off. Yes, said Chen Meiling, but this way it's polite. I carried them in 4 trips. She stood at the front of the classroom, and Yang Guang handed them out, and she pretended to be reading a book the entire time, and did not look up once. That evening, she gave 400 yuan to her mother and said it was from the school directly and that it was compulsory, which is a lie she has maintained to this day. She kept the rest in a tin under her bed, and I know exactly what she was saving for, because I heard her calculating it out loud on the back of my bicycle for a month. A tablet computer, 2,900 yuan. For her mother to watch television dramas on while she was at school, so the house would not be quiet. She never mentioned that second part. She said it was for herself, for games, at least 11 times. I bought the tablet in February and left it on their kitchen table with a supermarket promotional sticker on the box saying that it was a prize in a draw that Aunt Lee had entered by buying cooking oil. Aunt Lee could not remember entering a draw. Aunt Lee decided she must have entered a draw. Aunt Lee watched 311 episodes of a period drama on it that spring and told the woman at the packing plant about the draw so many times that 4 other people started buying that brand of cooking oil, and I consider that the single most successful thing I have ever done with money. Chen Meiling knew, obviously, she never said so. What she did was, the following Saturday, hand me a bowl of noodles I had not asked for, with 2 eggs in it instead of 1, and say, I made too much, eat it or I'll be offended, and then sit across the table and watch me eat the whole thing without touching hers, which she has denied doing, and which she did. That was the winter. Lightning, a factory, a notebook in a metal basin, a boy on his knees on concrete, and 60 cups of double skim milk. By the time the term ended, I was 181 nights into a 211-night tempering. I had 26 of 37 materials. Changqing Liquid Company had 1,100 employees, and Chen Meiling was 1 meter 52, 8 centimeters. That is what I had left. 8 centimeters and 31 months, and every single thing in this story from here is the 2 of those racing each other. Night 211 was the 12th of February. It is the only night in the whole story where I nearly died in a way that would have been genuinely embarrassing. The last stage of the 9 heavens divine lightning tempering does not increase the dose. It changes the target. For 210 nights, the lightning goes into muscle and bone and sinew, and on the last night it goes into the marrow, and the marrow is where you keep the part of yourself that decides whether you are alive. The manual for it is 11 characters long, and the 11 characters are translated as closely as I can manage. On the final night, do not be alone. I had read that line at 40. I had thought it was superstition. In the immortal realm, I did the tempering in a sect array with 2 elders on standby and a jade talisman around my neck, and the line still made no sense to me. At 16, in a transformer yard behind the dike road with chalk and copper wire and a bag of iron filings, I found out what it meant. It went in. Everything locked. And then, for approximately 40 seconds, my heart stopped, and I sat upright inside a chalk circle in the dark with no heartbeat and complete consciousness. And I discovered that the human animal, deprived of a pulse but not of a mind, does not think about the light or the tunnel or the ancestors. It thinks, get up, and it cannot. So I sat there in the weeds for 40 seconds with the full and unhurried understanding that I had come back 300 years, dug up a jar, built a company, broken a boy's leg over a thermos flask, and was about to be found dead in a substation yard by a maintenance crew, and that a girl 1 wall away would be told that her tenant had electrocuted himself doing something stupid, and that she would believe it, because it would be true. That is what the 11 characters mean. Do not be alone, because the last thing the tempering breaks is your grip on wanting to continue, and if there is nothing in the room that wants you to continue, you do not. There was nothing in the room. There was, however, a wall 400 meters away, and on the other side of it, a 15-year-old girl who had, at 11 that evening, sent me a message on QQ that said, I set my alarm wrong on purpose, so you have to wake me up, don't be late. I did not think about that in a noble way. I thought about it in the specific irritated way you think about an obligation. She would be late. If I died in a weed patch, Chen Meiling would be late for school. And my heart started. There was nothing mystical about that. I think a body that has been kept alive by a purpose for 300 years will, when asked, produce the smallest and stupidest available reason. And mine was that a short girl needed waking up at 6:40. I lay in the weeds for about 20 minutes. Then I got up, and I brushed the iron filings off my trousers, and I walked home along the dike with the whole sky over me, and I could feel every single one of my bones the way you feel a new coat. 211 nights, complete. Body refining. First stage. What that actually means in practical terms, and I'm going to be honest instead of poetic. At the end of it, I could lift about 400 kilograms in a deadlift and take a car door at low speed without braking. Bone density roughly 4 times a normal adult's. Recovery from soft tissue damage about 9 times faster. Grip strong enough to leave marks in a steel bar. No flight, no sword light, no punching through walls. In the immortal realm, that is a competent 17-year-old outer disciple. In Hue province, in 2014, it is the most physically formidable thing in the province, and it is not close. At 6:40, I made pancakes. At 7:15, I carried her to a chair and she ate with her eyes shut. At 7:50, we rode to school and she complained about the wind. She did not notice a single thing. I have never told her about night 211. I am telling you, the formation went up on the 9th of March at 3 in the morning and about 400,000 people saw it. I did not intend that. Nobody was supposed to see anything. Here's what a spirit-gathering grand array actually does. It is not a machine, and it does not generate anything. It is a shape. You place anchor stones in a specific geometry across a piece of land, and you carve the anchors so that they redirect whatever tide is already moving underneath. And if the geometry is right, the tide stops running through and starts running in circles, and the circles get denser. 37 materials, 1,106 anchor points, 409 days of preparation, most of which was Yang Li's purchasing department buying cinnabar and rare earth and 11 tons of a specific granite from a quarry in Fujian and shipping it to a mountain that a hair tonic company had, on paper, leased for medicinal herb cultivation. I set the last anchor at 2:40 in the morning on a ridge with frost on the pines, and I stepped back, and I put my palm on the keystone, and I fed it. The array lit, not brightly. That is the thing everybody gets wrong when I describe it. It was not a beam. It was a very faint, very slow, very wide rotation of light in the air above Tiger Perch Mountain, a kind of pale green and gold that turned over itself like water finding a drain, about 400 meters across, and it went on for 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a long time in a small city at 3 in the morning. Night shift workers saw it. 2 long-haul drivers on the ring road saw it. A woman in Shinhong County photographed it on a Nokia, and the photograph is bad, and it is still online. By 8 the next morning, there were 400 posts on the Yuzhou forum, and by noon, there was a provincial television crew. The county's meteorological bureau issued a statement about an unusual atmospheric refraction phenomenon associated with the cold front, which is a beautiful phrase and which they invented in about 90 minutes, and which I have always been grateful for. Yang Li called me at 6 in the morning. Was that you? Yes. There was a pause on the line. Do you need me to do anything? No. Let it be a light in the sky. In 3 weeks, nobody will care. In 3 weeks, said Yang Li, I will have bought the 2 websites that are hosting the photographs because I have checked and they cost 40,000 yuan together, and that is cheaper than a press strategy. She had, in fact, already done it. She told me about it in the past tense on purpose because she had worked out by then that I preferred to be informed rather than consulted, and because she had also worked out that she was better at this than I was. Nobody cared. In 3 weeks, somebody put it in a listicle in 2017. But that morning, in the classroom, Li Jing turned around and said, Did you see the sky last night? There were pictures. It was like the northern lights, but green. And Chen Meiling, who had been asleep at 3 in the morning with her light on and her phone on her chest, looked up from a strawberry and said, I saw it. You did not, said Li Jing. I saw it in my dream, said Chen Meiling, which is better, because in my dream, it was bigger. I did not say anything. Under my desk, in a small bag, was a wooden box, and in the box was a handful of soil, and the soil had, for the first time in probably 100,000 years, spiritual energy in it. I had a bowl. Now I needed to fill it. The mountain took 2 more months of paperwork, and I am going to skip most of it, but the part that matters is why the county said yes. Chongqing Liquid Company applied for a 30-year contract on Tiger Perch Mountain and Qingyu Lake for the stated purpose of a medicinal materials cultivation base. On the face of it, this was an absurd application. That land had a zoning classification that did not permit it. It had been earmarked since 1997 for a tourism development that was never going to happen. Contracting it out to a private company was, in the honest words of a deputy director whose name I never learned, against the rules. Yang Li went to that meeting with 2 documents. The first was a hiring plan. 200 security and maintenance staff in the first phase, recruited locally, 7,000 yuan a month after tax, full social insurance and housing fund, accommodation and meals provided, 3 days on and 1 off. 7,000 a month after tax in Yuzhou in 2014. The average was under 3. 200 jobs is 200 families. She put the number of families on the first page in a font 1 size larger than everything else, which is a thing I would not have thought of. The second document was a letter from the mayor of N-City, the next city over, formally inviting Chongqing Liquid Company to relocate its production base, with land offered at a preferential rate. That letter was real. And City had sent it 4 times. She had ignored the first 3 specifically so she could use the 4th one in this room. The contract was signed in 11 days. Not one single thing about the way I got that mountain was cultivation, and that matters to the end of this story. It was a widow's daughter from a pawn shop on Renmin East Road understanding exactly how a county government makes decisions and then making it easy for them. I built the spirit field in the last week of March, 2 mu. That is about 1,300 square meters, which is nothing, which is a large garden. It sits about 2/3 of the way up the northeast face in a natural depression with 2 streams running through it, and to find it you have to walk through 400 meters of mist. The mist is not weather, it is an illusion array, and it is the second most complicated thing I have ever built. And its entire function is to make anybody who walks into it come out the other side, certain that they have walked in a straight line and found nothing. Inside there is grass, colored grass, and I am aware how that sounds. Spirit plants do not glow in the way stories say. They glow in the way a leaf glows when the sun is behind it, which is to say faintly and only from certain angles, and the effect of 2 mu of it under a filtered sky is not majestic. It is quiet. It looks like a garden somebody has loved for a very long time. There is a stone bench and a low tea table and a reclining chair because I built this for a girl to eventually sit in and I wanted somewhere to sit myself in the meantime. And there is a puppet. I refined it in April out of 11 materials in about 9 days, and it is not alive, and it never was. It is a black robe with a mask on it, and the mask is carved with a pattern the sect called Falling Cloud, and it stands behind the bench and does not move. It has exactly 1 instruction. If this place is invaded by something I cannot stop, gather the spirit medicine and destroy the array. I put that instruction in on the 9th of April, and I want you to remember it because that is the single most important sentence in this entire story, and neither of us knows it yet. The first sowing was Polygonum, Angelica, Ligustrum, and 11 others, and a thing called Cloud Marrow Grass, which is the base, which is the entire reason for all of it. Cloud marrow grass takes 26 months to first viable harvest. I planted it on the 29th of March, 2014. 26 months. Then I planted 2 yuan bamboo saplings at the edge, which are useless, which have no medicinal value at all, and which grow into a wood that when cut into a cup makes any water poured into it taste sweet and faintly of bamboo. I did that entirely because a girl who was 1 meter 52 complains that water is boring, and in 2 years I was going to hand her a cup. I have been asked whether that was sentimental. It was extremely sentimental. It was also the only thing I planted that year that I was completely certain would work. Sunday, the 2nd of March, was the mall. I put it here on purpose because everything else in this story is a formation or a factory or a boy on his knees, and the actual center of the whole thing is a Sunday afternoon in a shopping center in a small city with bad air conditioning. Lanma Shopping Center, Phase 1. She had been asking for 3 weeks. She had a list. The list was on her phone and it had 11 items on it, and item 1 was milk tea, and item 11 was a buffet on the 4th floor at 49 yuan for lunch, which she intended to pay for and about which she had been boasting since Thursday. The milk tea stand was running a promotion. Buy one, get the second at half price. So I bought 2, and while I was standing there waiting, a boy came up to me. He was about my height, black-rimmed glasses, and he was carrying a paperback about economics with a bookmark 2/3 of the way through, and he had the specific expression of a person who has decided to do a good deed. Hello, classmate. Excuse me. Let me ask you a question. He said himself, the way people do when they have rehearsed something. Suppose you are walking in an endless desert. If I give you a bottle of water, will you drink it all? I was in an excellent mood and he was extremely polite, so I said, yes, I'll drink it all. After you finish one bottle, what if I give you a second one? I'll drink that one too. And the third bottle? Drink it all. The fourth bottle? Drink it all, I said. 4 bottles of water is not a problem for me. 4 bottles of water has not been a problem for me since about 1740. There was a pause, and I watched a very smart boy from the experimental class at number 2 middle school silently reconsider his materials. Even if you can drink a lot, he said, recovering, you definitely can't finish the next 10 or 20 bottles. Can you? Probably not. Right. He got his rhythm back. What I want to tell you is simple. What you truly need is only a little water at the beginning. The water that comes after holds very little value or meaning for you. He tapped the promotion sign, just like this. Buy one, get one half price, looks like a discount, but it is actually a mechanism to make you spend more and increase their margin. This marketing method is not suitable for you. He laid the whole thing out. He did it well. He had clearly thought about it for longer than the situation required, and he was extremely pleased with himself, and he had the shine on him that a 16-year-old gets when he believes he has just saved a stranger from himself. So now, he said, if you think carefully, why exactly are you buying the second cup of milk tea? For my younger sister, I said. There was a silence. Huh, said the boy. He took it well. He stood there for about 4 seconds with his entire argument collapsing quietly around his shoes, and then he laughed at himself, genuinely, which almost nobody that age can do. His name was Wei Han. He is now doing something with development economics at an institution I am not going to name, and he has, I am told, a paper about rural water access with his name on it. I have thought about that conversation many times. When I got back to the table, Chen Meiling said, "Who was that?" "He was talking to you. An interesting young man." "Interesting how?" "He wanted to save me from a discount." Chen Meiling considered this and delivered her assessment. "He should have saved you from your face." Then she saw the machine. It was a coin-operated height and weight machine by the escalator. 1 yuan ago, prints a little slip. She was in front of it before I had finished sitting down. "Li Wei, let's measure our height." "All right." And then she did the thing that I have never been able to describe without stopping for a moment. She took a packet of tissues out of her pocket, and she unfolded 2 of them, and she laid them flat on the footplate of the machine. Then she took off her shoes and stepped onto the tissues in her socks and stood at attention, with her heels together and her chin level, because she had decided that shoes would make the reading dishonest. That is the whole character. I could stop the story here and you would know her. The slip came out. Height 152 centimeters, weight 71 jin. "I've grown taller," she said. She had. She had grown 3 centimeters since September, which is a normal rate for a 15-year-old girl, which is exactly the problem, because a normal rate gets you to 1.60 meters in about 2.5 years, and my grass needed 26 months, and I stood next to a coin-operated machine in a shopping mall doing arithmetic that I did not want the answer to. 4 months of slack. That is what the machine told me, in the best case, 4 months. "Your turn," she said. I took off my shoes. 183, 139 jin. Chen Meiling looked at the slip. Then she looked at me, then she looked at the slip again, and her eyes went round, and she said with real outrage, "You weigh almost twice as much as me?" "Yes, what about it?" "Nothing," she said. "I'll grow too, in the future." And she folded the paper slip in half and put it in her coat pocket, and she has kept every single one of them, and I know that because I have seen the tin. That afternoon had one more thing in it, and it is the funniest thing that happened to me all spring, so I'm going to tell it. We ran into Chen Chuchu. Chen Chuchu is Chen Meiling's cousin on her mother's side and her closest friend in the world, and she goes to number 2 middle school in the Peking Tsinghua track class, which is to say the top class of the best school in the city, which is to say she is going to a university that number 4 middle school has produced about 10 graduates for in its entire history. She is also extremely beautiful in a way that rearranges rooms, which is relevant because she was out that day with 4 classmates, and one of them was a boy called Juan, who was wearing brand clothes and a watch and had assembled the entire outing specifically to be near her. He looked at me first and did the assessment men that age do. Then he looked at Chen Meiling, decided she was a primary school student, and dismissed her from the conversation entirely. Choo-choo, who are they? They're my good friends. They look about our age. Are they students? Why haven't I seen them at number 2? He's in our year, said Chen Choo-choo. At number 4. The temperature in that corridor dropped about 4 degrees. Yuzhou has a hierarchy, and everybody in it knows their place to the decimal. Number 2, middle school sent 80% of its students to first-tier universities. Number 4 sent, in a good year, a bus. Number 4, said Xuan, and smiled. That's pretty good, a promising future. One of his friends added helpfully, Number 4's fine, their experimental class is probably a bit better than our fast track. Xuan was non-committal. After all, it's an experimental class. And then Chen Meiling, who had understood every single layer of this and who was, at that moment, holding a milk tea and a stuffed cat, said, in a voice of complete childish sincerity, "You're all from the Peking Tsinghua class? That's amazing. I wanted to get into the Peking Tsinghua class too." Xuan's chest expanded about 2 centimeters. "Then you'll have to work hard for the high school entrance exam," he said kindly. "The threshold at number 2 is quite high." "High school entrance exam?" said Chen Meiling. "My high school entrance exam is over. I'm a high school student." There was a pause of extremely good quality. He looked at her. He looked down at her, which took a while. He looked at a girl 1.52 meters with her hair in a bun and a plush cat under one arm. He said, "You're a high school student." "No need to doubt it," said Chen Meiling. "I am a high school student." And then, God bless him, he decided to give her advice. "It seems you won't have the chance to study at number 2, he said, warming up. "To be honest, only at number 2 can your potential really be fully realized. Of course, it's not entirely impossible. If your potential is very good, you could transfer." Wei Han, standing behind him, had gone completely rigid, because Wei Han had heard the name. "I forgot to introduce them," said Chen Chuchu. "This is Chen Meiling, and this is Li Wei." Wei Han's head came around like a gun turret. "You're Chen Meiling? You were first in the entire city last time?" Their teacher had photocopied her exam paper. All of it. Every subject. And spent 2 supplementary lessons over the winter break walking the top class of the best school in Yuzhou through the work of a girl from number 4, question by question, as an object lesson in what a real paper looks like. They had all seen her handwriting. They just had not seen her. Chen Meiling tugged on my sleeve and said calmly, "That's me." "What's wrong? How could you get such a high score?" "I answered the questions," said Chen Meiling. "I have never seen a boy's face do what Xuan's face did. There was no shouting. There was no confrontation. There was just a 15-year-old boy standing in a shopping mall corridor, slowly running back through the last 4 minutes of his own dialogue and finding in each of them the words he had used out loud in front of the girl he liked to a person 41 points ahead of the entire city. He said. He never fully recovered. He suggested the arcade, which was an attempt to change the subject and which went considerably worse for him, and I will make that short. The claw machines, Chen Meiling announced, patting her chest, that she was extremely accurate at claw machines and got one every single time. She then hooked the same cartoon cat 4 times in a row and lost it 4 times in a row because a claw machine does not care about accuracy, and after the 4th she stood there vibrating with pure rage and said, "Just tell me, was it accurate or not?" "It was accurate." "Well then." And Xuan came over to save the situation because Chen Chuchu was standing there and he explained the technique. He explained 3 techniques. He demonstrated all 3. The first was the swing, using the hook's inertia, and it missed the doll entirely. This method requires proficiency. I'm just showing you the principle. Chen Meiling. That move is amazing. It just doesn't catch anything. The second was the double press to tighten the claw, and this time the claw came up completely empty while the doll did not move at all. The third was, and I am quoting, a bug in the machine in which you do not press the button and instead wait for the countdown to expire, at which point the claw descends by itself with a higher success rate. He put in his token and started the countdown. I put in a token. "Li Wei," said Chen Meiling, "I want that white cartoon cat, okay?" She did not consider the possibility that I would fail. That has never once occurred to her in 3 years. I could tell you that this is a great responsibility, and it is also the single nicest thing anybody has ever done for me. I pushed the joystick and pressed the button, and a thread of spiritual energy about as thick as a hair went in through the seam of the glass, and the cat stuck to the claw as if it had been glued there, and rode up and across the top of 40 other plush animals and dropped into the chute. His countdown ran out at almost exactly the same moment. The claw came down and closed on nothing. "Yay," said Chen Meiling, hauling on my arm. "You really didn't disappoint me. Stop shaking me. Do you want the cat or not?" She hugged it and did the thing where her eyebrows go up and her mouth goes into a crescent. "When we get home tonight," she said, "I'll reward you with something delicious." Xuan stood behind us and stopped sharing his experience because his audience had relocated, and I heard him say to nobody in particular, in the voice of a man reviewing his life, "My heart is so tired, I don't love this world anymore." We left the arcade about 40 minutes later with, by my count, 11 plush animals, of which she was carrying 7, Chen Chu Chu 3, and a girl called Zhao Qing 1 pink rabbit that she was pretending not to be pleased about. Halfway to the escalator, Chen Meiling stopped. "Li Wei, I'm so tired of holding these. Can you do a magic trick and make the plush dolls disappear?" "Can I?" "If you can do that," she said with the air of a monarch offering terms, "I won't be your boss anymore. We'll be equals." I turned my palm over. A plastic bag appeared in it, because I had one in my sleeve, because I had known for about 9 minutes that this was coming. "Put them in here." Chen Meiling looked at the bag. Chen Meiling put the dolls in the bag. Chen Meiling said, "That doesn't count," and remained my boss. The new maths teacher arrived the same week, and he was the single most unpleasant man in that school, and one of the 2 best teachers. Feng Kai, hired from outside, 10,000 a month, which was extraordinary money for number 4, 30 years old and looked 45, dark, heavy, thick eyebrows, a large mole beside his nose, and a habit of tucking his shirt into his trousers in a way that exposed the full unrestrained architecture of a beer belly. He and another teacher called Du Wei were known school-wide as the 2 heroes of number 4, which was not a compliment. There were rumors. The knife scar on his stomach, which he showed people, the student who spat on his car and got kicked twice. He mocked students for entertainment, regardless of gender, at length, and with real craft. He walked into class 8, introduced himself, received a thin scattering of, "Hello, teacher," and stopped. "I think," he said with a cold face, "as a new teacher, I'm not asking for a grand welcome, but at least a hello is in order, isn't it?" Yang Guang stood the class up and made us do it again. That was his opening move, and it worked, and for a term, nobody in class 8 was distracted in a maths lesson, and the class average went up 9 points, which nobody ever thanked him for. He also mocked Zhang Qi in front of 54 people for a swollen face, and told a boy who had guessed his way to 20% that the intelligence gap in the room was wider than the gap between the students and a dog in the street, and everybody laughed except the boy, and I sat there and thought about how easy it is to be funny in a room where you hold all the power. His arrangement with Chen Meiling was established in the first week. He called on her. She stood up and said, "Teacher, I don't know." He asked again the next lesson. "Teacher, I don't know." By the 4th time, he had checked with the head teacher and been informed of the policy, which was that Chen Meiling could do literally anything she liked in that classroom short of arson, and he came back and asked her again anyway, out of pure professional spite, and she said, "Teacher, I don't know." And he said, "Every time I ask, you say you don't know. How many times has this been? You get full marks on every test and you're first in the city. Can't you give me some face?" And Chen Meiling, who had never once been rude to a teacher in her life, decided that this particular teacher had earned it and solved the problem in about 11 seconds without looking at her book. All right," said Feng Kai, waving his hand. She sat down and looked at me with her chin up. Later that term, he put her on a private blacklist of 3 students he would never call on again, and the other 2 were Zhao Wenlong and Zhang Daming, and Zhang Daming got on it by inventing a technique that I still consider one of the great works of applied cowardice. Feng Kai called on him. Zhang Daming did not know the answer. He stood there for 20 seconds. Just as Feng Kai opened his mouth to send him to the back, Zhang Daming said, "I think this problem." Feng Kai closed his mouth. Zhang Daming immediately forgot everything. 30 seconds of silence. Feng Kai opened his mouth again. "I know," said Zhang Daming. Feng Kai closed his mouth. Nothing. This went on, back and forth, for 7.5 minutes of a 45-minute lesson, and the entire class understood exactly what was happening, and nobody breathed, and Zhang Daming stood in front of 54 people and burned 7.5 minutes of a maths lesson off the calendar out of nothing but nerve. Then he said, "I don't know this problem." Feng Kai's face went the color of a plum. He did not shout. He called on Chen Qian instead, who answered it in 11 seconds and sat down radiating a superiority so pure it could have powered a small appliance. And Zhang Daming walked back to the back row, a hero, because he had bought 53 people 7.5 minutes, and Lin Horan gave him a stick of gum, which in the currency of that back row was a medal. Shen Yue sat behind me from the second week of the spring term, and she is the one person from that year I am careful how I describe. She was in class 8, she was 16, she was fiery with everybody and quiet with me, and she was very good at drawing and not good at physics, and I tutored her for about 2 hours a week for 2 years, which is longer than I have ever taught anybody anything. I picked her on purpose. That was not kindness. Changqing Liquid was going to need people who were mine, actually mine, in 10 years, and a 16-year-old who could draw and who was not afraid of a workload was worth more to me than any hire Yang Li could make with money. I never told her that. She found out in 2019 and threw a stapler at me. The reason she comes into the story now is that in March, a second-year student decided she was a project. His name was Zhou Lei, and he was in the experimental class of the second year, and he approached her on the schoolyard during physical education while I was 15 meters away playing badminton with Li Qing. Shen Yue had put her racket down 2 minutes earlier and handed it back. She looked at her own chest and said, "I'm not really suited for this." And I understood, and did not say anything, because she had developed faster than the girls in her year, and it had brought her nothing but trouble since she was 13. Zhou Lei came over with his hair unwashed and asked for her QQ. She said she did not use QQ. He said WeChat was fine too. His eyes went up and down her the whole time, without any attempt to conceal it, and she took a step back. I put the racket down and walked over and said 2 words. "Get lost." He was a second year. He had that specific insane superiority that 1 year of seniority produces in a school, and he was not remotely afraid of a first year, and he pointed a finger at me and started on the speech. And that is when he saw 6 boys sprinting at him from across the schoolyard. Lin Haoran had spotted a raised finger. Zhang Daming had shouted, "Brother Lin, quickly, look, Li Wei is beating someone up." Gao Yang, He Fan, and Chen Bo had abandoned a competition at the Cloud Ladder Bar's mid-jump, and all 6 of them were now closing at a dead run with expressions of tremendous joy. Zhou Lei looked at 6 boys running at him. Zhou Lei concluded that the 6 boys were for him. He turned around and ran, and by the time my classmates arrived, he was 40 meters away and accelerating. "Li Wei," said Zhang Daming, wheezing. "Why did he run?" "You scared him away." Shen Yue laughed out loud, which he almost never did in public. That should have been the end of it. It was not, because Zhou Lei was not a boy with a crush. Zhou Lei was something else, and I did not understand what until the following Thursday. He found out her class, then her phone number, then her QQ, which he added under a false name and played a game of guess who I am with until she got angry, then her home phone, then the restaurant she ate lunch at, which he went to and sat down at her table uninvited in front of 2 other girls and offered to tutor all 3 of them for free at his rented room. That last detail is the one that told me what this was, and I am going to keep it at that. Then he made 4 other accounts and had them add her, calling her sister-in-law, telling her to be nicer to their brother, and posting about her in a school forum thread. Then he told her he was going to look into that boy from the schoolyard properly. Qianna warned her before I did. I want to give Qianna her due here because nobody in that classroom ever did. Qianna wore makeup and dated a second year and spent money she did not earn and was, by the standards of class 8, considered frivolous. She sat behind Shen Yue on a Wednesday and told her, quietly, that in the second year of junior high, there had been a girl in her class who gave that same senior her QQ, and he had spent 2 months trying to get her to a rented room, and when she refused, he told people she had gone anyway, and the rumors moved her to a different school. Then Qianna said, "So don't give him anything, and find someone to deal with him," and she gestured at me with her chin. Shen Yue thanked her. Qianna said, "No need, just introduce me to any handsome boys," and left. The girl who transferred schools was Qianna. She had changed enough in 2 years that he had not recognized her. Nobody in class 8 ever knew that. I know it because I have a divine sense and because I did not do the decent thing and stop listening. I have carried that around ever since. Every time somebody in that room said something about Qianna being shallow, I said nothing, because it was not mine to say, and saying nothing is its own kind of participation. Shen Yue asked me for help on the Thursday afternoon. She poked me in the back, the way she always did, and then took much longer than usual to start, and I turned around and looked at her, and she said, "I have something to tell you." She told me all of it. Then she said, "I don't know what to do. He's not going to stop. I'll handle it." 4 words. Her whole face changed. That is a thing I did not have the first time around. Nobody had ever said 4 words to me like that, and nobody had ever needed me to say them, and I sat in that classroom and understood, with some force, that a very large part of what I had come back for was the ability to say, "I'll handle it," and have it be true. I rubbed my brow, and my divine sense went out through the wall and across 2 buildings and found Zhou Lei in the 3rd-year corridor of the 2nd-year block, sitting at the edge of his classroom while everybody around him read, with his phone in his hand. He was in a chat. The chat was about which of Shen Yue's friends to add next. I watched for half a minute. Then I took my divine sense and I twisted it down into a needle, which is a technique called spirit sting, and which I had used 4 times in 300 years, all 4 on cultivators, none on children. I dialed it down to about 1 part in 100 of what I would have used on an adult, and I said out loud, at my desk in class 8, let's play a game. The game is called Quit Your Phone, and I put it in. 200 meters away, a boy scrolling a screen felt an awl go into his head, lost all control of his limbs, and threw his phone across a silent classroom. He screamed. He went under the desk and rolled around and got dust all over his uniform. And when the pain let go, he crawled up and said, "Where's my phone? Where's my phone? Not are you all right? Not what happened. Where is my phone?" A classmate picked it up and handed it to him. I did it again. He howled. The phone went up in the air and came down on a boy 2 seats over, and that boy was wearing a case that weighed more than the phone, so it was like being hit with a brick. I did it 11 times. By the 8th, the classroom's initial concern had curdled into pure hostility, because if you are quietly reading and the person next to you screams and launches a phone into your face at random intervals, you stop caring why. Sanjay, I'm begging you, if you're sick, go to the infirmary. I'm not sick, you're sick. Then why do you keep throwing your phone at me? By the 11th, Joe Lay's face had gone a color I could feel from 200 meters, and he was waving both hands at the phone on his desk like it was a snake, screaming, "Get it away, get it away." I did it twice more that evening, once while he was eating, once at 8:30. At 9:40, during the last self-study period, the after effects of repeated spirit sting arrived all at once, and Joe Lay lost consciousness in his seat and could not be woken by the school nurse. An ambulance came onto the main campus road with its lights going. 600 students came out into the corridors to look at it. Shen Yue was standing on the second-floor balcony, waiting for her friend Xiaoling, and Xiaoling came down the stairs and said, "Do you know who's in there? Joe Lay from second-year class 3. He fainted in a lesson and they couldn't wake him up." And then she said, "Lulu, you're so lucky. I was going to get some second years to warn him for you." Shen Yue stood on that balcony and did the arithmetic. She had asked me at 4 in the afternoon. I had said I'll handle it. It was now 9:30 and there was an ambulance. She has told me since exactly what she thought in that moment, and what she thought was, even if it was Li Wei, so what? She never asked me. Not that night, not ever. In 11 years she has never once asked me. He was out for 3 days and hazy for a week after that. He came back to school because the second-year experimental class curriculum does not wait for anybody, and he did not go near Shen Yue again. And if he had, I would have done it again, and I would have kept doing it, and I am not going to pretend to feel complicated about that one. I felt complicated about Ding Shuyan. I have never felt complicated about Zhou Lei. The Forum War was the same week, and it is the funniest thing in this whole story, so I am putting it here on purpose, to sit next to the ambulance. Liu Jian had been catfished. This requires background. Liu Jian was from a village below Yuzhou, boarded at the school, had 100 and something yuan a week to live on, and possessed the softest heart in the entire first year. He would buy people food when he had money. He lent his power bank to anybody who asked. He was, in the language of that back row, loyal, which is the highest thing they had. In February, he fell in love online with a girl called Manman. Manman was a number 4 student, allegedly. She had photographs. She had a way of talking that Liu Jian described to me, at length, on 3 separate occasions, as pure. To get her attention, Liu Jian had told her he was Yang Guang. Yang Guang was our class monitor, 1'82", played guitar at the New Year party, and was widely held to be the best-looking boy at number 4 middle school. Liu Jian was 1'78", weathered, and had a face that had spent a lot of time outdoors. He kept that up for 11 days. When it collapsed in the way those things do, and he took it badly, and he cried in his dormitory, and Gao Yong enjoyed that considerably more than a friend should. Then he repaired what he called his Tao heart, announced that his mindset was now extremely stable, and declared that nothing in the world could move him again. 9 days later, Manman posted about him on the number 4 middle school forum. People always assumed that post was a bit of teasing. It opened with, and this is a translation I have checked, "Even dogs can come out and deceive people now. Sisters, look at this trash. He is Liu Jian from class 8 of the first year." Then it explained that he was ugly, which she came back to 4 times. Then it explained the impersonation. Then there were 3 screenshots, and then a 4th image, which was a photograph of Liu Jian taken in the dormitory corridor in his shorts, mid-movement, with his face distorted, which is the kind of photograph that exists of everybody and which nobody should ever see. Then it said, "Sisters, remember this name, remember this trashy face. If you see him at school, spit on him." By the time Chen Bo found it, there were 50-odd replies. "What is this spotted dog? Don't insult dogs. Dogs are cute. No girls look at him in real life, so he has to do it online. In real life, he's probably a rat in a gutter. Everyone please repost. Let this trash get out of number 4. Liu Jian sat in the back row and scrolled with his arm shaking. Then he turned around and said to Lin Haoran, "Brother Lin, can you save me?" He was closest to Gao Yong. He asked Lin Haoran, because when it is real, you go to the person who is actually capable. Gao Yong said he would go and find her, and that he had never laid a hand on a woman, but she was forcing him to break his vow. Chen Bo said flatly, "Do you want to be expelled?" And that ended that. Lin Haoran put down his phone. What followed took him about 90 minutes, and I watched all of it, from 400 meters, with total professional admiration. Phase 1. He sent Zhang Daming to identify the 3 most aggressive commenters by cross-referencing their old forum posts against the school's group chats. Zhang Daming came back in 20 minutes with 3 names, all first-year class 5, plus phone numbers. Phase 2. He took a burner account with a photograph of the head of the school security department as its avatar, added Manman, and told her he was Director Wong from security, that the post was creating a bad influence and that it should come down. The post came down in 11 minutes. Phase 3, they worked out they had been fooled and reposted it identically. Phase 4 is where it stopped being clever and became, in my opinion, art. Lin Haoran laid his phone flat on the desk and pointed at 2 icons. This one is called the SMS bomber. This one is called the phone bomber. 6 phones went onto the desk in a row. Lin Haoran described the row as naval guns, and he was not being modest, and Zhang Daming laid out an A4 sheet with the 3 target numbers on it like a military map. Liu Jian hesitated at the last second. "She's a girl," he said. Lin Haoran said, "I'm striking at a woman." He Fan, in the tone of an ancient sage, said, "Benefactor, turn back and you will reach the shore." Liu Jian, "But how do I reach the shore?" "The first sword on the shore," said He Fan, "cuts down the one in your heart." Gao Yong held up his phone with the reposted thread on it and said, "Look, it's trending again. They're still cursing you. That did it." 3, said Lin Haoran. 2. Fire. 4 minutes later, Zhang Daming reported that the key accounts had gone silent and that in his professional judgment the enemy's arrogant momentum had been completely suppressed. Phase 5 was reputation laundering. Zhang Daming distributed a set of forum accounts, one of which turned out to be female, which Gao Yong discovered with a shout, and a set of pre-written posts with titles that Zhang Daming had composed himself. A man from number 4 gives a huge amount of cash to a woman. Afterwards, men are silent and women weep. The post underneath was a straight news-style report about how Liu Jian had found a wallet with 1,000 yuan in it and waited 2 hours in heavy rain for the owner. Gao Yong read it and said, "Did you ever find 1,000 yuan?" Liu Jian, "What are you talking about?" Zhang Daming, without looking up, "It's made up. Does it matter if it's real? On the other side of the internet, you don't even know if the other party is a human or a dog. If I say you returned a wallet, then you returned a wallet." Chinbo got the one titled "Shocking." A number 4 student actually did something indecent in broad daylight, which turned out to be about Liu Jian helping a cleaner collect bottles, and Chinbo was so disappointed he said so out loud. Phase 6 was misdirection, and this is the part where a 15-year-old boy demonstrated that he understood the internet better than most people who work in it. Lin Haoran's assessment was that suppressing the thread was not enough, because a suppressed thread leaves a residue, and what you actually need is a bigger fire somewhere else. So Zhang Daming put up a post about who is the best-looking boy at number 4, with Feng Chao's dunk photograph from military training on the first floor, and Yang Guang with a guitar on the second. And then he put up a second post about a girl who had heroically saved a boy's life on the schoolyard with artificial respiration, illustrated with a photograph he had personally taken at the time of Wang Min leaning over the unconscious Zhang Lei, plus a close-up. And then a third post asking whether Wang Min and Feng Chao made a good couple. The number 4 forum did not think about Liu Jian again for the rest of the academic year. Lin Haoran stopped there. Zhang Daming asked whether they should keep going and go after Manman directly, and Lin Haoran said no. "There are worse things we could do," he said. "There's no need. Knowing when to stop, that's something I learned from Luo Hua." I have thought about that sentence more than any other sentence anybody said to me in high school, and it was said by the boy who came last in the school, in a back row, over a bag of spicy strips, about a girl who had beaten him at table tennis. Liu Jian was fine within a week. He announced that he had grown, that such things were unimportant, that a man must look forward, and that his Tao heart had begun to repair itself and would soon reach a state of perfection. Zhang Daming showed him the artificial respiration post one more time and said, "Brother Jian, if you really feel miserable, think about Zhang Lei." And Liu Jian looked at it and cheered up completely. I need to tell you about the cloud ladder because it produced the single most catastrophic event in the social history of number 4 middle school, and I was standing about 11 meters away with a badminton racket in my hand. The cloud ladder bars are a piece of playground equipment, 2 tall uprights with a horizontal ladder across the top, about 3 meters up, running maybe 7 meters end to end. Every school in that province had one. The game was that you stood on a low rail at one end, jumped forward, and grabbed a rung, and whichever rung you reached was your score, and the entire first year understood this scoring system without anybody ever having written it down. It was a Wednesday, and physical education was shared with Class 9. Class 9 hated us. This is important context. Class 9 had, by an accident of the streaming algorithm, ended up with a shortage of girls, and Class 8 had ended up with a surplus, including Shuting and Shenqinge and the Chen twins, and Class 9 had spent the entire year coming to loiter outside our door. Zhonglei was the loudest of them, top 10 in Class 9. Not tall, not strong, decent grades, and he ran with 3 friends whose main activity was pushing an unlucky boy called Wudong into our classroom for entertainment. He had also spent 2 months being quietly furious that a boy from Class 8 sat surrounded by 3 of the best-looking girls in the year. So on that Wednesday, Chen Bo got into a pull-up contest with him, and won, and then Jiang Lei moved the venue to the Cloud Ladder bars, where he had a specialist. Fan Bo jumped. Fan Bo was the boy from Class 9 who sold things, face wash, honey, small mirrors, whatever he could source, out of a bag all year to fund himself. He was a genuinely excellent athlete, and he cleared past the middle of the ladder easily. Then he came down, cupped his hands to the crowd and said, "By the way, I'm selling honey at the moment. No additives, pure honey, 20 a bottle. Buy some and strengthen your body. Look at my physique. Still awesome. And I've got a girlfriend." He made 2 sales on the spot. Then Jiang Lei, who had not jumped anything, started on Class 8. "You jump then. Can you do it? If you can beat Fan Bo, I'll admit you Class 8 boys have the appearance of men. Otherwise, you're all just little brothers. You might as well stop going to school and go steal dogs." There were 2 stray dogs at the far end of the schoolyard that year. He pointed at them. Chen Bo came and got me. He did it politely. He came all the way across the yard while I was systematically destroying Li Qing at badminton. And he said, "Li Wei, could you do me a favor? Those rascals from Class 9 are too arrogant. This involves our class's honor. I'll treat you to something after." "All right. No need for the treat." I want to be honest that I went because I was bored and because Li Qing had reached the stage of a badminton match where she was picking up the shuttlecock more than she was hitting it, and I felt bad about it. The Class 9 boys watched us come over. They watched Chen Meiling and Shen Yue and Li Qing come over with us, which they enjoyed considerably, and Jiang Lei got about 9 centimeters taller. "This bar is already more than halfway," he said, pointing. "Perhaps only a sports student could jump this far." "How are you going to jump?" Shen Yue said. "Don't speak too soon." That got a laugh out of Class 9, and it had a particular quality to it, and I put my hand on Shen Yue's shoulder and shook my head, because there is no point arguing with people about something you are about to settle. Chen Meiling made 2 small fists and said, "Go, Li Wei." I stepped onto the rail. I did not use spiritual energy. I want that on the record because Chen Bo has been telling this story for 11 years and he adds things. I jumped. I hit the second rung from the far end, 7 meters from a standing start, off a 20-centimeter rail. There was a silence of about 4 seconds while 40 teenagers recalculated what they had just seen, and then Chen Bo made a noise I can only describe as a shriek and started applauding. He jumped to the end. Even a third-year sports student couldn't do that. Gao Yang walked up to Jiang Lei, and this is the part I enjoyed, and copied his exact intonation from 4 minutes earlier. "You can find anyone you like to try, but if they can jump beyond the bar our Class 8's Li Wei jumped to, I'll admit you Class 9 boys are real men." Liu Jin hit his own thigh. I'm dying of laughter. Li Wei is a god. Over at the tennis tables, Qian Na grabbed Chen Yu and shrieked, "So handsome, did you see it?" And Luo Hua, who had been watching from a table with her ankles crossed, said mildly, "He's all right, a little better than me." Chen Na turned on her. "A little better? How many bars can you jump?" "2 less than Li Wei." "Are you kidding me? You can jump that far?" Luo Hua said, "It's not about whether I can, it's about whether I want to." Then, after a pause, "How about it? Want to make a bet?" Qian Na took that bet. Qian Na lost that bet. Qian Na did a month of class cleaning duty. Luo Hua jumped it that same afternoon in front of 6 people wearing school tracksuit trousers and reached exactly 2 bars less than I did, which I have always suspected she measured. Chen Meiling, throughout the entire episode, stood with her arms folded and was completely unimpressed. I asked her about it afterward. She said, "Why would I be surprised? No matter how amazing he is, he still has to eat my cooking. He still begs me to check his formulas, and he still cheats at chess." And then Jiang Lei killed himself. Not literally. He lived, and the injury was minor, and what actually happened to Jiang Lei was infinitely worse than an injury. Gao Yang and Chen Bo turned to leave, and Jiang Lei, standing behind them with his entire year watching, said in a low voice, "Do you think you've won?" Zhang Daming turned around, genuinely puzzled. "Isn't that so?" And I watched a 15-year-old boy's face do something I have seen on grown cultivators about to make an unrecoverable decision. "When did I ever say," said Jiang Lei, "that Class 9 had no one left? I haven't even entered the field yet." Gao Yang turned all the way around and looked him up and down. "Are you going to make a grand entrance?" Chen Bo spread both arms wide and said, "Wow, you're amazing." That did it. That completely dismantled him. Fanbo tried to stop him. Shi Qianjin tried to stop him. Fanbo said straight out, Xinli, don't jump, it's very difficult, and the risk is too great, and Shi Qianjin said, there's no need to fight for pride now, we can get even later, and both of those were correct, and neither of them stood a chance, because a 15-year-old boy who has decided that the world is against him does not hear advice, he hears confirmation. He climbed onto the rail. He pointed at the last bar at the far end, which is a bar I had not reached. As long as I touch the last one, I win, right? Gao Yong stroked his chin and said, indeed, if you can hang on, I'll count it. But I don't recommend it, your strength doesn't allow it. Chen Bo said, you can fool us, don't fool yourself. It really doesn't matter if you fool us, we'll just laugh it off. I could have stopped this. I want to say that plainly. I was standing 11 meters away with a divine sense that covered the entire schoolyard, and I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I knew exactly how far he could jump, and I did the arithmetic, and I concluded that the fall would be bad but not dangerous, and I let it happen. I have told myself since that it was not my business. That is true, and it is also not the reason. The reason is that I was 16 years old on the outside and about 316 on the inside, and I had, for one afternoon, allowed myself to enjoy being the boy who jumped furthest, and enjoying that made me somebody who watched. He jumped. He did not get within a meter of it. He came down short and sideways and hit the low stabilizing bar at the far end with his stomach and chest, and he went over it and stopped moving. Holy crap, he jumped, said Gao Yong. Holy crap, he fell, said Chen Bo. Then, instantly, and this is the funniest and worst thing about my classmates, everyone knows he wanted to jump, it has nothing to do with me, Gao Yong. I was already leaving, he insisted on pulling me back. What kind of thing is this? Both of them relocated approximately 4 meters. Chen Meiling came over and leaned on my arm and poked me, with her eyes very bright, which is her way of asking a question she does not want to ask out loud. It's nothing serious, I said. He fainted. That was true. The impact was hard enough that a weaker body would have been in genuine trouble, but Jiang Lei did not break a single rib. He got a shock to the heart and blacked out, and if it had gone the other way, I would have been over that ground in about a second and a half, and nobody would have understood how. Teacher Song Hao arrived at a sprint. Teacher Song Hao was the physical education teacher, dark, heavily built, permanently one incident away from a disciplinary hearing, and he had been running the athletics program at that school for 11 years without a single accident until my year arrived. He turned Jiang Lei over and checked him, and his face got worse. Spread out, give him air. Then he said the sentence that ended a boy's youth. Is there any student here who knows artificial respiration? Come and lend a hand. 2 people is much better than 1. Nobody moved. Nobody in a crowd of 80 teenagers moved, because none of them knew how, and because the ones who half knew were 15 and were not going to volunteer for that in front of 80 people. And then, from the back of the crowd, a hand went up, and a voice with considerable resonance to it said, Teacher, I'll do it. Wang Min pushed 2 boys out of her way, and arrived. I would like to describe the expressions on the faces of the crowd at that moment, and I cannot, because there is no vocabulary for it. Zhao Wenlong, who had spent 4 months living in the shadow of that woman, went completely white and took a step back from a situation he was not even in. Teacher Song Hao did not care what Wang Min looked like. Teacher Song Hao had an unconscious boy and a career on the line. I'll do compressions. You do the breaths. Hurry, don't delay. Wang Min pressed one thick finger delicately to her lower lip and said, in a voice she had never used before in her life, Teacher, I haven't wiped off my lipstick yet. Don't worry about that. Saving a life is more important. She looked down at the boy on the ground. She was absolutely sincere, and that is not sarcasm. She was also, in a way that everybody present understood instantly, and nobody could say, delighted, because Zhang Lei was exactly the type she liked, which was delicate, pale, and small. She took a deep breath and leaned down. Gao Yong turned his face away and said, Brother Bo. Chen Bo put an arm around his shoulders. He was crying and laughing simultaneously. Damn it, he said. Fan Bo and Shi Qianjin exchanged a look which contained the entire text of a prayer. It worked, by the way. That is the part everybody forgets. Wang Min and teacher Song Hao restarted a boy's breathing on a concrete schoolyard, and there is no version of that story where she is not the person who did the right thing when 80 other people did nothing. Zhang Lei came around slowly. He described it to Shi Qianjin later, and Shi Qianjin repeated it, and I am going to give it to you as he gave it, because it is a masterpiece. He said that the first thing he became aware of was a blower outside his throat, blowing at him, then that there was a plunger on his mouth pushing and pulling. He remembers thinking with great irritation that it was very annoying. Then his eyes opened, and there was a mountain in front of him, blocking out the sky, and he remembers thinking, am I climbing a mountain? And then the mountain opened its eyes. He tried to speak. Wang Min, seeing him stir and concluding that her efforts were working, immediately went back in for another round. All right, said teacher Song Hao. All right, she separated reluctantly. Teacher Song Hao helped him sit up and pointed and said the words that finished him. You should thank this classmate properly. She gave you artificial respiration. Zhang Lei looked up. Wang Min was standing over him with her hands clasped together and her whole body swaying gently and her eyes fixed on him with an expression of enormous fondness, waiting to be thanked. He looked around the circle. Every face was strange. His mouth was covered in lipstick, which he could not see and which everybody else could. He screamed, grabbed his head with both hands, came off the ground like a man launched, went through the crowd, and ran. He ran the entire length of the schoolyard, and out through the gate, and into the sunset, and Zhang Daming watched him go, and said nothing at all, which for Zhang Daming is the highest form of respect. He took a week of leave. When he came back, he was quiet in a way he had not been before, and Gao Yong's assessment, delivered to the back row on the Monday, was, "Brothers, I'm telling you, for the next 3 years, Zhang Lei will absolutely not find a girlfriend. First time I've seen someone so good at courting death." Li Qing, who was a serious person, asked, "Did he suffer psychological trauma?" Gao Yong considered it with the gravity of a specialist. He definitely suffered psychological trauma. It's said that as long as someone shouts artificial respiration in front of him, he'll hold his head and go crazy. That was a joke. It stopped being a joke about 3 weeks later, when Xiaobing said the words casually in a corridor, and Zhang Lei put his hands over his head and did not take them off for 11 seconds. Zhao Wenlong's war with Wang Min escalated after that, because he had watched the whole thing and it had reorganized his priorities. He came back to the classroom and immediately started bragging about how much better he would have done at the cloud ladder bars and jumped from a standing start and touched the ceiling fan with his fingers, which was genuinely impressive, and then squinted at Gao Yong waiting for applause. Gao Yong said one sentence, "Do you want Wang Min to give you artificial respiration?" Zhao Wenlong's whole face changed. He said, seriously and quietly, "Don't joke around like that anymore," and walked away with his basketball, and it was clear from the back of his neck that he was still thinking about it. He stopped sleeping properly. That is a real thing that happened to a real boy. Zhao Wenlong got up at 4 in the morning to play basketball, had done since primary school, and ran a permanent sleep deficit, and slept through every lesson he had ever attended, and that was the load-bearing structure of his entire existence. And after the schoolyard, he could not do it, because every time he went under, he had the dream. In the dream, he had won a championship. There were thousands of spectators. He was holding a trophy at the peak of his life, and then he collapsed, and a spectator came out of the crowd, and it was Wang Min, and she knelt over him. He woke up every time. His solution to this was, and I want you to appreciate the reasoning, to face his fear directly. He turned and looked at Wang Min. She had put on bright lipstick. His heart, in his words, felt like it was being squeezed, so he looked a second time. Then, because human beings are exactly this stupid, a third. Wang Min caught him at it and said, "You perverted peeping Tom." Zhao Wenlong decided that the therapy was working, so then he escalated. He turned to his deskmate and said, "Wang Min, if I fall asleep again, wake me up by hitting me." I would like a moment of silence for that sentence. Wang Min had never in her life been handed anything like it. She said nothing at all. She waited. Zhao Wenlong, having handed a loaded weapon to a person he had been at war with for 4 months, then immediately forgot the entire conversation and fell asleep on his desk within 11 minutes. Wang Min took a handful of his hair in her left hand, positioned his head, and slapped him back and forth across the face with her right. The sound went through the whole building. Zhang Daming was on his feet before the third one landed. Xu Ting and Li Jing jumped. Half the class stood up. Chen Meiling slept through it, because I had put a sound isolation array around her desk at the start of the lesson, and Gao Yong spent the next 4 minutes staring at her in genuine confusion, which I enjoyed a great deal. Zhao Wenlong came around somewhere in the middle of the assault, and by the time he was fully conscious, his entire face was numb. "Are you sick? How dare you hit me? Didn't you tell me to wake you up? I told you to wake me up. Did I tell you to hit me?" And Wang Min stood up and roared, "Did I call out to you or not? Did I call out to you or not?" And with each repetition, she moved her face 10 centimeters closer to his, and she did it 4 times, and by the 4th, there were about 5 centimeters between them. "Did I," she said, at a volume that flexed the windows, "or did I not tell you to get up?" The sound wave physically pushed the skin of Zhao Wenlong's face backward. He described it afterward as being hit by a showerhead at close range with a strong smell of pickled cabbage, and he said that some of it went in his eye and that the eye stung. He could not wipe his face. That was the tragedy. Wiping his face would have conceded the exchange, so he leaned in. They put their foreheads together like 2 bulls and pressed, and the desks began to move, and the stools went backward, and they held that position and shouted at each other from a range of 0. "Useless! Useless! Pighead! Pighead!" The class was in ecstasy. Lin Haran was distributing melon seeds. Someone at the back said, at exactly the right moment, "Why argue? Can't you just sit down calmly and punch each other a few times?" Nobody ever found out who said that. It was Lin Haran. And then Zhang Daming from the back row at maximum volume said, "Holy cow, are they kissing?" They came apart so fast that one of them knocked over a chair. The finish is the best part. Zhao Wenlong went completely still, in the way that a person does before something terrible, and his hands came down at his sides, and he said very quietly with a look of total calm, "Today, if gods block, I kill gods." And then he moved. He moved fast. He had been playing basketball since he was 6. The whole class stopped breathing. Wang Wen rose from her seat. Li Min rose from her seat. 3 of Wang Min's people stood up like a wall, and Zhao Wenlong's hand traveled at tremendous speed all the way up to his own neck, and scratched it, twice. He looked at the 4 people who had stood up and said in a tone of mild confusion, "My neck was itchy." "What are you doing?" The disappointment in that room could have been sold by weight. Wang Min said, "Useless." Zhao Wenlong did not argue because his weapon was not present, by which he meant his basketball, and because if he had actually swung, he would have been beaten unilaterally in front of 54 people, and he knew it, and I respect the arithmetic. A teacher came in from the floor below and shouted, "I can hear you from downstairs. Don't you know it's class time?" "Buzz, buzz, buzz, what are you buzzing about?" And in the silence that followed, a voice from the back row said clearly, "Because we are diligent little bees." The teacher demanded that the little bee stand up. The little bee did not stand up. The teacher left with a warning. It was Zhang Daming. Obviously, it was Zhang Daming. The spring outing was the 21st of March, and it broke 600 people. Number 4. Middle school had decided, in the spirit of building character, that the entire first year would walk to a newly built cultural park and back. The park was 10 kilometers away. 10 kilometers each way. There were no facilities. There was one enormous statue. They set off at 7:30 in the morning in class formation with a flag bearer at the head of each block, and our flag bearer was Zhang Qi, who volunteered because he owed the class monitor 400 yuan he had lost in an online scam and needed to be visibly virtuous until the poverty subsidy came through. Head teacher Zhou Jianhong stood in front of class 8 and called the roll, and then disappeared. Li Jing noticed first. "Where's the class teacher? Has anyone seen the class teacher?" 10 minutes later, Zhou Jianhong caught up with the column on a small motorcycle. Class 8 had nothing to say about that. 600 students walked past a man on a moped for 4 hours, and not one of us said a word because he was the class teacher, and because he had once paid a boy's clinic fee out of his own pocket and never mentioned it. For the first 40 minutes, it was beautiful. The dike road along the Hui, the wheat coming green, the air actually clean for once. Everybody was in an extremely good mood. At 45 minutes, the complaints started. At 90 minutes, the formation stopped being a formation. Feng Jiao rode alongside on her electric scooter and called out to Chen Meiling, "If you're tired, come up, I'll give you a ride." "Not tired, I'm not tired at all." She was, at that point, approximately as tired as a person can be, but she had a rule about not being carried in public, and the rule was absolute, and she once told me that if she had to crawl to a destination, she would crawl to it. Behind us, the class 9 boys tried the same thing. "Teacher Guo, we're so tired." And Feng Kai, marching past with his shirt tucked in, turned around and roared, "Tired? Being tired is right. Comfort is for dead people." That is the single greatest thing that man ever said, and he said it to a group of exhausted 15-year-olds on a dirt road, and I have quoted it in a board meeting. I gave her a pill. I had made it 2 nights earlier. It is not a real pill, in the sense that it has no cultivation value and could not be sold to anybody in the immortal realm for a copper coin. It is a physique-replenishing sugar pill made out of ordinary herbs with a very small amount of spiritual energy folded into it, and it does approximately what 4 hours of sleep and a large meal would do. I gave it to her as a sweet. She unwrapped the paper and found a small white pellet inside. She stopped dead in the road. "This is the kind they give you at the hospital," she said. "When I was little and I had to have a drip and I wouldn't hold still, the doctor gave me these." "Is it?" "They're really good," said Chen Meiling, and ate it, and her whole face changed, and she said, "Delicious," and then walked 10 kilometers to a park and 10 kilometers back and arrived home fresh. At the park, she stood in the middle of a group of collapsed classmates and said to Li Jing with genuine bewilderment, "I'm not tired at all. Have I mutated?" Xu Ting looked at me. I looked at the statue. The statue, incidentally, was the entire point of the trip. 600 students walked 20 kilometers to look at a statue and then were required, on their return, to write an 800-word essay titled "My Reflections on This Spring Outing." Chen Meiling wrote hers on the morning of the 21st, before we left. Li Jing caught her doing it and said, "The teacher didn't ask us to write one." "Don't worry," said Chen Meiling without looking up. "When we get back this afternoon, the school will definitely make us write it." "But you haven't gone on the spring outing yet. How can you write it?" "What's so difficult about that? I made it up." She wrote too. She wrote mine as well and then charged me for it, and the price was that I had to catch her something to eat that was better than lamb, which is a promise I want you to hold on to because I paid it 2 weeks later, and it is the last good thing in this story. Now, the bridge. There was a small ferry landing at the lake in that park, with a pedestrian bridge over the inlet, about 3.5 meters above the water, and by 11 in the morning, there were maybe 60 students on and around it. Chen Bo liked Xiaolin. Everybody in Class 8 knew this. He Fan had liked her first, and had then met her best friend, and immediately transferred his entire emotional infrastructure elsewhere, and had formally ceded the territory to Chen Bo in a conversation I unfortunately overheard. Chen Bo's approach to courtship was not conventional. Chen Bo believed that the way to a girl's attention was spectacle, so he got up on the bridge railing. Everybody else was walking on the bridge. Chen Bo walked on the railing, which was about 8 centimeters wide, and his balance was genuinely good, and he got 4 or 5 steps along it while Zhang Daming provided commentary. Brother Bo is awesome. So awesome. My brother Bo's balance, it's incredible. Xiaolin looked. Some girls from the experimental class looked. Chen Bo ascended into a state I can only describe as glory. He jumped on the railing and landed back on it. He spun. He shut his eyes. I spin, I jump, I close my eyes, is what he said afterward that he had been thinking, and he said it proudly in a hospital-free context weeks later. Zhang Daming shouted, "Holy cow, Brother Bo is too awesome, everyone look, look." And Chen Bo's foot went off the railing. There was a very large splash. "Brother Bo," said Zhang Daming and ran to the rail. "Save me," said Chen Bo in the water. "Save me, I'm going to die." I was 200 meters away under a tree with a bottle of mineral water, and my divine sense told me the following 2 facts instantly: that Chen Bo was in no danger of any kind, and that the water in that inlet was 1.1 meters deep. He was standing in it. He was thrashing in water that came to his sternum, in a panic so complete that he had not once put his feet down. I decided to let it run for a minute. That one was on me. On the bridge, He Fan announced, "It's my turn to perform in the river." He took off his jacket and threw it away from himself with a flourish. He threw it too hard. It cleared the bridge entirely and landed in the water on the other side. "Brother Fan, your jacket," said Zhang Daming. "My head can be severed," said He Fan. "My blood can flow. What's a jacket?" He then began unbuttoning his waistcoat, which had traditional knot buttons, and which he could not undo. And he stood on that bridge working at the top button with his hands shaking while his best friend screamed in a meter of water. Zhang Daming turned to Lin Haoran. "Brother Lin, I can only dog paddle," said Lin Haoran with the calm of a man who has assessed his own capabilities honestly. "I can't save anyone." Then he said, "Where's Li Wei?" Meanwhile, a boy from experimental class 1 arrived at a full sprint. Xu Guang. His family owned the Yukai supermarket at the school gate. He swam 3 times a week at the city pool, and he had come on this outing specifically to close out the last 1% of a courtship with a girl called Lin Yan, and he had just been handed, by heaven, the exact scenario every boy who can swim has fantasized about since the invention of water. He arrived at the railing at speed and shouted at volume so that the entire bridge turned. "Quick, move aside, I am Xu Guang of the experimental class." He then took a run-up, stepped onto the railing, and launched himself off it in a full jump into a river of unknown depth. The splash reached the 3rd step of the ferry landing. He Fan, who had been beaten to the water by a stranger, lost his mind. "Damn it, he stole my brother's thunder." He abandoned the waistcoat entirely and shouted, "He Fan, the Tao cultivator of Class 8, and went over the rail fully clothed. Sun Lei went next. Sun Lei had also seen that the first 2 had announced titles and desperately wanted one and could not think of a single thing, so he screamed, "Changshan, Zhao Zilong," and went in. At this point, I put the cap back on my mineral water. There were now 4 boys in that inlet, 3 of whom had gone in to save the 4th, and the girls on the bridge were watching with their hands over their mouths, and Chen Bo was still screaming because Xu Guang's entry had put a quantity of water in his mouth. I said, at conversational volume from 200 meters away, with divine sense in it, "Chen Bo, do you want to stand up and test the water depth?" Every single person in that park heard it as if I were standing next to them. 60 students on a bridge turned around like puppets and looked for the source, and found a tall, thin boy under a tree with a small girl standing next to him, and went completely silent. Chen Bo stood up. The water came to his collarbone. There is a photograph of the next moment. Somebody had a phone out. It shows 4 boys standing in an inlet in soaked clothing, all 4 of them upright, all 4 of them looking down at the water, with expressions that I would describe as a survey of the varieties of human despair. "What the hell?" said Chen Bo. He Fan pointed at him with a shaking finger and screamed, "You played with my feelings." Chen Bo could not come out of the water. He stood there for about 40 seconds, hoping to be forgotten. Teacher Song Hao arrived at the double and started taking his own clothes off to go in, and Chen Bo shouted, "No, teacher, no, I can get out." Xu Guang, whose entire romantic strategy for the semester had just detonated, refused to wade and swam to shore in front of everybody in a formal front crawl in 1 meter of water. Xu Ting came over to me on the bank. Li Wei, how did you know it wasn't deep? 60 people waited for the answer. Stay calm, I said. Chen Meiling said, he can do magic. They took Chen Bo and the other 3 away in a school van. Every classmate for 200 meters spent the remainder of the outing describing what had happened to every classmate who had not seen it, and by the time we walked home, the suffering of those 4 boys had become the single most successful spring outing in the history of number 4 middle school. Chen Bo was dejected for one afternoon. He asked He Fan, in genuine anguish, whether his image among his classmates was destroyed. He Fan thought about it and said, given your previous behavior in class, do you have an image to speak of? Chenbo said that was fair and recovered completely. I want to tell you about Saturday now, because I made a promise in December and this is where I paid it. Feng Jia's second matchmaking meeting was at the coffee shop on the 3rd floor of Lanma Shopping Center, and I waited on the pedestrian overpass outside like I said I would. She came up the steps at 10 to 10 with a small bag and shook it at me. She was in a plain sweater and high-waisted jeans, and she looked, and I say this as a statement of fact rather than anything else, extremely young. 22 is very young. Nobody remembers that about their teachers. 40 minutes, she said. After I'm done, I'll take you to eat something good. All right. Let's sit in the sun and talk first. She stood 2 steps back and looked up at my profile for a second, and then said something I did not fully understand until years later, which was, you do everything like it doesn't cost you anything. I said, it costs. At the end of the overpass, a man in a military surplus overcoat was applying phone screen protectors on a stool, 10 yuan each, and he was extremely good at it. I watched him do a couple's 2 phones without a single bubble. I have thought about that man more than about the coffee shop. She went up. I bought a milk tea and leaned on the 3rd floor railing outside and put my divine sense through the wall, because I said I would wait outside and I did not say I would not look. The man was 15 minutes late. Feng Jia had been sitting alone in a coffee shop for 25 minutes when he arrived, which is its own small statement, and she smiled and greeted him first anyway, because she had been raised well and because that is a specific tax that gets levied on women in that situation. He was about 30. Furniture retail, 7 or 8 employees, several $100,000 a year, which in Yuzhou in 2014 was a genuinely good income. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and the first thing he said was, "You're much prettier than in the photographs." The second thing he said before the coffee arrived was, "I've decided on you. If you marry me, my bank cards will be yours to manage." Feng Jia said, "No need to rush. Without spending time together, it's hard to know if we're a good fit." And he did not listen. That is the whole thing, and it took him 4 minutes to reveal it completely. Society moves very fast now. Your slow pace won't do. There are many important things to do in life. Let's settle down quickly so we can plan the next steps. Meeting the families, the wedding, the honeymoon trip. I'm 22 this year. In my plan, I need at least a year of getting to know each other before marriage. You're too slow, too stubborn. People like that find it hard to make money in society, which is why you can only be a teacher. Then he explained his business to her for 11 minutes. I stood at a railing on the 3rd floor of a shopping mall with a milk tea and listened to a man tell a woman with a chemistry degree that she could only be a teacher, and I felt something extremely old and extremely quiet turn over behind my eyes, and I did not do anything about it, because she had asked me to wait outside, and because she is a grown woman, and because doing something about it would have been about me. Then she got uncomfortable and started stirring her coffee, left-handed, which is how she does everything, and he watched her do it and said, "Are you perhaps disabled in your right hand? Is that why you use your left?" She stopped stirring. He then said, "Being left-handed is good. I heard left-handed people are smart. Are you smart?" I want you to understand that at this point, I had already decided what was going to happen, and that what I decided was nothing. Because there is a thing I learned in 300 years about people who like to be right, and it is that the worst possible outcome for them is to be uninteresting. If I had done anything at all, he would have had a story. A story about the strange incident at the coffee shop. He would have told it for years. So I let him finish his coffee and be nothing. She finished hers, said the polite words, and left. He asked when she could come over to his place. She found an excuse. Out on the walkway, she came around the corner and saw me, and her whole face reorganized. "How was it?" I said. "Not good at all. We had absolutely nothing in common. There's a generation gap." Then she frowned. "He's only 6 years older. How can there be a generation gap?" And then she looked at me and said, "Do you think there's a generation gap between us?" We were about 6.5 years apart, on paper. No, I said. She was extremely satisfied by that answer. Then she grabbed my sleeve and dragged me to the amusement floor, and what happened to Feng Jia over the next 40 minutes is the thing I actually remember about that day. She stopped being a teacher. The whole mature, careful 22-year-old with a work face thing came off in about 4 minutes, and by the time we got to the second aisle, she was pointing at things and saying, look at this, in a voice about 2 registers up from the one she used in a classroom. And then she saw the bear. It was enormous, it was well made, which is rare for a prize, and it was dressed, and it sat at the top of a dart stall as the grand prize, and you could not buy it. 20 darts, 20 yuan, 18 hits for an ordinary toy, 20 out of 20 for the bear. 2 couples were trying when we got there. The best anybody had managed all morning was 16. Feng Jia watched for a while, and then, without thinking about it, shook my arm the way the women around her were shaking their boyfriends' arms. Then she realized what she had done, and went still. Then she decided not to be embarrassed about it, which is my favorite thing she ever did, and said, Li Wei, I heard you. Don't you want that bear? I put 20 yuan on the counter and asked for the darts. The stall owner took the money with the specific pleasure of a man who has seen 400 teenagers try this. He handed me the tin. I took out 4 darts and held them between my fingers. Brother, he said, just play them one by one. No need, I'm in a hurry. I threw 4. 4 balloons went at once. There was a noise from the crowd. I threw 4 more. Then I took 4 in each hand and threw 8 together, and all 8 went, and then the last 4, and the wall was empty, and the tin was empty, and it had taken about 11 seconds, 20 for 20. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then somebody said, holy crap, and then everybody said it. The stall owner was not upset. That is the part I liked. He looked at his empty wall, and then at me, and laughed out loud, and handed over the bear, and then threw in a small toy on top, because he had just watched something worth 20 yuan. Here, I said to Feng Jia. She took the bear in both arms and pressed her cheek against the packaging without noticing she was doing it. And the stall owner gave me a thumbs up and said cheerfully, your boyfriend is really something. Feng Jia came back to earth instantly. Boss, you've misunderstood. He's my student. The stall owner looked at the 2 of us. Tall boy, beautiful young woman, enormous bear. I understand, he said with immense meaning. I understand. He really is my student. I understand. She grabbed my arm with her free hand and towed me out of there at speed, and behind us I heard the man shouting to the crowd that although the big bear had been taken, he had other dolls of guaranteed equal quality. We ate on the 4th floor, she ordered, because she said she had experience. She put the bear on its own chair with 2 tissues under it, and the waiter looked at our table for slightly too long. At some point over the fish, she put her chopsticks down and said, I'm not going on any more of these. Good. That's it? Good? You asked me to wait outside, I said. I waited outside. You want me to tell you what to do with your life as well? Feng Jia laughed. Properly. Head back. You are the strangest child I have ever met, she said. Eat your fish. The monthly exam was the 3rd and 4th of April, and it produced 2 things worth telling you about. The first is that Gao Yang invaded experimental class 1 with a chess set. I need to establish how this happened. In March, Chen Meiling made me buy her a Gomoku set from the shop at the school gate, and we played it in class, and Gao Yang watched us and concluded that Gomoku was for primary school students, and that a high school student should play something with dignity. He settled on Chinese chess. He had studied manuals as a child. He was, credit where it is owed, genuinely excellent. Over 3 weeks he beat, in order, Chen Bo 4 times, Wu Xiaohui, Li Qing, He Fan, Zhang Daming, about 11 other people. He was undefeated in Class 8, and he had begun to describe himself as lonely at the peak. None of this was about chess. All of it was about Shu Ting, who had not looked up once. On the second day of the exam, the maths paper, with 15 minutes before the bell, Gao Yang walked into exam room 1, which is class 1's classroom, which contains the top students of the entire first year, sat down in the middle of it, set out a board, and beat Zhang Daming. Then he said out loud, to a room full of the best students in Yuzhou, ha 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 ha, who else? Who else can fight me? The room looked up. I want to fight 10, said Gao Yang. Xu Guang came first, because Lin Yan was in that room, and because he was still bleeding from the river. He lost. Sun Chung came second. Sun Chung is the boy the principal of number 4 middle school personally recruited with a 6-figure package as a college entrance exam specialist, and who was, at that point, 3rd in the school. He lost. He Jai came 3rd and bet 3 cans of Red Bull and lost, and asked to pay after the exam. Gao Yang tapped the board and said, invincibility truly is a kind of loneliness. And then a girl at the back of the 3rd row said, in a slightly husky voice, how ignorant. Never mind Ding Shuyan. In this entire exam room you can't even beat me. That was Lin Yan. That was the girl whose name Gao Yong had accidentally written on a love letter in January. He looked at her and said, "Who are you?" Xu Guang puffed up and said, "She is Lin Yan." And Gao Yong, without 1 second of hesitation, in the middle of an exam room said, "I know you. You left a deep impression on me. From January to April, you lived in my mind. I couldn't forget you day or night." Xu Guang's face did something complicated. "Then what about me do you think about day and night?" said Lin Yan. "Your name," said Gao Yong. They played. Her style was strange and awkward and extremely difficult to defend, and she took him apart in about 6 minutes, and Gao Yong sat there with his Chinese chess dream in pieces around him and looked at Lin Horan. Lin Horan looked at me. The entire back row looked at me. I looked at the clock. 11 minutes to the bell. "Li Wei," said Zhang Daming in the voice of a believer, "it's your turn to make a move." And before I could stand up, Chen Meiling got out of her seat. She walked over to the desk and she sat down opposite Lin Yan, and she raised one hand to stop the game from starting. Then she straightened her back and announced, "To exam room 1. The chess saint, Chen Meiling, is here. State your name, challenger. I do not play against nameless opponents. I want you to understand that this room contained 30 of the highest scoring students in Yuzhou City and that not one of them made a sound. I'm Lin Yan. Come on, the exam is about to start." It took 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I have played that girl at Chinese chess several hundred times. She learned it at 6 from men at a roadside board in a village in Xinhong County who did not go easy on her and who taught her by taking her pieces until she cried and then explaining why. She has a specific way of losing 3 pieces early that makes people relax. Lin Yan sat looking at the board for a while afterward. "It's over?" "Yes, it's over." Lin Haoran checked his watch. Let's go. Chen Meiling is invincible." They left. All 3 of them, immediately, with no ceremony, and Xu Guang called after them, "Wait," in genuine outrage, and Zhang Daming said, over his shoulder, "We have an exam," and they went. Lin Yan tried to escalate. She called on Ding Shuyan, who was in the front row, and who had not looked up from a maths problem. Ding Shuyan looked at Lin Yan, and then at me, and then at Chen Meiling standing next to me. "Let's talk about it another time," she said. "It's exam time." That is the only favor she has ever done me, and she did it in front of 30 people and nobody has ever known. The second thing was Chen Qian and the wind. Chen Qian was Class 8's top student before Chen Meiling arrived and had spent the year in a state of controlled fury about it. He was hardworking in a way that deserved more sympathy than he got, and he had a habit of announcing his own excellence that made it very difficult to give him any. Chen Meiling and I handed in our papers 30 minutes early, which we did every time, and went downstairs to play badminton in the open ground, which we also did every time. Chen Qian came out during the break with Kai Guang and found Xu Ting and Luo Hua watching us from the corridor. Luo Hua said, "Li Wei plays badminton quite well," and Chen Qian said, "Badminton is not a very difficult sport, it's quite simple." Luo Hua, who had been the best athlete in the first year since September, said, "Oh, do you play often?" "Relatively little, but I see the patterns within it very clearly. One could say I know them like the back of my hand." He then explained his method. "I am going to give it to you in full because I have never been able to improve on it. The most core point of badminton is receiving the shuttlecock, and I won't hide it from you. I can determine the landing spot of the shuttlecock with 100% accuracy. My mathematics and physics are excellent. Don't underestimate this point. For badminton, it is very important. The badminton movement model is a commonly used projectile model. You understand parabolas." He drew an arc in the air with his hand. "I first observed the speed and angle of the shuttlecock's movement, and because of external influencing factors, I first need to do a screening." And then Chen Qian took 4 steps forward and opened both arms and closed his eyes and said to Xu Ting and Luo Hua and Kai Guang on a concrete forecourt in Yuzhou, "I am feeling the speed of the wind. The wind guides me, and I guide the wind." Nobody said anything. After determining the wind speed, I use aerodynamics for calculation, and then I can determine the landing point. This is very simple for me, so I am invincible at playing. Luo Hua said, "Really or fake?" I'm a bit skeptical. So he came over and asked for the racket, and then he looked at Chen Meiling, decided that beating her would not be convincing, and challenged me directly, which took more courage than anything else that happened in that yard. I served. He had not finished calculating. He did not get his racket up. He served. I hit it back. He got nothing. 11 times. He served 11 times and touched the shuttlecock on 0 of them, and by the 6th, there was sweat on his forehead, and he was saying, out loud, "This isn't right, this isn't scientific." Luo Hua from the corridor delivered the verdict that Class 8 quoted for 2 years. So much theoretical knowledge, and completely lost when he actually plays. He went back upstairs and sat down at the last desk of exam room 1 and wrote the best maths paper of his life. I am not being sarcastic. He scored 141. It was his personal best by 9 marks. He came 4th in the class. Chen Meiling came 1st in the school. I came 2nd. Sun Cheng, the six-figure recruit, came third, which I am told cost the principal several difficult conversations. Lin Haran came last, not last in the class, last in the school, 5 marks in mathematics and, on the physics paper, a 0. Feng Kai came in with the papers and stood at the front and shouted, "Now, all the students who scored 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60, stand up for me." 7 people stood. And Lin Haoran sat in the back row and looked at his own paper and understood with total clarity that he did not meet the entry requirement for the punishment. Zhang Deming said, "Actually, Brother Lin didn't do anything wrong. He genuinely didn't meet Feng Kai's conditions." "I have fallen to such a degree," said Lin Horan. He put the paper in his desk and took out his phone and went back to a game, and I watched him do it, and everybody in that room read it wrong, including me. That was not a boy who did not care. He came last in a school of 2,000 people, and he did not say one word about it to anybody, ever, and 11 days later he quietly bought an English dictionary and started at the beginning. Nobody noticed for a month. I broke my rule for the second time on the 2nd of April, outside a milk tea shop on Xinglong Road, and I have never once regretted it. We were walking home. Chen Meiling had been talking for 20 minutes without a break and her mouth had gone dry, so she sent me to buy 2 cups and left herself in charge of the bicycle, which is a job she takes extremely seriously and which involves leaning on it with her arms folded like a customs officer. There was a queue. 4 people. I was watching the shop, and about 11 meters behind her, on the pavement, a small boy came along carrying a school bag that was too big for him, 1st or 2nd grade, maybe 7. He had it on both shoulders, and it came down past the backs of his knees, and he was walking with the specific determined waddle of a child carrying something heavy who has decided not to complain about it. Behind him, at a distance of about 4 meters, was an old man. He was tall, nearly 180, heavy through the shoulders, in a padded jacket, and he was carrying a black pole. A billiard cue, I found out later, with the tip long gone. I felt him before I looked at him. That is not a figure of speech, and it is not intuition. Divine sense at 400 meters gives you the shape of what a person is doing with their attention, and an old man's attention was wrapped around a 7-year-old boy the way a hand wraps around a wrist. He caught up. He said in a warm voice, "Little friend, what are you carrying? Grandpa will help you carry it." And he took the bag off the boy's shoulder without waiting for an answer. "My books are inside," said the boy. "Are you out of school?" "School's out. My mum's working overtime. She didn't come to pick me up." I want you to hear how that boy said it. He said it apologetically. He said it the way children say things when they have already decided that the adult's inconvenience is their fault. "Grandpa has good food at home," said the old man. "Let's go to Grandpa's house first. Mum doesn't let me go to other people's houses." And here is where I stopped being a person standing in a queue, because the old man was not annoyed by that. He was pleased by it. A 7-year-old boy had just told him that nobody was coming and that his mother had rules, and the old man heard the first half. "Your mum's working overtime. You can wait at Grandpa's house, and Grandpa will take you home." The boy shook his head. "Grandpa has a games console at home. You come and play, and after that Grandpa will take you home." The boy wanted the console. I watched him want it. He was 7 and he wanted it very much, and he said in a smaller voice, "Grandpa, give me the bag. I want to go home now." And the old man's face changed, all at once, like a light going off. "If you don't come to my house," he said, "you're not getting the bag." The boy stopped. Chen Meiling had seen all of it. She was standing by my bicycle 11 meters away with her hands going white on the handlebar and her whole face gone tight, and she was doing the arithmetic that a 15-year-old girl from a village does, which is, he is old, and if I shout, he will fall down and say I pushed him, and then it will be my problem and my mother's problem. She kept looking at the shop. She wanted me, and she was afraid of what would happen to me. I came out with 2 milk teas. I gave her one. Then I walked past both of them, took the school bag out of the old man's hand, and gave it back to the boy. The old man stared at me. He went from startled to furious in about a second and a half, which told me a great deal, and he shifted his grip on the pole, which told me the rest. I looked at him and said 2 words. "Get lost." There was divine sense in it, not much. Enough that his ears rang and his legs decided the argument without consulting him, and he turned and went, fast, without one word, the way people go when something has spoken to a part of them that does not have language. Chen Meiling was staring at me. "I thought it was going to be hard," she said. "It wasn't." I put a mark on him, divine sense, on the back of the neck, the same as I had put on Tan Kai and never used. Unless he left Yuzhou that night, he was not going anywhere. I could not find him. Then we took the boy back to his parents. They were at home, playing mahjong, which is an answer he gave me completely straight-faced when Chen Meiling asked what they did for work, and which caused her to spend the next 11 minutes trying to work out whether mahjong counted as a job. His mother went the color of paper when I told her, and then she went the other color, and she gave us 2 mangoes from a bag on the table, which she pressed on us until we took them, and I have carried the memory of that woman's face for 11 years. Now the part that matters. I had already decided before we reached her front door that I was going to cripple him, not frighten, not report. There was nothing to report. Nothing had happened. A man had held a bag. A man had offered a child a games console. There is no crime there, in any jurisdiction, and a police report in Yuzhou in 2014 would have produced a form and a shrug and an old man who learned to be more careful about where he did it, and it was not the first time. I knew that from 90 seconds of watching him because the offers came in the right order and at the right speed, and he had a response ready for the refusal. My rule was, I do not touch anyone who has not touched mine first. I broke it on purpose, and I did not agonize about it, and I want to be honest that the absence of agonizing is the part that should worry you, and it does not worry me. I did it 3 days later, on the 5th of April, which was Qingming, in a stairwell on the 7th floor of an old block on the north side of the city, and it happened by accident, in front of 2 15-year-old girls, and I will get to it in about 4 pages because I have to tell you about the picnic first. Qingming was a Saturday, 3 days off. The whole city goes out. Chen Meiling had been planning it since March and had a written schedule, and the schedule said, buy vegetables in the morning, collect choo-choo, picnic on the small plain below the dike, and quote, make Li Wei do the work. I overslept. It sounds trivial, and it caused the entire day. I had been on Tiger Perch Mountain until 1:30 refining a batch of cultivation pills, and then I had a message from Feng Jia at 3 because Feng Jia had come off an evening with staff room politics and had nobody in this city to say any of it to, and we talked until 5:30. And at 5:30 Shen Yue messaged to say she had a surprise for me, and the surprise took another hour, so I was asleep at 7:30 when Chen Meiling pushed open my door. I did not wake up. I was aware of her. At that stage my divine sense ran whether I was conscious or not, so I have a complete record of what she did, which is that she stood at the end of my bed and told me I had disappointed her too much, and then, when that produced nothing, took a blanket off my bed, got onto my sofa, curled up, and glared at me continuously for 11 minutes. She has a specific glare. She developed it at 6 against a cat in her village that scratched everybody, and she has told me the story of that cat 4 times, and each time the cat is bigger. 11 minutes of it did not wake me up, because the difference between a village cat and a man who has been struck by lightning 211 times is measurable, so she messaged Chen Chuchu instead. Choo-choo, Li Wei is still sleeping in. He clearly promised yesterday to go to the market with me. He lied to me. I'm so sad. What should I do? It's so hard. Chen Choo-choo, who is the most sensible person in this entire story, replied, it's okay. I'll go to the market with you. And Chen Meiling replied, you don't need to come. I only want him. Boo-hoo-hoo. Chen Chuchu did not reply to that because Chen Chuchu was tired, and I would like it recorded that a 16-year-old girl in the top class of the best school in the province, standing next to a broken washing machine at 7:30 on a public holiday, made the correct call to disengage. I woke up at 8. Chen Meiling immediately convened a court. From this moment, she said from the sofa, sitting up and slapping the armrest, you have no right to remain silent. Every word you say may be used as evidence. And what am I charged with? The crime of oversleeping. I plead not guilty. No, said Chen Meiling. If I say you're guilty, then you're guilty. She was very pleased with that. She was so pleased with it that she did not notice me put my hand down on the sofa arm until it was already covering hers. She went completely still. I know how this reads. I know what people assume. The truth is much simpler and much less interesting than the assumption. She was 15. I was, on the outside, 16, and on the inside 316, and I had come back for her the way you come back for family. What was in that room was not romance. What was in that room was a girl who had spent 4 years of her life being extremely careful, never to need anything from anybody, discovering that her hand was warm and that she did not have to move it. She looked down at the sofa. Her ears went red. Then she said, in a very small voice, let go, you bad guy. I let go and laughed at her, which restored the balance of the universe instantly, and she shot upright and shouted my name and demanded to know where I had been all night, and I said I had been eliminating aliens who were invading our territory. You're lying. There are no aliens in the world. Have you ever seen one? No. So, I said. You're welcome. She never did find a counter-argument to that. We took the bicycle to the market. She bought the vegetables, because I am not allowed to buy vegetables, because I do not know the prices, and because stallholders quote young people high, and Chen Meiling regards being quoted high as a personal insult that must be answered. She is a genuinely excellent haggler. She has a technique which consists of naming a price so low that the stallholder has to laugh and then not moving from it and looking at them with total sincerity, and it works about 60% of the time. Then we went to get Chen Chuchu, who lives in the north of the city. She did not want us to come up. I knew that instantly, and Chen Meiling did not know it at all. Chen Chuchu and her mother rent the top floor of a 7-story walk-up with no lift in a compound built in the 80s. The plaster on her ceiling is cracked and comes down in heavy rain because they are under the roof. The windows rattle in wind. Her mother has asked the landlord 4 times. She has never, in 3 years of high school, invited a single classmate to that flat. Her deskmate Zhao Qing invited her home once and she declined because if she went to Zhao Qing's, Zhao Qing would come to hers. Chen Meiling has been there many times. That is the exception, and it is the exception because Chen Meiling has eaten at Chen Chuchu's table and Chen Chuchu has eaten at hers, and there is a specific kind of poverty-adjacent friendship where the accounting has been settled so long ago that nobody looks at the books. She still tried to come down and meet us. Even if you know the address, it won't be easy to find. The buildings around here are very confusing. It doesn't matter, said Chen Meiling, typing with one thumb while holding my jacket with the other hand. I'll have Li Wei tell my fortune. Chen Chuchu's reply took a while to arrive. She had, by that point, been told that I was a great master of fishing, a great master of chess, a great master of claw machines, and since March, a fortune teller. She had never once asked for evidence of any of it. She had simply built up, over 11 months, a picture of a boy who was apparently good at an unusually broad range of very specific things, and had made peace with it. I found the flat with divine sense. It took about a second and a half. I picked the shortcut through the alley, took 2 turns, and stopped the bicycle at the second-to-last stairwell entrance. We're here. But you didn't pinch your fingers, said Chen Meiling, in genuine complaint. Fortune tellers pinch their fingers. I can do it mentally. She did not believe that for 1 second, and she has never stopped bringing it up. Then she carried the shopping up 7 flights. All of it. She would not let me take any because I had made the mistake of saying, she lives on the 7th floor, can you manage? Which converted a bag of vegetables into a matter of national honor. She got to the 4th floor in 1 push. She made it to the 5th. Somewhere around the 6th, she stopped, and I heard her whisper to herself, activate backup hidden energy, and then charge the last 2. She arrived on that landing with her arms shaking and her legs gone and a face full of triumph. Chen Chuchu opened the door and saw a boy standing there empty-handed and a very small girl underneath 4 bags of vegetables. Ha, said Chen Meiling, wheezing. Chuchu, I carried all of these up myself. Impressive, right? Truly impressive, said Chen Chuchu. She poured us both a glass of water from a thermos and then asked me how I had found the flat, since she had never told anybody which door it was, and there was another one directly opposite. The one opposite is empty, I said. Nobody lives there. Ah, she said. You noticed. Then she went quiet for a second, and I understood that I had put my foot somewhere. There had been a woman opposite, a mother and a son, up from 2 counties so the boy could go to school in the city, waiting on an apartment that was still being built. Good people. And there was a young man in the compound, unemployed, who had got in with her son and taken him in a bad direction, and who had come knocking one day and put his hands on her in her own doorway. Chen Chuchu had opened her door in the middle of that. She had been 16, and she had seen it, and had not been able to do anything at all, and she has never told anybody except me, and she told me because I said 1 sentence about an empty flat. They moved out 4 days later. Can I see your bedroom? Said Chen Meiling. Of course you can. I stood in the doorway. I did not go in, and with my divine sense, I felt Chen Chuchu's hands close at her sides and her breathing change, because a girl who has never invited anybody home was about to watch her best friend look at her room. Chen Meiling walked in and said, wow, what a big map. There were 2 of them on the wall opposite the bed. A map of the world and a map of the country, the large paper kind you buy for 11 yuan, and they were the only decoration in that room. Chen Meiling went straight to the world map and put her finger on Yuzhou. So small, she said. Then she thought about it and said, it doesn't seem that small either, which is the most Chen Meiling sentence ever produced. Chuchu, Li Wei, let's point out all the places we've been. Okay, said Chen Chuchu. She went to the map of the country. She put her finger on Yuzhou, and she left it there. Chen Meiling looked at her and laughed and said, what a coincidence. I haven't left Yuzhou either. And then she tapped 4 other cities in quick succession and said, Li Wei, are these the ones you've been to? Yes. She had missed a great many. In the previous 6 months, I had been to 11 provinces on a spirit boat collecting materials. And before that, I had spent 300 years in a place with a mountain range you could see from 4,000 kilometers away, and I stood in a rented bedroom on the 7th floor of a walk-up in Yuzhou, looking at 2 girls in front of a paper map, one of whom had never left the city, and one of whom had never left the city, and I did not say any of it. What I said was, there are better ones than these. Which ones? I'll take you. Chen Meiling said, you'd better. Chen Chuchu did not say anything at all. She looked at the map for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she said she had to finish the laundry, and we went out to the balcony. The washing line was strung high. Chen Chuchu had to go on tiptoe to reach it and normally used a clothes prop. Chen Meiling volunteered to help, and Chen Chuchu, who is kind, handed her a pillowcase and then, having done the mental arithmetic, also handed her the prop. Chen Meiling waved it away. Too troublesome. She put the pillowcase on a hanger. She raised it. She was about 25 centimeters short. She jumped twice. Then she said, without turning around, "Li Wei, send me to the heavens." And she put one arm up. I came over and put my hands under her arms and lifted her, and she went from 1 meter 52 to about 1 meter 92, and she hung the pillowcase with the serene expression of an empress and said, "Mission accomplished." Chen Chuchu watched that. I felt her watch it. And something in the way she watched it made me pay attention, and I filed it, and about 40 minutes later she asked me a question in a wood that I have thought about ever since. But first, the stairwell. It started with a dog screaming. That word is exact. It was not barking. Anybody who has heard a dog make that sound knows immediately and permanently what it means. Chen Chuchu's face changed. A dog? Chen Meiling jumped and then looked at me and stopped being afraid, which is a thing she does that I have never got used to. The peephole in Chen Chuchu's door was broken, so she could not see out, and she stood there with her hand near the lock and did not open it, and I said, "Open the door. We still have a picnic to go to." "Are you sure? What if there's danger?" "There isn't." She opened it. There was an old man on the landing beating a small dog to death with a black pole. It was the same man. I want to describe what I felt because it was not anger. Anger is fast, and this was not fast. What I felt was the specific level, almost administrative certainty of a man who has just been handed a second opportunity that he had not expected to get for 3 weeks. He lived in that building, 3rd floor. He had been in a feud with a young man on the 4th about that dog for 2 months, shouting at each other out of windows at midnight, and this was the escalation. The young man came up the stairs 4 at a time and hit him in the back, and they went into each other, and the entire landing became a fight between a robust old man and a young one, in a space about 2 meters by 3, right outside a 16-year-old girl's front door. Chen Chuchu took a step back. She looked more frightened than she had all day, and it was not the fight. She had been frightened of that man on the stairs for a year. I moved the 2 of them behind me, and I put a very small amount of pressure into the air at the doorway, so that every time the fight came within a meter of the threshold it went somewhere else, which the 4 of them experienced as bad luck, and which I experienced as work. Neighbors came up. Somebody said, "It's a big festival, everyone's having a tough time, why fight?" Chen Meiling said, "Today is Qingming." The man who had spoken turned on her and said, self-righteously, "People are fighting at your door, why don't you stop them?" I looked at him, just looked. He discovered a pressing need to be elsewhere. A heavy middle-aged man from the 5th floor eventually waded in, shouting that he would call the police, and that stopped it, the way it always does. And the young man stood there holding a fistful of the old man's hair, and the old man stood there with his face opened up, and everybody breathed out. "It should be fine now," I said. "Let's go." And on the way past, with my hand at my side, I put a wisp of black energy in through the old man's ear. It is called cold flame. It is not a killing technique. It does not damage tissue, and no scan will ever find it. And what it does is take a specific bundle of nerves and hold them at a level of pain that a human being cannot habituate to, in waves, without a pattern, for as long as I leave it there. He collapsed on the landing 40 seconds later. He was taken to hospital that afternoon, and no one found anything. 3 doctors, eventually 4, and then a specialist in Hefei that his son paid for. Nothing. The neurology is completely clean. He is, medically speaking, a healthy man in his 60s. He has not slept more than 2 hours in a row since the 5th of April 2014. He cannot hold a job. He cannot follow a conversation for longer than about 4 minutes. He shakes. He does not go outside, because outside is worse, and he has not been within 200 meters of a school since that spring, which is not a rule anybody imposed on him. It is just where his legs stop working. He is alive. He is in a chair in a flat on the 3rd floor of that building, and he will be there for a long time, and he has never had the slightest idea why. I do not think that was justice. Justice has a procedure and a standard of evidence, and I had neither. What I had was 90 seconds of watching a man make a series of offers to a 7-year-old in the correct order, and 300 years of understanding exactly what that order means, and a technique. I have replayed it many times. Not once have I found the part where I would do it differently. The young man who fought him spent a night at the police station and was fined. The dog lived. The dog is, as far as I know, still alive and is very fat. Then we went and had a picnic. I want that abruptness. That is what the day actually was. We came down those stairs and got on the bikes and rode back to the dike, and Chen Chuchu said, "I've made you 2 laugh. The people around here are a bit eccentric," in a small voice, apologizing for her own building. And I said, "Who hasn't had a few eccentric neighbors?" And Chen Meiling said, exactly, Li Wei is right. And Chen Chuchu laughed for the first time that day. The rabbit. I had promised her something better than lamb, and I had a candidate, and the candidate was living on my mountain and did not know it. Back in February, I had been walking the northeast face, and a rabbit had come up from a stream and seen me and gone into the brush, and I had reached out with spiritual force and pulled it back out of the bushes just to see if I still could. Then I let it go, and I checked its condition, and I decided it was not fat enough. Then I fed it. Twice, over 6 weeks, I put a basket of spirit grass cuttings in its territory. The stuff has no value. It is the trimmings from the beds. But it had been growing in 2 mu of concentrated spiritual energy, and a rabbit that eats that for 6 weeks does not become a spirit beast, it becomes an extremely good rabbit. It went from about 8 jin to 13. On the morning of Qingming, I took the spirit boat up and found it in the grass, and I said this out loud, to a rabbit, in an empty field, with nobody within a kilometer of me. There is no love without reason in this world. Now it is its turn to repay me. I killed it with a blade of divine sense, which takes about 1/100th of a second and leaves the body completely intact, and I marked the burrow it had come from, because there were more, and I am not the kind of man who takes a whole nest. Then I brought it home, and Chen Meiling saw it and shrieked, "What a big rabbit!" She circled me twice. She stroked its ear with one finger and made a small sad noise and said, "Boo-hoo, so pitiful. Don't pity it, it's already dead." "It's dead?" She was outraged. "Its body is still warm. Completely dead." And Chen Meiling's entire face reorganized in about 1/4 of a second, and she said brightly, "Well, it's already dead, so we can't waste it. Let's eat it while it's fresh." Chen Chuchu, who had never eaten rabbit in her life, said, "I'll help you." And the 2 of them went to prepare it, because a girl who grew up in a village in Xinhong County can dress a rabbit before you have finished asking. We took everything down to the small plain in one load. That plain is a flat piece of grass below the dike, about the size of 2.5 football pitches, and on a public holiday it fills up with families and tents and small children. I carried the box on one arm and a 38 gin water barrel in the other hand, and I walked normally, and about 100 meters into the walk I felt Chen Chuchu's opinion of me change permanently, which I had not intended and could not undo. She knows the weight of a water barrel. Everybody who has ever changed one knows the weight of a water barrel. We set up by the river, away from the crowd, on the sparse grass. Chen Meiling dug a pit with a small shovel she had brought specifically, banked it with stones she carried over one at a time, and set the iron pot on top. Then she looked around and said, "I'll go and collect firewood." "I'll do it," I said. "You wait here. I'll go with him," said Chen Chuchu. Many hands make light work, and that is how I ended up in a wood with a 16-year-old girl who had something she needed to say. She did not say it for 4 minutes. We picked up roots and dry branches, and she was completely silent, and the silence was not awkward, and I remember thinking that Chen Chuchu is the only person I have ever met who does not need to fill a quiet. Then she said, "Li Wei. Mei Mei has been very happy lately." I kept picking up branches. "I haven't seen her like this in a long time," she said. "You might not know this. Mei Mei used to smile very rarely. She wasn't like this." I said nothing. "You probably don't know this either," said Chen Chuchu, "but she talks about you when we chat, very often." She stopped and stood up with an armful of wood and looked at the ground. "Li Wei, can you promise me one thing? Please don't hurt Mei Mei in the future." And then she said the part I have never got out of my head, and she said it in a smaller voice, like a confession. "Mei Mei used to have a very hard time. She always gave me a feeling I can't quite describe. I don't know if you can understand this, but before, I never thought about Mei Mei's future. I couldn't imagine what kind of person she would become, or what kind of life she would have. I really couldn't imagine it. It's different now. I can imagine her future. It's like I can see her, in the future, smiling and waving at me, happy and not worried about anything. I stood in a wood on the 5th of April 2014, holding an armful of sticks, and a 16-year-old girl told me, without knowing it, the exact thing I had come back 300 years to hear. Because she was right. In the world I came from, Chen Meiling had no future. There was nothing to imagine. She stopped at 17, and Chen Chuchu, who was closer to her than anybody alive, had felt the shape of that hole years before it happened, and had never once been able to name it. I have thought about what a normal person would have said. What I said was, "Don't worry. That is all. 2 syllables and 2 words. I did not promise anything, because I do not promise things, and because a promise is what you offer when you are not certain, and I was certain." Chen Chuchu looked at me for a moment, and then she nodded, and her shoulders came down about a centimeter, and she went back to picking up wood. I have asked her since why that was enough. She said, "Because you said it the way people say things that are already done." I produced a length of cord out of my sleeve, and we tied the bundle and split it in 2, and before we came out of the trees I looked ahead. Chen Meiling was crouched by the iron pot, arranging fruit in a basket, 1 piece at a time, moving them around, taking a very long time to get it right. "Come and visit often," I said. "She likes you a lot." The sun came through the leaves. Chen Chuchu did not look at me for very long. She said. We cooked over an open fire on a riverbank, and it was, without competition, the best day of that entire year. Chen Chuchu wanted to gather kindling because roots alone are hard to light. Chen Meiling said it was too much trouble. Li Wei is a magician. He'll light the fire. Chen Chuchu made a face I have come to think of as her fifth expression. Can a magician light a fire? Of course. Magicians are super good at playing with fire. That's not what playing with fire. A little girl of about 6 had come over to watch, holding a packet of seaweed snacks with her father hovering behind her. She had been flying a kite earlier using a fishing rod, which was the single most inventive thing anybody did that day. She asked if we were cooking. Chen Meiling said we were roasting meat. The girl asked if it was good. Chen Meiling, who has never been modest about her cooking, said it was super delicious. The girl held up her seaweed and said, "Is it as good as seaweed?" And then, imitating a television advertisement, at full volume, "I know the taste of the sea." Chen Meiling decided she had nothing to say to a child and turned away with tremendous dignity, being, as she was, a mature high school student. I put my hand under the pot, over the wood, and released spiritual energy, and a red flame came up out of my palm and spread along the branches. "Be careful, it's hot," said Chen Chuchu, genuinely alarmed. "It's fine," said Chen Meiling, without looking up. "He can do magic." The little girl forgot to eat her seaweed. Her father said, "Brother, how did you do that? Did you put something on your hand?" "Practice," I said. Chen Chuchu stared at my hand for a long moment. My fingers were completely normal. She has never asked, not once, in 11 years. Ding Shuyan reasoned her way to me from flickering lights and got a night she cannot talk about. Chen Chuchu watched me pull fire out of my palm at a distance of 1 meter and decided, silently, that it was none of her business and went to tend the fire. She was very good at tending the fire because she grew up cooking on an earth stove and could run a wok and a fire at the same time, which is a skill nobody in that park had except her. Chen Meiling cooked. She poured half a bucket of oil into the pot, which I feel obliged to mention. She stir-fried the rabbit with ginger and spring onions with both hands on the spatula and her whole body behind it, and about halfway through she stopped and said, with real frustration, "My cooking skill could be so much higher. My strength is limiting my path to becoming a top chef." Then she asked me, in complete seriousness, whether there was a form of exercise that made you stronger but did not involve any suffering. I said I would look into it. Shen Yue arrived halfway through with Xiaoling and a bag of snacks she had taken off her best friend specifically to bring to me, which Xiaoling told me about later out of pure spite. She had come with 15 middle school classmates, and one of them, a boy called Ye Mengchen, followed her over to see who she was so pleased about. He was from number 1 middle school, and he made sure everybody knew it inside 4 sentences. He asked how the study atmosphere in Shen Yue's class was, and she said so-so, which is the kindest possible description of Class 8. He said, "Compared to your class, ours is much better." And then he made the mistake. "What was your class's highest ranking in the city in the last unified exam?" He had a number ready. He was in the top 10 of a regular class at number 1, and he had been waiting for this exact opening for about 6 minutes. Shen Yue thought about it and said, "First in the city." "What?" Xiaoling, who had been enjoying herself, said, "Shen Yue's class's top student is first in the city. Are your news sources that out of date?" "Chen Meiling. She's from our number 4. She's in Shen Yue's class." Ye Mengchen went through several stages very quickly and arrived at, "And the one who tutors your homework, is that the city's top student?" "No," said Shen Yue. "It's someone else. He's 15th in the city." He did not have anywhere to go after that. He offered us beef and said he was going to bring some over later, and Xiaoling, who is direct in a way I have always admired, said, "Classmate Ye, please tell the others we'll eat something here first and come over after. Thank you. I'll buy you a drink later." He left. The 4 girls and I ate a 13 gin rabbit and a pot of pancakes stuck round the inside of the iron pot, and I sat with my back against the box and listened to them argue about whether Chen Chuchu was allowed to have another piece, which she was, and about whose fault it was that there was no salt, which was mine. At one point, a small girl came over and asked her mother, loudly, why they were eating roast meat, and her family only got sandwiches. Her mother had absolutely no answer for that, and Shen Yue, without a beat, said, in a completely serious voice, "Our family originally had 2 children. But then we sold one and exchanged it for a pot of meat." The child stared at her in horror for 4 full seconds, then took her mother's hand and ran. Chen Chuchu ate more than anybody except Chen Meiling and was too embarrassed to look at me afterward. That was Qingming. That was the good day. Everything after that is the bill. Zhang Qi. I have been putting this off, and I am going to do it now, and I am going to be honest about my own part in it, which is worse than it sounds. Zhang Qi was the sports representative of Class 8. Boarder, from a village, one of the poorest boys in the year, and not a nice person. He borrowed and did not repay. He used Sunlay's toothpaste every day for a term and never once bought his own. He took Liu Jian's power bank and did not give it back. He ate breakfasts out of a bin. That last one deserves its context. Qi Tianheng had been sending Luo Hua breakfast for a week to build an image, and Luo Hua threw every single one away unopened, and Zhang Qi took them out of the bin and ate them. Then, and this is the part that finished him, he texted Qi Tianheng from his own phone pretending to be Luo Hua and ordered more. When Qi Tianheng found out, he came to the dormitory and they fought, and Zhang Qi, who had no technique but a great deal of country strength, won. That is the beginning of everything that happened to Zhang Qi, and it is entirely his own fault. What happened afterward was not, because Zhang Qi had discovered through those breakfasts what money tastes like. He had been eating cafeteria food for 2 years to save 11 yuan a day, and then he ate a hot breakfast every morning for a week for free, and something in him came loose. He went looking for money online. He found order brushing. It is a scam that has been running in one form or another for a decade, and it works because the first 3 rounds are real. You send 100, you get 110 back. You send 50, you get 55. You send 20, you get 22. And then you ask yourself, unprompted, whether there are any bigger ones. Zhang Qi borrowed 40 yuan from Liu Jian, who had been saving it for a pair of 19 yuan earphones, and 400 from Yang Guang, our class monitor, who gave it to him without asking a single question because Yang Guang was that kind of person. He put 500 in. He was deleted and removed from the group inside 3 minutes. I knew. I had my divine sense out in that classroom the way I always did, and I read the whole chat over his shoulder from 4 meters away, and I watched him do it, and I did nothing, because Zhang Qi was a person I did not like, and because I told myself that a man who will not be told cannot be saved. That is true. It is also an excuse, and I knew it was an excuse at the time, and I made it anyway. The rest of that term, Zhang Qi was trying to get 500 yuan. He volunteered to be the flag bearer on the spring outing so he would look virtuous when the poverty subsidy decisions came round. He put up with Feng Kai calling him stupid in front of 54 people and did not answer back because a disciplinary note would have cost him the subsidy. Girls in the class asked him, as a joke, whether he had paid the class monitor back, and he had to stand there and take it. And then Xiaobing came to him with a business plan. Xiaobing was the enormous boy from class 9, 1 meter 90, who kept a hamster in his dormitory and who had been in love with Chen Na since September, in the most unsuccessful campaign I have ever witnessed. He had once tried to invite her to dinner, and when she coyly said she had no money, he told her to borrow some from a classmate. His business plan was routers. Lin Haren's router had been discovered in April. Kai Guang found it behind the multimedia computer while copying a file, and stood up in front of the class and asked whose it was, and Zhang Daming immediately walked to the front of the room and claimed it. That is the single best improvisation I saw in 3 years. He said, without a note, "Yes, it's mine. I put it in yesterday. I originally intended to open it to everyone, but the line was unstable and disconnecting. So Brother Lin and I spent a day testing it. Went in on the default admin password, adjusted the IP and the speed limits, and I was going to replace the cable with Cat5e before I opened it up." In 2014, in a classroom in Yuzhou, that sentence had the effect of a papal decree. Nobody knew what any of it meant. It sounded like a man who knew what he was doing. Then he wrote the password on the blackboard in chalk. Kai Peng said, "Zhang Daming, you're really a good person. We misunderstood you." And Zhang Daming said, "Class 8 is my home and my classmates are my family, and I have never seen a boy get away with so much so completely." Xiaobing heard about it and did the arithmetic. His plan was to put routers in every classroom and charge 3 yuan a week for the password. 12 classes in the first year. He calculated it out loud for about half a minute and produced the figure 1,800 yuan a week, and then said with awe, "That's more than my dad earns." He took it to Fanbo first because Fanbo was the businessman. Fanbo looked at him like he was an idiot and said, "You're truly a big genius." And then, more gently, "Some money can be earned and some money cannot." That is a 15-year-old boy selling face wash out of a bag, turning down 1,800 yuan a week on principle, and I wanted in the record. So Xiaobing went to Zhang Qi instead, and Zhang Qi, who needed 500 yuan, said yes. He spent 2 days trying to borrow the capital. He asked the entire back row and got nothing, because by then, nobody in class 8 would lend Zhang Qi a pencil. He asked me. I said my online banking had been borrowed, which was true, because Lin Haoran had taken 600 off me that morning to try and win a phone lottery, and which was also convenient. The only person who gave him anything was Kai Peng. Kai Peng took him outside and listened to the whole plan without interrupting, and told him that daring to start a business already put him ahead of 99% of students, and that today is cruel, tomorrow is cruel, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful, and that many people die on the night of tomorrow. Then he reached into a worn school uniform and pulled out a crumpled 10 yuan note. "Take it. I won't eat breakfast tomorrow." Zhang Qi was so moved he could barely speak. Kai Peng, incidentally, was the boy who had been stealing Feng Kai's Red Bull out of the staff office. First half a case, then the case. He could also price a watch across a classroom to within 1100 yuan, and he had, at some point in primary school, made an electronic watch vanish while it was being passed around a room. He gave Jiangqi 10 real yuan, and it was the only money anybody gave him that term. Then Director Yan caught him. Jiangqi was at his desk in the last week of April, trying to crack a wireless password with software he had got off the back row, and somebody tapped him on the head. He did not look up. He had been poked, chased, and hassled about money for 3 weeks, and he was at the end of it, and he roared, at the top of his voice, into a completely silent classroom. "Damn it, try touching your dad again." Then he turned round. Director Yan was the head of the entire first year. He was known school-wide as the King of Hell. He had led raids on internet cafes off campus. In 4 years, nobody had seen him smile. Director Yan, do you know who I am? You're Director Yan." The slap went off like a firework. "I," said Director Yan, "am the King of Hell." There was a pause. "Do you know who I am?" And Jiangqi, who had just been hit very hard and whose brain was not operating, answered honestly, "You're the King of Hell." The second slap was louder than the first. "Good," said Director Yan. "You dare to say that to my face. You're really something. Come with me to the office." Class 8 did not laugh until they were out of the corridor. Kai Guang had to put his head on the desk. His phone was confiscated. His subsidy was not, which was the one break he got. And in the middle of May, Qi Tianheng finished with him. "This is the thing I got wrong, so I am telling it properly. Qi Tianheng could not touch me. He had worked that out on the concrete outside his dormitory in March, and he had never forgotten it, and he had 4 followers and a reputation, and a 15-year-old's understanding of how humiliation works, which is that it has to be discharged somewhere. For 2 months he was extremely patient. He waited for Xiaobing and Jiangqi to stop being close, and he waited until exam season when everybody was distracted, and he had Ding Ming find 4 boys from outside the school, none of them students, all of them for hire, at a rate I later learned was 300 yuan each. They took Jiangqi on a Friday evening about 800 meters from the school gate, on the road that runs behind the vegetable market, where there was no camera and no light. He was in hospital for 9 days, 2 broken bones in his right hand, a cracked rib, concussion, nothing that would not heal. His right hand was the one he wrote with, and the final exams were in 3 weeks. And because he was in an off-campus fight, the school had to open a file, and because there was a file, the Poverty Subsidy Committee suspended his application pending investigation, and by the time it was resolved, the money had been allocated for the year. He did not get it. He did not repay the class monitor. He wrote his final exams left-handed with his right arm in a cast, and he scored badly enough that he was streamed into the worst class in the second year, and I saw him twice more in 3 years and then not at all. Here is my part. I had a divine sense that covered 400 meters, and I could have covered 800 if I had bothered. I knew Qi Tianheng was moving on something. I had felt the shape of his attention 4 separate times in May, and I had checked each time, and each time it was not pointed at me, or at Luo Hua, or at Chen Meiling, and each time I withdrew. Because it was pointed at Jiangqi, and Jiangqi was not mine. That was my exact reasoning. I had a rule that said I do not touch anybody who has not touched mine, and I applied its inverse without ever noticing that I had done so, and the inverse of that rule is, I do not protect anybody who is not mine. Jiangqi was a boy from a village with 100 yuan a week who ate breakfast out of a bin and could not stop trying to get rich. I could have prevented all of it on any of 11 days by paying attention for 4 minutes. I did not, because I did not like him. I have never told anybody that. Not Yang Li, not Feng Jia, not her. I found out on the Saturday morning. I went to the hospital and stood in a corridor and looked at a boy asleep with a cast on, and then I went outside and sat on a low wall for about half an hour, and then I got to work. First, the 4 men. That took a day. They were not professionals. They were 4 unemployed men in their 20s from a village on the eastern edge, and they had been paid 300 each, and they had spent it. I did not touch any of them. Second, the money. Jiangqi's hospital costs came to 4,100 yuan, and his family did not have it. The bill was settled by a hardship fund at the packing plant where his mother worked seasonally, which was established that week by Changqing Liquid Company, with 100,000 yuan in it, and which paid out to 11 families that year, and still exists. Nobody has ever known where the money came from. His mother believes it was the plant. I would like to keep it that way. Third, Qi Tianheng. Number 4. Middle school had, that spring, decided that in honor of its 60th anniversary, the entire first and second year would learn Tai Chi and would assemble in front of the teaching building every afternoon after class for 15 minutes to practice it. 600 students, every day, in rows. I picked the last Thursday in May. At 4:15, with the first year assembled in 12 blocks and 11 teachers standing along the front, 4 men walked in through the front gate of number 4 middle school. They were not dangerous. Nothing happened. 4 men in ordinary clothes walked up the main campus road past 600 students doing the opening form of the 24 form, and they stopped in front of the class 2 block, and one of them said at a good volume, "Qi Tianheng?" 600 heads turned, and the man took an envelope out of his jacket and held it out and said, in front of the entire first year of number 4 middle school, "We're giving it back, 1200, take it. We're not doing that kind of thing anymore." And he put the envelope into Qi Tianheng's hands, and the 4 of them turned around and walked back down the main campus road and out of the gate. That is all. Nothing else happened. No teacher intervened, because no teacher could work out what had occurred. There was no accusation and no name and nothing anybody could act on. 600 people watched a boy stand in a Tai Chi formation holding an envelope with 1200 yuan in it, and every single person in that yard understood exactly what it was, and not one of them could have explained how they knew. It was around the school in about 90 minutes. Qi Tianheng's 4 followers were gone by the following Monday, not dramatically. They simply stopped being there. Ding Ming was the last, and he lasted 11 days. The watch stopped appearing. Nobody said anything to him. That is the thing about a school. Nobody said one word to Qi Tianheng about it, ever, and that was the whole punishment. I found him 3 weeks later in the bicycle shed and said one thing, which is the only sentence I ever said to him that I have thought about since. "It's finished. Don't do it again, and nothing else will happen to you." He looked at me and said, "Was that you?" I did not answer. "My father wants to move me to Incity," he said, "for the 2nd year. That's a good school." He went. He is, I am told, in insurance and has a family, and has never once, in 11 years, come back to Yuzhou. I have wondered occasionally whether 4 men and an envelope was justice for a boy's right hand and a lost subsidy and 3 years in the bottom class. It was not. It was theater. It cost me 1200 yuan and a phone call, and it cost Qi Tianheng the only thing he had, and it did not put one single thing back. The thing that would have helped Zhang Qi was me paying attention in May. Lin Haran took us all out for barbecue on a Thursday in May, and it is the last funny thing in this story, so I am going to take my time with it. He was paying because he had sold a game account. That deserves explaining, because it is genuinely the most impressive thing he did that year, and nobody in that classroom understood it. Lin Haoran found a small mobile game with about 4,000 active players and a very engaged forum, and he pushed an account to the top of the server ladder over 9 days, and then he sold it, on that forum, to a woman who buys high-rank accounts for 888 yuan. A boy who came last in a school of 2,000 identified an inefficient market, produced the scarce good, and cleared it at a premium in 9 days at 15. He did not tell anybody that either. He said, "I did some boosting," and left it there, and everybody assumed he had been carrying strangers up the ladder for 40 yuan a time. So, Linji barbecue, 9:30 at night, 6 of us plus me and Chen Meiling at our own table by the door. The owner was a large woman with a face like a closed fist who had been running that grill for 11 years and who had, at various points, dealt with debtors, drunks, and a man with a cleaver. Her daughter was a first year at number 4 called Liu Jing, 1 m 70, cold face, who came in after evening self-study, changed into a durable uniform, and worked until 11 every single night. I knew her, sort of, from the other life. In the other life, I came back to Yuzhou for an internship at 23 and ate at that stall 2 or 3 times a month, and the owner tried to matchmake us once, and nothing came of it, and there is no story there at all. There is just a girl who carried trays for 11 years, and a boy who ate cheap lamb skewers, and neither of them had anything to say. She put our tray down and said, "Table 6, your food." Chen Meiling said thank you. Liu Jing walked away, and her hair moved, and Chen Meiling watched me watch it and said immediately, "Does long hair look good? Eat your barbecue." There were 2 other tables that mattered. One had 4 men in their 30s who were 3 beers past useful and who were discussing, at volume, an investment of several hundred million yuan and a grandfather who built bombs by hand. The other had 6 teenagers, boys with dyed hair, girls in short skirts in April, one with a large tattoo on her neck, all of them working extremely hard at being 20. The tattooed one was Huang Hua. The one in the middle was Song Yan. Chen Meiling went very still when she saw her. I felt it happen. Her hand stopped and her heart rate went up and her eyes went down to the table, and she started arranging her skewers. Song Yan had been in her class in junior high. Song Yan was a girl who had made friends with older boys and boys with motorcycles from outside the school, and who had built out of that a small local power, and who had used it for 3 years the way that kind of person always uses it. She had used it specifically on Chen Meiling. Every exam for 3 years, Song Yan came to her and asked for the answers. She did not threaten. She did not have to. She would come and stand at the desk and be friendly, and a girl from a village with a widowed mother and no connections in the city would risk being caught cheating by a teacher for somebody else's benefit, because the alternative was a girl in her year who knew people. Chen Meiling did it, every time, for 3 years. And then in the high school entrance exam they were assigned different rooms, and Song Yan could not copy. and Song Yan scored under 380 and went to a vocational school, and Chen Meiling handed in a blank maths paper on purpose and got into number 4 anyway. Song Yan had never once worked out that the girl she used for 3 years was 41 points better than every child in Yuzhou. I watched Chen Meiling sit at that table and shrink about 2 centimeters, and then I watched her look at me, and then I watched her stop shrinking. She has told me since exactly what went through her head, and it was this. Everything changed from the day Li Wei rented the room. She picked up a skewer and started eating again. Song Yan came over about 4 minutes later. She had spotted us, and she came over the way that kind of person comes over, which is with the chair already in her hand. Chen Meiling. Song Yan, said Chen Meiling. Good evening. That was a declaration of war, and both of them knew it, because for 3 years it had been Sister Yan. Song Yan's face did a thing, then she looked at me, and the thing stopped. Your boyfriend? Neighbor, I said. He's quite handsome. Give me his contact details. And she sat down. She had been in the chair for approximately 1 second when Huang Hua arrived at a run and physically hauled her out of it. Huang Hua had been in class 9 since September. Huang Hua had watched me put 8 people on the floor of a classroom in 9 seconds in November. Huang Hua had not come to our corridor since. Don't provoke him, she said, dragging. He's not to be messed with. Why did you pull me? Just don't. Who is he? Where does he hang out? He doesn't hang out. Song Yan laughed and said, I thought he was somebody. In the end, just a lone wolf. I've seen plenty of those. And then she turned around and screamed at the next table to shut up. It happened extremely fast after that. The man in the ripped jeans said something about how she was dressed. She told him to keep his mouth clean, or she would take his eyes out. He called her a word and said he would deal with her right now, and she went at him with the full arsenal of a girl who has been fighting since primary school, and she was, objectively, extremely good at it, and after about a minute he had nothing left. So he slapped her across the face. She grabbed a beer bottle off the table and hit him on the head with it, and the bottle did not break because a 15-year-old girl does not have that in her arms, and he took it off her and hit her again, and she screamed, "Get him!" And 6 teenagers went into 4 drunk men, and the barbecue stall came apart, tables over, skewers on the ground. Somebody's drink across 3 meters of concrete, the owner watching 11 years of margin get kicked around a car park. Gao Yong half stood up because Gao Yong has an actual sense of justice and said, Brother Lin, should we go? Lin Haran looked at the fight and then at the table and tapped the plate of skewers. What are you standing around for? Hurry up and eat! A red-haired boy came out of the scrum backward and looked for a weapon, and the nearest table with anything on it was mine. He reached for the cola. Don't touch it, I said. He had drink in him, and he had rage in him, and he had absolutely no information, and he said, damn you, I'm giving you FA. He did not finish it. I did not stand up. I kicked him from a seated position in the chest with about 4% of what I had, and he left the ground and went backward over an entire dining table and landed in the middle of the fight. Everybody stopped. I picked up my cup and had a mouthful of cola. He kicked someone flying, said Zhang Daming at a whisper. He kicked someone flying again. The red-haired boy got up off the concrete with his ribs screaming and shouted, I just took a bottle of cola. Did you have to do that? I haven't even made a move yet, I said, and you flew out. Is that my fault? And then, because they were 7 and I was 1 and because none of them could count, they came at me. I hooked a plastic stool with my foot and put it under them. That is all I did. The stool went about 2 meters at knee height into the path of 6 running people, and the first one caught it and went down sideways, and the stool changed direction with him, and the second one caught that, and the rest of them went over like a shelf of books. A person falling on concrete at a run does real damage to themselves, and adults are not children, and they did not get up. Zhang Daming, who had already stood up and put a fist to his mouth to start commentating, said, in genuine professional distress, How am I supposed to commentate on this? Gao Yong, that's too absurd. I got up and looked down at the one in the ripped jeans, who was the one who had slapped Song Yan. From now on, I said, fight to the death as much as you like, but remember, don't touch people who aren't in it. He started on a sentence. I emptied half a cup of cola into his face, and Chen Meiling said sharply, Li Wei, don't waste the cola. She had paid for that cola. She was paying for the whole meal, 72 yuan, which the owner rounded down to 70, and it was, at that point, a substantial fraction of her personal wealth. All right, I said, and kicked him instead. Then it got stupid, because the red-haired boy lay back down on the concrete and started wailing, and the others followed one by one until there were 6 people on the ground of a barbecue stall howling in unison. You're finished. My brother's leg is broken. 100,000 yuan or you're not leaving. Only 100,000, I said. You're really cheap. He got up on one elbow, outraged. Not 100,000 total. 100,000 each. Then he clutched his chest and lay back down. You kicked my heart. I've had a heart attack. 200,000. Zhang Daming, appalled, shouted, Do you think this is a vegetable market? Asking exorbitant prices. They kept wailing. 2 of them worked themselves up to real tears, which I think were genuine by the end, because if you cry hard enough, you eventually find something to cry about. Jiang Daming watched this for about 30 seconds, and then said thoughtfully, "Stop crying. If you keep crying, I'll film it and put it on Kwai Show. Let the old buddies comment." Absolute silence. Every single one of them had an account with a few hundred followers on which they posed and said social sayings. Sirens started somewhere north. The red-haired boy heard them and started laughing and could not stop. "You're finished. You're finished." Because he had done this before. He told me so at length from the floor. He had fought a high school student once, and they had both been taken in, and he had not cared, and the student had cared very much because a student cannot afford a file, and the student's family had paid him 500 yuan to make it go away. That was the whole business model. Lie down, cry, wait for the uniform, and get paid by somebody with something to lose. Gao Yang went pale. "Brother Lin, Li Wei won't really be in trouble, will he?" "It's not that easy," said Lin Haran. Sun Lei said, "Trust him." 3 silver vans came down that road about 11 seconds later. They were not police. They braked in front of the stall in formation, and the side doors went back at the same time, and about 14 men came out of them, and they were large, and they were in black uniform with radios on their belts and black gloves and short batons, and they moved like a unit because they trained every morning at 6 on a mountain. Changqing Liquid Company security. 200 of them at that point, on 7,000 a month after tax with insurance and housing fund and accommodation, guarding a herb plantation, and drilling daily because the head of that department was a retired man from Bengbu who had views about standards. The senior one got out and looked at 6 people lying on the ground of a barbecue stall and shouted at parade volume, "You dared to steal melons? Take them all away." Nobody said anything. Nobody had anything to say. Bags over heads, 2 men per body, into the vans. It took less than a minute. The doors went, the engines went, and they were gone up the road before the sirens got there. There was a very long silence in that car park. "What's going on?" said Jiang Daming. "I don't know," said Gao Yang. Huang Hua, who had been standing 11 meters away with her hands over her mouth, turned around slowly and looked at me and asked, "Li Wei, do you know them?" The whole stall waited. "No," I said, "I don't know them." That was true, in a technical sense, and everybody in that car park accepted it instantly because the alternative was insane. 14 trained men in identical uniform with radios arriving in 3 vans is not something a 16-year-old at number 4 middle school arranges. It is something that happens near you. Song Yan grabbed Huang Hua and said, "Did you see that? Did you see it?" "I saw it." "Bars," said Song Yan with total conviction. "Clubs, hotels, karaoke, it has to be." "Do the bars in this city have people like that?" "Who cares?" said Song Yan. "They're just very powerful." The police arrived, took a statement from Sister Wang, who told them the plain truth, which was that some drunks had fought some students and then some men had taken the drunks away and left. Yang Li texted me at 11. "The matter has been resolved." Then, a minute later, "From now on, come to me for things like this." She did not say the other part, which was that she had, that week, permanently assigned 2 security teams to be within 11 minutes of my address at all times, which she did not tell me about for 2 years, and which I only found out about by accident. What she did next that night is the only glimpse I ever got of her actual life. She went to her parents' flat instead of her own, because it was late and because the rice would be warm. Her mother had kept it warm. She sat at the table and ate slowly while her mother sat on a wooden chair and watched her eat, and then started. "Oh, isn't this my big boss? Always so busy." Yang Li drank her porridge and said nothing. "So busy you don't even have time to find a partner. You're almost 30 by lunar reckoning." "That's lunar. I'm 27. Don't age your own daughter." Her father in the next room silently turned the television up. Her mother started listing other people's daughters and their children, and Yang Li put her spoon down and said, "You think I'm the Monkey King? I can conjure you a partner?" Her mother said, "Others can find someone. Why can't you?" Her father turned the television up again. "I'll turn that off right now," her mother shouted, without breaking stride, and her father silently turned it down. It went on for 11 minutes. Yang Li, who had that day directed a purchasing operation across 4 provinces and dispatched 14 men in 3 vans and turned over more money in a month than her entire street would see in a decade, sat at her mother's table and lost. She ended it the only way available, which was, "If you say one more word, I'm not giving you the face cream." Her mother stopped talking instantly. I had given Yang Li a beauty cream refined out of spirit lotus seed. She had confirmed it worked, and then she had asked me whether she could give some to her mother. She was, at the time, saving up her requests to ask me for something for her father's blood pressure. "Only a person who has been out in the cold world understands," she told me once, "that the only people who actually care about you are your parents." She said that in a meeting room in 2016. Then she said, "Add 90 million to the Anhui line," and never mentioned it again. The Xiaoli thing finished that night too, and I am going to give it to you in full because Liu Jian deserves a complete account. After Manman, Liu Jian announced that his Dao heart was repaired and that his mindset had become extremely stable. Then he met Xiaoli. Her opening messages, which he showed the entire back row several times, were, "Hello, my name is Xiaoli. I've been selling tea with my grandpa since I was little. Brother, will you look down on me?" Her profile photograph was a girl with delicate features and a pure demeanor. Liu Jian fell so hard that his personality changed. He stopped playing games. He started talking about dreams and music and philosophy. He announced that he no longer watched films at Hefan's house because he would feel unclean and his soul would be dirty and he would be unworthy of Xiaoli. He bought 100 yuan of tea from her grandfather without asking the price. When Lin Haran asked how much tea 100 yuan bought, Liu Jian did not know because he had asked how much to send and been told 100 and had sent 100. Tea or no tea, it doesn't matter, he told the table. Mainly I enjoy the happiness of helping others. She's going to be my wife anyway. A man can't be too calculating. She said she'll come to Yuzhou to find me in the summer holiday, he told us at the barbecue. But I told her no. I said, you stand still, Dand. I will cross 1,000 mountains and rivers to come to you. At 11 at night, at a rice wine stall where Gao Yong had insisted on paying for a second round, Liu Jian's phone went off with a special notification sound that he had deliberately left unmuted so that we would all hear it. He replied, then his face changed. Brothers, after getting a partner, I've realized how poor I am. Xiaoli had told him she was still selling tea, that she got a lot of unreasonable customers, that she had sold too little today and had 80 yuan of stock left and could not sleep until it was gone. I want to spend 80 yuan and buy it, said Liu Jian, so she can rest early. Lin Horan said, you can buy all of it today. What about tomorrow? Life is long. I only seize the day. What about the day after? I have already tasted the bitterness of life, said Liu Jian, and I don't want Xiaoli to experience it. Lin Haoren looked at him for about 4 seconds and then gave Zhang Daming a look, and I sat 2 tables away with a divine sense that covers 400 meters and watched 2 15-year-old boys build a trap in real time without exchanging a single word. Zhang Daming started it. A few days ago, somebody added me on QQ saying they were my junior high classmate and asking to borrow money. Gao Yong bit immediately. Someone specially adding you to borrow money? That's outrageous. Only 50, but even 50, I can't just lend it out. Lin Haoren, on Q. How did you check? I asked for a photo, he wouldn't send one, so I thought of a method. And then Zhang Daming explained, in a completely level voice, that there are people online now who write web scripts, and that if you send someone a link and they click it, it takes a photograph with their front camera and uploads it. I sent it to him. He clicked it. It wasn't my classmate at all. Someone was impersonating him. Lucky I checked. He said all of it perfectly. He even did the small self-satisfied sigh of a man who narrowly avoided losing 50 yuan. Gao Yong, who was not part of the conspiracy and who was therefore the most useful member of it, sat straight up and said, "That's right, Brother Jian. Do you want to use that thing to see what your girlfriend actually looks like?" Liu Jian was outraged. "Do you think Xiaoli is a liar? I've seen her photos. She would never lie to me. She's a child from the mountains. She lives with her grandparents." No, I mean this for your own good. Don't you want to see her without a filter?" "Impossible. I'm not that kind of person." Zhang Daming said mildly, "I've heard a girl's real face and her filtered face are completely different. I believe in Xiaoli." And then Lin Haoren put the knife in. "I know that site," he said. "It's being shut down soon for violations. Da Ming, when does it go?" "Midnight tonight," said Zhang Daming. "What a shame." Gao Yong panicked on Liu Jian's behalf. "Brother Jian, there's less than an hour. This is your last chance." And I watched a boy's whole face come apart. He fought it for about 90 seconds. That is the part nobody tells properly. He genuinely fought it, and he lost, and he said, "Da Ming, send me the link." They tested it on him first. It photographed Liu Jian, and everybody confirmed it worked, and Sun Lei said he wanted a copy. Liu Jian sat with the phone in both hands. "Are you going to use it?" said Zhang Daming. "Really use it?" "It's up to you," said Lin Haoran without looking up. "Daming says it closes soon." "It's fine if you don't." "Go on," said Zhang Daming. "If it takes a photo, it shouldn't. We won't look." So he messaged her. "Xiaoli, what are you doing? I'm selling tea. It's so hard to sell. I'm so sleepy. I really want to sleep." And Liu Jin thought, "I'm going to buy all your tea in a minute. Don't worry." And typed, "I found a fun website." He pasted the link. He hesitated for half a second. He sent it. And then he was immediately consumed with guilt. And he said out loud at a rice wine stall at 11 at night, "Brothers, was what I did wrong? Xiaoli is so pure. She trusts me. And I've done such a despicable thing. I'm a villain. I'm a rat in the dark. I'm unworthy of her." "You already did it," said Zhang Daming. "Quick," said Gao Yang. "Look at the photo." Liu Jian looked at the photo. His body went completely rigid. He did not move for about 4 seconds. Then something went out of him all at once, and he sat there like a piece of furniture, with no expression at all. "Brother Jian," said Gao Yong, waving a hand. "Brother Jian, move." The phone hit the table. 4 heads went over it, and in the bad light of a rice wine stall they all saw the same thing, which was the face of a man in his 30s with about 4 days of beard on it. Gao Yong pointed at the screen and said, at a volume that turned the entire street, "Brother Jian, you're in an online relationship with a man." He sent 100 messages that night. I counted, because I was 400 meters away and could not stop myself. 100 messages, most of which were some version of "I don't believe it," and then he was blocked and deleted. He did not go back to the dormitory. He sat on the school sports field from about midnight until 6 in the morning, and Sun Lei went and sat with him until 2, and Gao Yong stayed until 4, and after that it was just Liu Jian and 3 stray dogs that had been living on that field since March. He went to bed at 6 and slept through morning self-study, and Sun Lei and Gao Yong covered for him with the class monitor, which Yang Guang did without asking a single question, again, because that is who he was. The next day, Liu Jian sat in the back row and did not speak for 4 hours. Zhang Daming reported quietly to Lin Haran, "Brother Jian hasn't spoken for a long time." Gao Yong, "He hasn't spoken since last night. He hasn't eaten either." And Liu Jian sat there and thought, and I know exactly what he thought because he told the entire table 3 weeks later when it had become funny. He thought that his body was alive but his heart was dead, that he was not a person, he was a walking corpse, that the world had lost its meaning, that his pursuit of a perfected Tao heart had been a joke, and that he was now like the water dispenser at the front of the classroom, standing still, except that the water dispenser had a pair. "I'm just an extra existence," said Liu Jian. He was fine in 11 days. He is now married, with a daughter, and he runs a logistics depot outside Hefei with 40 vehicles, and he has told the Xiaoli story at every gathering of that back row for 11 years, and he tells it better every time, and last year he added a part where the man had a mustache, which he did not. He asked me once, at a table, half drunk, whether it had been a setup. I said no. He said, "Brother Lin set it up, didn't he?" I said, "I don't know." Liu Jian looked at me for a moment and then said, "You're the worst liar I know," and poured me another one. And that was that. Now, everything from here is the reason for everything before it, and it takes place mostly above 3,000 meters and mostly alone. Cloud marrow grass is the base. The finished thing is called Tai Yi Cloud Marrow, and it is not a pill, and it is not a tonic. It is a marrow scouring decoction, and in the immortal realm, it is what you give to a body that is producing the wrong thing. That is what leukemia is. That is exactly and precisely what leukemia is, a marrow producing the wrong thing. I want to be extremely clear about something because it is important and because I have spent 11 years being careful about it. I did not cure cancer. Nobody cures cancer. What I had was a preparation from a world with different physics, which requires a plant that cannot grow here, grown in an artificial pocket of a resource this world does not have, produced at a rate of about 40 milliliters a year, and which does one specific thing to one specific tissue in one specific person who has been prepared for it over 26 months. It is not medicine. It is not scalable. It is not a technology. It has never left that mountain, and it never will. It was a thing I made for one girl. The grass needed 26 months. 29th of March 2014 to the end of May 2016, and I counted them the way other people count down to a wedding. It needed one more thing, and the one more thing was the reason I spent the summer of 2015 on mountains. The catalyst is called cloud marrow, and it is not related to the grass despite the name. It is a mineral deposit. Specifically, it is a form of calcite that forms only in high alpine karst, in permanent shadow, above about 3,000 meters, in the presence of continuously moving water, over a period that I estimate at between 4 and 11,000 years. There are perhaps 11 sites in this country where it could exist. I found it on the 4th. It took 41 days. I did the first 3 in the summer holiday of 2015 with a story about a study camp, and the 4th in October with a story about a school trip, and both stories were manufactured by Yang Li, who by that point had an assistant whose entire job was manufacturing stories. Site 4 is on the eastern slope of a mountain in western Sichuan, and I am not going to be more specific than that. I went up on the spirit boat at night above the cloud at about 4,200 meters, and I came down onto a snowfield in the dark with a lamp on my head like an idiot because a spirit boat gets you there, and after that you are a man on a mountain. The seam was in a cave mouth under an overhang at 3,140 meters in permanent shadow with meltwater coming through it. It looked like nothing. It looked like wet gray rock. I sat down in front of it at about 2 in the morning, and I did not touch it for a long time. I want to describe what that was because it is the closest I have ever come to praying. I had been working for 2 years and 11 months, 211 nights of lightning, 37 materials, a mountain, a formation over a whole valley, a company with 1,100 employees whose entire purpose, unknown to every one of them, was to buy cinnabar, a woman from a pawn shop who had rebuilt her whole life around a boy she did not understand, and a girl who was, at that point, 1 meter 56. All of it came down to a wet gray seam in a cave in the dark. If it was not there, there was no second plan. I cut it out with a divine sense blade, which took 4 hours, because you cannot rush that, or you shatter the crystal structure, and at about 6 in the morning the sun came up under the cloud layer, which is a thing that happens above 3,000 meters, and which I had seen maybe 11 times in 300 years, and never once from this world. I sat on a rock with about 900 grams of wet gray stone in a box on my knees and watched the sun come up sideways. And I laughed, out loud, alone, on a mountain in Sichuan, until I had to stop because of the altitude. 900 grams, I needed 11. I got the rest from that same seam over 3 more trips, and I have never told anybody where it is, and I have never gone back. I brought her the finished thing in June 2016. She was 17. She was 1 meter 58.5, which she measured on a coin machine in Lanma with 2 tissues under her feet, in socks at attention, because she has never once done it any other way. She had grown 2 centimeters in 8 months, which is the slowing that comes at the end, which is what the whole thing had been racing. She was in her second year, in the science stream, still first in the city, still the shortest person in her class, and she had discovered that she liked physics more than mathematics and would not admit it because she had spent 2 years saying the opposite. I made her drink it on a Tuesday. It looked like nothing. It was about 40 milliliters of a slightly cloudy liquid in a small green jade bottle, and it did not glow and it did not smell of anything. "What is it?" she said. "It's for your health." "That's what you said about the sweets." "The sweets were also for your health." She held the bottle up to the window and squinted at it. "Is it bitter?" "Yes." "How bitter?" "Extremely." Chen Meiling put the bottle down on the desk. "Then I don't want it." 2 years and 11 months on that liquid. A mountain. 4 trips to Sichuan. 41 days above 3,000 meters and a substantial fraction of a company, and a 17-year-old girl put it down on a desk because it was bitter. "There's candy afterwards," I said. "What kind?" "The white ones." She picked the bottle back up. She drank the whole thing in one go with her eyes shut and her nose held, and then she made a noise like a cat going into water, and then she took the candy, and then she said with her mouth full, "That was disgusting. What was in it?" "Grass." "You're a liar." She has never known. She does not know now. She does not know that in the world I came from, she was diagnosed in the October of her final year of high school, and that it went fast, and that she died at 17 in the municipal hospital 11 kilometers from the Dike Road, and that her mother sold the house. She does not know that she has been taking a supplement in her tea since 2015 that was preparing her marrow for that 40 milliliters. She does not know that I have taken a sample of her blood, without her knowing, every 4 months since she was 15, using a technique for which I have no defense whatsoever, except that I would do it again tomorrow. She got a nosebleed in the November of her final year of high school, and I was on a spirit boat over Anhui at the time, and I put it down in a field, and came the entire distance on foot in 11 minutes, because I did not trust myself to fly. It was a nosebleed. The air was dry. She thought I was insane. She turned 18, then 19, then 21, 24, 27. Her marrow is normal. It has been normal every single time. Her final height is 1 meter 61.5. She passed 1 meter 60 in the spring of her final year of high school, in March, at a coin machine at Lanma Shopping Center, with 2 tissues under her feet. I was standing next to her. The slip came out and she looked at it and made a small triumphant noise, and then she showed it to me and said, "Look, look, 160. I told you. I told you I would." I looked at the number that had killed her. "Congratulations," I said. "Are you crying?" "No." "You're crying. It's the air conditioning." Chen Meiling looked at me for a long time with a paper slip in her hand. Then she decided, in her enormous mercy, not to pursue it, and instead said, "Well, now I'm going to keep going. I'm going to be 170. She was not. She got another 1.5 centimeters and stopped, and complained about it for 4 years. She keeps the slips in a tin. All of them. There are 19. The first one is from the 2nd of March, 2014, and it says 152 centimeters, 71 jin, and it is soft at the folds from being handled. I have never told her that I know what is in that tin. That is the arc. That is the whole thing I came back 300 years to do, and it finished in a shopping mall on a Sunday with a coin machine and a paper slip, and a girl telling me it was the air conditioning. There is one more thing, and then I am done. In April of 2014, when I built the puppet that stands behind the bench in the spirit field, I carved it myself, out of 11 materials, over 9 days. I know every stroke on that mask. I designed the pattern. It is called Falling Cloud, and it is a sect pattern, and there are 7 lines in it, and I put in all 7. In August of 2016, I went up to the field to check the second sowing, and I looked at the mask, and there were 8. There is a rune on the left cheekbone of that mask, low down, about the size of a fingernail, in the shape of a feather. I did not carve it. Nobody has been inside that array. Nobody could be inside that array. I have spent 11 years looking at that rune. Here is what I know, and it is not very much. There is a place I have been calling the Source World, for lack of anything better. I found the way to it in 2015, by accident, while trying to do something else entirely, and the way to it is a small object about the length of my hand that I have called a Divine Origin Shuttle, because that is the closest translation of what is written on it in a script I have only seen twice. It is not a world in the way this one is a world. When I push divine sense into it, what comes back is a lot of very weak things, and one thing that is not weak, and structures, and something that looks like an experiment. Souls being moved between bodies. Dogs first, then monkeys, then, I am extremely sorry to say, people, repeatedly, methodically, by somebody, and a fragment of something suspended in the middle of it that is 5 colors at once, and which I have looked at exactly twice, because on both occasions afterward I could not use divine sense for 4 days. The whole civilization in there, converted to a scale I understand, is weaker than a Foundation establishment cultivator. It could not fight this world's air force. It is nothing. I have not been able to stop thinking about it for 11 years, for one reason. The first time I pushed divine sense into that place, in the autumn of 2015, standing in a spirit field on a mountain outside a small city in Anhui province with 2 yuan bamboo growing at the edge of it, something pushed back. Not defensively, not the way a formation resists. It was not a wall. It was the exact motion of a person who has felt a hand on their shoulder and turned around. And about 11 months later, there was a feather on my mask. I have not gone in. I have a mountain and a company and a woman from a pawn shop who owns 11,000 employees and a chemistry teacher who is now a deputy principal and who still sends me photographs of bad exam papers at 2 in the morning, and a girl from class 8 who runs the design division and who threw a stapler at me in 2019 and has never apologized. And I have a woman in her 20s who lives 11 kilometers away who is 1 meter 61 and a half, who calls me her driver, who has never in 11 years asked me a single question about the light in the sky in March 2014, and who sends me a message every year on the 2nd of March that says, in its entirety, I grew again, come and measure me. She has not grown again. She sends it anyway. 300 years I worked for a sect that called me a fool, and the total sum of what I got for it was a nickname and a betting pool and 10 bolts of lightning. And then I built a mountain, a formation, and a company doing 4 billion a year, and every single part of it exists so that one short, loud, unbelievably annoying girl could get past 1 meter 60. I would do it again. I would do it exactly the same way, including the parts I am ashamed of, but there is a feather on my mask that I did not carve, and somewhere on the other side of a shuttle the length of my hand, something turned around when I touched it, and it has had 11 years to think about me, and I do not know its name. It knows mine.